Hey everyone, thanks so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Chimera Luffy by Mellra. A single bite changes everything when Luffy eats the legendary Chimera fruit. Gaining the power to copy every Zoan and unleash a true mythical form, Luffy tears through destiny itself. Canon bends, legends fall, and the seas are forever altered as a monster with a smile begins his journey. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Chimera Luffy by Mellra. Respect to author.
Chapter 7. Alright, Luffy cheered as he held up a black tarp. Our pirate flag is done. The tarp was shown to have what appeared to be a Jolly Roger if said Jolly Roger was drawn left-handed by a right-handed 4-year-old. The rest of the Straw Hat Pirates stared at their captain incredulously. That is our symbol? Zoro asked warily. Calling our captain artistically challenged would be an understatement, Usopp commented while gawking at the poorly made flag. Maybe it's some kind of abstract art. Nami asked thoughtfully, though you can tell she didn't believe her own words. A pirate's flag should be a symbol of death, but this, well, I guess it is terrifying in a sense, Zoro deadpanned. So what do you guys think? Luffy asked while giving a smile that threatened to split his face in two. You're beyond terrible, Usopp groaned, leave the drawing to me. 5 minutes later both Zoro and Luffy were braining Usopp over the head for his design, which was a Jolly Roger with Usopp's nose sticking out and had slingshots instead of the usual crossbones. After the moment of silliness was over, Usopp made the finished project of the Straw Hat's flag, which showed a grinning Jolly Roger with a straw hat on top. Coming to a unanimous agreement, the crew quickly decorated their ship with the new flag and also painted the symbol on the sails before setting sail. The crew was busy relaxing after their little Martha Stewart moment before they heard the sound of cannon fire. Looking up warily, they noticed their captain by the ship's cannon and was aiming it at a random rock jutting out of the sea. What are you doing, Luffy? Zoro asked warily, seeing as his immature captain had somehow figured out how to operate firearms. I'm trying to get the cannon to work, cause it'd be a shame to not use it. I can't seem to get it to work right, though, Luffy sighed the last part as he stared off to the area he had been aiming to hit. Stand aside, my amateur friend, and watch how a pro does it. Usopp boasted as he strutted over to his captain. After making a few adjustments to the cannon, Usopp was able to hit the rock on the first shot. This greatly impressed Luffy and secretly Usopp as well, and he decided to make the liar the crew's honorary sniper. Usopp agreed, on the condition that he becomes captain in the event that Luffy would want to step down, to which the Chimera boy agreed to reluctantly. The next half hour involved Luffy trying to convince his crew that their next member should be the musician, to which they all flatly denied. Before the crew could further discuss the next crew member who should join, they all heard a large crash on the upper decks. Luffy ran on deck and was confronted by a man wearing Ray-Ban sunglasses with a tattoo on one cheek and was wielding a machete-like sword. Before he knew it, Luffy was jumping over the man's wild swing before the hat-wearing captain could even ask what the big idea was. Meanwhile, Zoro was asking Nami and Usopp to evaluate the situation while the swordsman got ready to help his captain if needed. The assailant started screaming out that he'd defeated dozens of lowlife pirates before, yet a no-named pirate like Luffy was able to kill his partner, much to the animal man's confusion. Luffy quickly jumped over the man's wild swing before grabbing him by the head and flipping him over his shoulders, causing the man's face to be acquainted with the wall. Zoro then decided to see the aftermath of the incredibly one-sided fight, but was shocked to find that the assailant was someone he knew. The man's name was Johnny, and he was a bounty hunter who did some work with Zoro from time to time along with his partner Yosaku. Zoro then asked the man, after he calmed down some both due to his beating and recognizing that there were friendlies on the ship, where Yosaku was, and then the man started blubbering like a 5-year-old on how his partner had apparently fallen ill. It had started a few days ago when the other bounty hunter's health took a rapid decline and they were resting on a small island to try and recover his strength before they were assaulted by cannon fire. Luffy and Usopp started freaking out at this little tidbit of information. Fortunately for the ailing bounty hunter, Nami quickly recognized his symptoms as signs of scurvy, and quickly had the two idiots, Luffy and Usopp, pour some lime juice down the man's throat while the navigator lectured everyone aboard on how they need to be better prepared while being out at sea, to which was largely ignored by the others who just thought she was some kind of miracle worker. The bounty hunter Yosaku was quickly able to recover, much to Nami's shock, and the duo went along to properly introduce themselves. Yosaku wore clothes slightly similar to his partner, however he had a shaved head with a metal-plated headband and lacked the tattoo and sunglasses. After introductions were out of the way, Yosaku had another bout of illness before he was sent to rest and recover. This little scare led the Straw Hats to decide that their next member needed to be a chef, in order to provide them with proper food and nutrition. Johnny came by during this discussion and recommended that they head to a restaurant on the seas that he'd heard about if they were looking for a chef. Zoro's attention was further piqued when Johnny mentioned that man was rumored to have been sighted there before. Soon, the crew was sailing off to see this acclaimed restaurant. Time skip. It had been a few days since the crew ran into Yosaku and Johnny, when suddenly Johnny announced that they had arrived. The Straw Hats looked in awe at the floating restaurant, which truly looked like a cross between a ship and a restaurant. The main body was shaped like a restaurant, yet it had masts and a fish-headed bow of a ship. On the front it read, Restaurant, Barati. Unfortunately for our heroes, a marine ship was anchored just off to the side of the Barati. Suddenly, a man came on deck at the marine vessel. The man was blonde and wore a striped suit and had, curiously enough, brass knuckles that seemed to be screwed onto his hand. Seriously, what is it with high-ranking marines and self-mutilation? Closing parenthesis. The man introduced himself as Lieutenant, Iron Fist, Full Body, and mentioned that he had never seen that pirate flag before, and then he demanded to speak with the captain. Luffy stepped forward and introduced himself before claiming that they just finished the flag the day before yesterday, to which Yosaku and Johnny seemed to find funny because there was no way such strong pirates were just a bunch of rookies, aren't they, in for a surprise. Full Body then turned to the two bounty hunters and idly commented on how he'd seen the two at collection offices before and how the two seemed to be finally caught by pirates. The duo, not liking being looked down on like that, got ready to attack the preppy jerk. After what could only be considered a joke of a match, Tweedledum and Tweedledummer found themselves flat on their backs with their faces a bloody pulp. The Marine lieutenant then stated that the pirates were lucky he was on a break today to eat at the restaurant, but the next time they meet they should consider their lives forfeit. Nami was momentarily distracted by a wanted poster that fell out of Johnny's pocket, when Usopp cried frantically that the marine ship was aiming their cannons at them. Luffy jumped in the way of the incoming projectile and cried out, "Leave everything to me," before shifting to his monkey form and caught the ball bare-handed, much to Yosaku, Johnny, and Usopp's shock. The animal man then used his momentum to swing the cannonball back in the Marine's general direction with a cry of, "Monkey hammer throw." Unfortunately, Luffy overthrew the shot and ended up blowing up a portion of the Barati's roof instead. "Who are you aiming at, idiot?" Zoro shouted at his now human captain, who was in shock at how epically he failed at his counterattack. Time skip. Luffy was dragged into the head chef's office by two surly-looking cooks and his reaction was instantaneous when he saw the man, who had apparently been wounded during the attack. The chef, whose name was Zeph, was a sour-looking man who had a braided mustache and a goatee, and had on an incredibly tall hat on his head and. "Wah, I blew off your leg. I'm so sorry," Luffy screamed as he saw the man's peg leg, which had quite obviously been there for a while. After being told that the leg had been lost long ago, Luffy quickly relaxed a bit. This changed with what the head chef said next. 1 year, Luffy blurted out after finding out the amount of time it would take for him to pay off the damages done to the restaurant, seeing as he had no money to speak of. The pirate captain tried to haggle with the surly chef, which just earned him a drop kick to the face. Luffy still proceeded to try lowering the amount of work to 1 week, but then Zeph got a dangerous look in his eyes. "You know, there's a way you can leave here earlier," he said with a straight face before pulling out a hacksaw from somewhere and said with a maniacal grin, "You just have to leave one of your legs behind." And with that, the deranged lunatic jumped at the poor dimwit, causing the floor under them to give out. The two landed in the middle of the dining room, much to the inhabitants' shock. After Zeph was able to pull himself out of the tangled mess of limbs he found himself in, and quickly blaming Luffy for the newly acquired hole in the ceiling, even if it was technically his own fault, he quickly went over to investigate a disturbance in the dining area. Apparently, the assistant head chef, Sanji, had been involved in a disagreement with the Marine lieutenant the Straw Hats met earlier. And by disagreement, I mean he literally kicked the tar out of the man for wasting food and for generally being an unpleasant human being. Sanji was a man around Zoro's age with a crisp suit on and had blonde hair that covered his left eye but showed his right that had a curiously swirly eyebrow, and he seemed to constantly have a lit cigarette in his mouth. Another chef named Patty, who looked like a flaky version of Popeye, asked Zeph if he could reason with Sanji before he tried to kill another customer. Zeph, in an irritated manner, proceeded to kick both Sanji and Full Body in the head for causing a scene. An argument quickly developed between the three cooks before a bloodied marine came barging in and saying, "Lieutenant Full Body, sir. Forgive me but the prisoner escaped. This place is too noisy," whined Luffy as he covered up his animal-enhanced ears. Full Body proceeded to spout off on how that was impossible, that the man who was a member of the Krieg pirates was half dead when they caught him and hadn't eaten since then and blah, blah, blah. Suddenly, the bearer of bad news was struck from behind and a man calmly walked in and took a seat at a table. The man looked like he had seen better days, with baggy eyes, a scruffy beard, and dirtied clothes. He looked like he had 1 foot in the grave already, but something about him screamed, dangerous. The man idly looked at the assembled chefs and demanded something to eat. Patty suddenly came forward and said with a pleasant smile, "Welcome, you squid-faced moron." Much to the other customers' shock, "Excuse me, idiot, but do you happen to have any money?" To which the pirate pointed a pistol at the man's head and asked, "Do you take lead?" Patty calmly said, "So you don't have money then?" Before proceeding to punch the man straight through the table he was sitting at, much to the Marine's shock and Zeph's ire, seeing as Patty broke another table. The beefy-looking chef then proceeded to kick the starved pirate out, saying that if he couldn't pay then he wasn't a customer, and the other restaurant patrons cheered while Sanji looked thoughtful. Luffy later came upon an interesting scene. Apparently Sanji had given the pirate food, despite his lack of funds. The Chimera man gave a toothy grin, as he found a good cook. The newbie captain then joined in on the two and started a conversation. Luffy learned through Sanji that Zeph himself used to be a pirate before he opened the Baratie, and the chefs that joined were as tough as any man you'd find on a pirate crew. It turns out the waiters had to quit a few days ago due to the constant brawls the chefs would get into with pirates. It was then Luffy's turn to ask Sanji if the blonde would become a member of his crew, but the man denied his request, saying that he had his reasons for staying with the restaurant, but Luffy ignored this and continued to pester him about joining his crew. The pirate, whose name was Jin of the Don Krieg Pirates, then butted into the heated argument, asking Luffy what his objective as a pirate is. Luffy answered with a large grin that he was going to the Grand Line to find One Piece and become the king of the pirates. Jin gained a serious expression and stated, "Seeing as you don't have a cook yet, I'm guessing you don't have a large crew yet, huh? Counting this guy there'll be 5 of us." Luffy happily chirped while pointing to Sanji, much to the chef's chagrin. "You seem like a decent enough guy, so let me give you advice." Jin cut in before another argument between the two could ignite. "Give up on going to the Grand Line. You're still young, so there's no need to rush into things. The Grand Line is only one part of the ocean, there are plenty other places you can sail to," the sickly-looking man said in all seriousness. Luffy asked the man if he knew something about the Grand Line, to which he replied, "No, I don't know anything, and that's what makes it so terrifying," he said while trembling a little. Sanji then noted that for a member of the Krieg pirates was acting like a scaredy cat, and Luffy asked who Krieg was. Apparently, Don Krieg was considered one of the strongest pirates in the East Blue, and was reported to command 50 ships that housed over 5,000 men. After chatting for a bit longer, Jin got into a small dinghy and was getting ready to set sail, wishing Luffy luck on his voyage and gave his deepest gratitude to Sanji for saving his life. Suddenly, Zeph appeared on deck calling for them to get back to work, and Sanji, after getting rid of the evidence of Jin's free meal, waved the man goodbye as he sailed off with his head bowed in thanks. Luffy then put on an apron and got ready to start his temporary career as an errand boy for the Baratie. Little did he know that things were about to get really interesting very soon. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Chimera Luffy by mellra. Chapter 8, Pirates, was the shout that echoed through the Baratie a few days after Luffy became the chore boy for the sailing restaurant. Let's just say that whoever thinks letting Monkey D. Luffy work any kind of stable job is a good idea should be dragged into the middle of the street and repeatedly hit with a trout. He broke dishes when asked to wash them, never got orders right as a server, lazed around until he was yelled at, etc. It was getting to the point where Chef Zeph was almost ready to start pulling his hair out and wonder if he'd be able to make money by letting Luffy go. Meanwhile, the animal man had continuously begged the assistant head chef Sanji to join his crew, causing the blonde smoker to send him flying back with a kick to the face every single time. Luffy did learn a good trick though. When none of the other chefs were looking, Luffy would transform himself into a little puppy similar to Chow Chow with black fur and would beg for food at some of the tables before he was missed, earning himself plenty of pets and scraps of food from customers who commented how adorable the floating restaurant's pet was, much to the other chefs' confusion. Back to the present, the pirate Don Krieg's ship appeared in the distance. At first, the chefs and the customers were terrified at the idea of getting into a fight with Don Krieg. However, what they saw was anything but a dangerous pirate. The enormous ship looked like it had seen one too many storms and it looked ready to sink at any moment. The men on board were barely alive, looking thin and starved, and when Krieg finally appeared, he was too weak to stand on his own feet and had to be assisted by Jin. Krieg was an enormous man with short-cut gray hair and long sideburns, with a thick gauze wrapped around his head. The most notable aspect of Krieg's appearance is his golden woot steel armor that was made up of a chest plate, shoulder guards, and elbow guards, and it all seemed to be fur-lined. With a great effort, Krieg made it to the deck and began asking for food before he fell to the floor. Jin begged them all to help his captain, but some members, like Patty, laughed at that. Jin continued to beg, saying that they could pay so they were customers. The rest of the cooks refused, knowing all about Krieg's dirty reputation. Krieg was then bowing his head and begging for food as well, and Jin was trying to stop him, tears in his eyes. But the Straw Hats, who were staying with their captain till he figured a way out of his dilemma, and to constantly make fun of him, all knew that there was someone who was listening. Sanji had come in with a large bowl of food and actually kicked Patty out of his way, who couldn't believe what he was doing. But as Krieg eats, another chef by the name of Carne told Sanji and the rest of them about all the horrible things that Krieg had done over the years. And it was soon clear that he lived up to his reputation, for once Krieg had finished eating, he attacked Sanji and even Jin was shocked at what he was doing. Krieg even went as far to injure Jin's shoulder as the rest of the customers went screaming out of the restaurant in panic. Krieg glanced around at the restaurant and stated that he liked it. He said that the second reason he had come here was so that they could take the restaurant. His old ship would soon sink and he wanted the Bharati as his new vessel. He then demanded that they serve food for the rest of his crew. Predictably, they all refused and ready to fight. Krieg laughed as he yelled at them that he wasn't ordering anything, but that he was giving them all an order. And no one had ever disobeyed him before and lived to tell the tale. Holding onto his hurt shoulder, Jin apologized to Sanji, saying that he didn't think that Krieg would do this. Sanji stood up and was actually heading back to the kitchen, and the rest of the cooks were horrified and shocked when he said that he was gonna start cooking. The cooks, who each had giant knives and forks, were now pointing their weapons at Sanji, ready to fight him if he set foot in that kitchen. He then explained as to why he is giving them food, how he was a cook and it was his one job, but was then smashed to the ground by Patty, who then turned a cannon on Krieg and attacked, asking him if he wanted dessert. Krieg complained how awful the dessert was and then pulled out a private arsenal of weapons and began firing on them all as he screamed out why he was the strongest. But before Krieg could get into another rant, Zeph almost knocked Luffy off the stairs as he had a giant sack with enough food for 100 people, which shocked the chefs. However, upon hearing Zeph's name, Krieg's jaw fell open in horror and he was gaping at Zeph. Zeph turned and looked like he wanted to leave the room. The rest of the cooks were all demanding to know what he was thinking for feeding them, about how they'd lose their ship for sure if the pirates got their strength back. That would be true, Zeph answered coolly, but not sounding at all worried, if they still had the will to fight, much to the other chefs' confusion. Tell me, Zeph went on as he looked back at Krieg. Didier will survive defeat. The words slowly dawned on them all. That Don Krieg had run away from the Grand Line and now they were all staring up at him, his face replaced with a very ugly look. But he never stopped staring at Zeph as Jin cowered by his side. Krieg then told the story about Red Leg Zeph, the once famous pirate who was both chef and captain, and that it was his ability to kick that gave him his name. How he could smash bedrock and even leave footprints on steel. The nickname, Red Leg, or even just, Red Foot, came from the blood of his enemies. Krieg also stated that Zeph was supposed to have died in an accident years ago, but he realized that he had only lost a leg, which made him unable to fight anymore and forced him to retire as a chef of a restaurant, how he was now defenseless. But Zeph didn't show any fear as he continued to look at them with a bored expression. I don't need to fight anymore, he said coolly, as he held up his hands. I may cook. As long as I have my 2 hands I'll be fine. Now enough chit-chat. What do you want from me? The restaurant and Zeph's logbook was what the villain wanted. Since Zeph once went in the Grand Line and returned safely, Krieg said that he wanted the journal written at that time. Naturally, Zeph refused. Krieg said that he'll then take it by force. He stated that Zeph's journal will give him the information he lacked when he first tried to enter the Grand Line, eventually making him the king. This leads to a funny scene with Luffy stating in front of everyone that he will be the one to be the pirate king. The other chefs told him to back off, but Luffy wouldn't listen as Krieg snarled. This isn't a game, he said to him. Yeah, I know, Luffy said confidently, his eyes slightly becoming feral slits, but still, I'm gonna conquer the Grand Line. His words just seemed to tick Krieg off. No you won't. It's true we didn't have the information we needed, but my fleet of 5,000 men were wiped out in just 7 days, you brat. That place is a nightmare. Most of the people in the restaurant were stunned to hear that, and when Krieg was about to fight, Zoro and Usopp made their presence known. Krieg saw them and mocked Luffy for having a tiny crew. Well, that's not all. Luffy said, holding up 2 fingers as his eyes went back to normal. I've got 2 more. I'm not a part of your crew. Sanji yelled in the background. Krieg then took the food and went to go feed his crew, giving them all a choice. He was taking the restaurant one way or the other, and their only options were to flee with their lives or to stay where they were and die. They had until they finished eating to make up their minds. I'm so sorry for this, Sanji, Jin said, and he truly sounded like he meant it. I never thought it would be this way. You have nothing to apologize for, sailor, Zeph said in an unusually kind voice as everyone looked to him. Every cook at this restaurant did what he thought was right, he finished. That's all there is to say about that. But boss, Patty yelled, sounding outraged, why are you acting like you're taking Sanji's side? This mess is his fault. As the other cooks tried to speak up to that as well, Zeph lost his temper. You fools don't know what you're talking about. Everyone was a little shocked at the sudden anger in his tone as he explained, none of you have any idea what it's like to be on the brink of starvation. To have no food or water on the open ocean. There is no way you could possibly understand what a terrifying prospect that is. It's the most difficult situation a man can ever face. What? Patty said, sounding lost. I don't know what you're talking about, Chef Zeph. Zeph looked over at them all, a strange expression in his eyes. The difference between all of you and Sanji is that Sanji knows. The chefs all looked completely lost at those words, but they weren't the only ones. The Straw Hats looked thoughtfully at the blonde chef. If all you're gonna do is stand around grumbling, Zeph went on, a hard look on his face. Then leave this place. And never come back. Not a single one of them moved. They all held up their weapons, ready to fight. They had decided to protect the Bharati, since it is the only place where they were accepted. Jin screamed at them to please leave, that they had no idea who they were up against. But Sanji walked forwards, moving one of the tables up and explaining that now that he fed them, he can beat them all, and he said all this with a terrifying expression on his face. "Hey Jin," Luffy suddenly called out, "you said you don't know anything about the Grand Line. I thought you'd been there. Doesn't make any sense." So Jin told them all what happened. How on the 7th day of their voyage through the Grand Line, their entire fleet was almost annihilated. He spoke it all as if reliving a terrifying nightmare. For that entire 50-ship fleet, to be completely eradicated by a single man. He gasped as everyone stared at him, choking in horror at what they were hearing. Jin explained about how as soon as this man appeared he began to slice apart the entire fleet, and how, if not for a freak storm, the flagship would have been sunk as well. "It all seems like a terrible nightmare burned into my memory." Jin cried out, shaking in fear, his hands on his face, as if he hoped to claw out those images. "I just want to forget." His eyes, they were like a hawk's. Sharp and murderous. His gaze alone felt like the cold hands of death. On the stairs, Zoro gripped the railing tightly as he stared at him, eyes wide. "Well then," Zeph said as they all turned back to him. "That can only be the one known as Hawkeye." Jin looked fearful that Zeph recognized who it had been. "Your description of his heartless gaze isn't proof of his identity in and of itself, but the way he so easily decimated your fleet confirms without a doubt that it's him." "Hawkeye Mihawk," Zoro repeated softly. Luffy looked up at him. "You know him, Zoro?" he asked curiously. Remembering the matter at hand, he took several calming breaths as he answered Luffy's question. "Yes, I do," he admitted. "He's the man I've been looking for. He's the whole reason I set out to sea." Luffy blinked up at him as Sanji asked Jin if Mihawk had some kind of a score to settle with them for him to go out and sink all his ships. "We didn't do anything to him." Jin cried back to him. Zeph had an interesting suggestion. "Perhaps you disturbed him during a nap." "Stupid cook." Jin yelled in fury. Why would he destroy an entire fleet for something so trivial? Zeph smirked at Jin's fear. "There's no reason to shout," he said coolly, as if telling a child to off for being too loud. "It's just an example. I thought you'd like a little friendly advice on what kind of place the Grand Line is." Usopp gulped. "And what kind of place is that?" he asked in a croak. Zoro was the one who answered. He probably means that anything can happen there. Usopp on the other hand now had tears of fear in his eyes. "Hey Luffy, do we really have to go there?" he yelled at Luffy who was shaking at the foot of the stairs. "Luffy," he gasped. But their captain was smiling as he cried out, "That's so awesome. This is gonna be such a blast. Don't you understand the concept of danger?" Usopp demanded loudly. Finally, Zoro said softly, "My life's goal will be achieved on the Grand Line." "What?" Usopp gasped up at him. Zoro leaned up against the wall with a similar satisfied smirk. "My rival is out there somewhere and I'm gonna find him." Sanji looked up at him and asked, "Are you that stupid? It's idiots like you guys who end up dead." "That may be true," Zoro said as Sanji looked back at him, "but lay off the name calling. I devoted my entire life to becoming the world's greatest swordsman. It was my choice, so I'm the only one who gets to call me stupid." Just then, outside they could hear the sounds of battle cries and knew that their time was up. The Krieg pirates were all ready to go again. But then something happened. Just when they start to attack the restaurant, the great galleon was suddenly cut in half, creating a lot of disbelief on everyone's faces and even a mini tsunami. Everyone was rocked around inside the restaurant and they were all trying to find something to hold on to. Zeph ordered them to raise the anchor before the ship sank in the waves, while the three Straw Hats all went running outside to where Nami and the guys were on the Mary. They followed them and they found Yosaku and Johnny floundering in the sea. They explained that Nami took the treasure and ship and left. "What did you say?" Luffy, Zoro, and Usopp yelled together in panic. They heaved the two men onto deck as they told them the story of how Nami tricked them and took off with the Mary. Then Zoro lost his temper. He punched the side of the restaurant. "Curse it," he yelled, "she just had to make a bad situation worse." Usopp was looking angrier than they had seen him in a long time. "The heartless thief," he yelled, "Kaya gave us that ship." Luffy jumped up onto the railing and searched over the sea to try and get a glimpse of the ship. "Wait," he called, "I see a ship. It's the Going Mary." He turned towards Yosaku and Johnny. "Tell me where your boat is." "We have it moored to the restaurant," Yosaku said at once. "Zoro, Usopp, don't just stand there," Luffy ordered, turning to them all, "take their ship and go get Nami." "Calm down," Zoro stated, as if he could care less. "Let her keep the ship. Trust me, that woman's way more trouble than she's worth." Luffy frowned at him. "She's the only one I'll accept as the ship's navigator," he said firmly, and it was clear from this tone that he wasn't going to change his mind. Zoro threw Luffy an aggravated look. For a moment, there was a nasty moment of thinking that he would actually refuse, but he then sighed. "Fine, I'll do it," Zoro snapped in frustration, though it was clear that he wasn't happy about it. "You're one high-maintenance captain, you know that. The ship's ready for action, big bro Zoro." Johnny and Yosaku yelled together, once again, showing that these two were really two peas in a pod. Hey, what about you? Zoro asked, looking at Luffy. I should probably stick around here till I get things settled with the restaurant, Luffy said, jerking his thumb at the building, you know what I mean. Well, be careful, the swordsman warned, a slight trace of worry in his face, the situation here could get really bad really fast. Luffy nodded, yeah, got that right. Just then they heard shouts coming from the floating pieces of the remains of Krieg's ship. Over there, it's that man, he came back. Don Krieg, the man who destroyed our fleet is back. Someone's voice screamed out above all the others, what are we gonna do? That got everyone, Zoro's especially, attention. They were all focused on a boat that was sailing towards them. As soon as they saw it, even Zeph's cool disappeared as he looked up, his eyes wide, that man is. And there, through the dust from the attack that destroyed the ship, the form of a single man slowly appeared. Zoro was shaking, sweat pouring down his face. On a small raft that was lit with several candles with eerily green flames, that looked as though something to fetch you from the netherworld. Some of them shivered at the sight of it, but their eyes were drawn directly to the man sitting in the boat. He was a tall and lean man with a short beard, mustache and sideburns that point upwards. His clothing was made of a wide-brimmed black hat decorated with a large plume, and a long, open black coat with no shirt underneath, with red, flower-patterned sleeves and collar. There was a small, golden cross-shaped necklace hanging around his neck and a large, black sword on his back. It had a beautifully curved black blade, in the shape of a cross, and with a golden handguard decorated by blue and green jewels, and a hilt wrapped in bandages with a particularly big jewel at its edge. But underneath the hat they could see his eyes, cold yellow eyes that resembled a hawk that was hunting its prey. The Krieg pirates were all so full of fear that they couldn't move and were shaking in their boots as Mihawk sailed by them. That psycho followed us back here. He's gonna kill us all. Luffy stepped forward when he noticed that Zoro had frozen. Zoro, who's that? He asked him as he glanced towards Mihawk. The man I've been looking for, Zoro confessed as he watched his rival sail closer. Hawkeye Mihawk. So that's Mihawk, Luffy said seriously. He could sense the power inside Mihawk, his animal instincts were screaming at him just how dangerous this man was. Yeah, the greatest swordsman, Zoro said as he kept his eyes trailed on him. Zeph, Patty, and Carne were only a little ways away and were talking about him as well. That's gotta be the guy who destroyed Krieg's fleet, Patty said nervously, he sunk 50 battleships out on the Grand Line all by himself. Looks like he came back to finish the job, Carne said anxiously, but is that all he wants? Wait a minute, another chef said from behind them, he looks like any ordinary man. He doesn't even look like he has any special weapons with him. He carries his weapon on his back, Zeph explained and they stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible, Patty cried out in incredulity. He couldn't have destroyed a galleon like that using nothing but a sword. Carne cried in agreement. Zeph just stood there with his arms folded. Hawkeye Mihawk is a true master. He is without a doubt the greatest swordsman in the world. Here, Zoro was looking nervous, but excited at the same time. A wild grin appeared as he put his hand on the white blade. He was gonna fight, he was willing to fight Mihawk for his title, or die trying. You monster. One of the Krieg pirates yelled in a trembling voice, why are you doing this to us? What did we ever do to you? Mihawk glanced up at him in uninterested a way, as if speaking was a waste of energy, just killing time. Just killing time. Another pirate cried out as he pulled out a pair of pistols and shot at him. But with the grace of a swan, he twisted his wrist very slightly, and just like that the two bullets were deflected and their courses were changed. What, I missed. The pirate cried out, not believing it, but I aimed straight for him. He diverted it, said Zoro's voice, appearing behind the pirate and making him jump. He changed the course of the bullet with the tip of his sword. That can't be. The pirate said in disbelief as Zoro coolly walked past them all, one hand on his swords, which caught the attention of the other pirates as the first demanded to know who Zoro was. He's got 3 swords. It couldn't be. Another pirate gasped, looking up to his face. But that Zoro didn't pay them any attention as he turned his full attention to Hawkeye. I've never seen a sword handled so gently or with such grace, he said truthfully. Hawkeye's eyes looked over at him without even turning his head as he casually replied, there is no strength in swordplay based on force. Did you also use that sword to slice up this ship? Zoro continued on, though it was clear from the wild, excited look on his face that he already knew the answer. I did, Mihawk answered, as if telling him that what he did was something that anyone could do. Then it's true, he asked, still looking like a child who was promised a big treat, you're the best. He went to his black bandana and untied it from his arm. I set sail for only one reason. To meet you. And what is your goal? Mihawk asked with only a slight trace of curiosity in his tone. To beat you, exclaimed Zoro, still grinning wildly as he tied his bandana on. Mihawk smirked at him, how foolish. Zoro then out the white blade and declared, you got spare time. So let's do this. The Krieg pirates, as well as all the cooks, all suddenly realized who Zoro was. Don Krieg was watching the two with great interest. Really? It's the pirate hunter, he said gruffly, though they were still standing on the Barate's edge with Sanji. He heard what he just said and Sanji was stunned by that. Just then, Usopp was yelling at Luffy, telling him that they had to hurry or else they would lose sight of Nami and the Going Merry. But surprisingly, Luffy didn't even look at him as he watched Zoro and Mihawk size each other up. Or rather, Zoro sized Mihawk up. Hawkeye didn't even seem troubled. A fight? Mihawk asked him, with a tone that clearly said that he wanted to make sure that he heard right. You're a weak, pitiful creature. Before anyone could blink, the world's greatest was suddenly standing not 10 feet from the Straw Hat's first mate. If you are, in fact, a competent swordsman, Mihawk said in a skeptic tone as if he highly doubted it, you should see the disparity in our abilities before we even cross swords. I must ask you, why have you challenged me? Hawkeye went on, could it be your courage? Or, is it simply your ignorance? Zoro was grinning as he declared that it was his ambition that drove him to fight. And as he took out his swords he added, also I made a promise I intend to keep. There isn't a person alive who can beat Big Bro. Yosaku yelled from the boat as he and Johnny began cheering. He's already the best in the world. At the same time, Mihawk took the little golden cross that was around his neck and revealed that it was actually hiding a short knife that looked more like for cutting someone's toenails than fighting. Zoro had already narrowed his eyes, realizing that he was being mocked when Mihawk held up the knife. Funny. What do you think you're gonna do with that? He demanded. It'll be more than enough, after all you wouldn't kill a fly with a cannon would you? Mihawk asked him coolly, you may have quite the reputation in the East Blue. But that doesn't mean much to me. This sea is by far the weakest of the four. He sighed a little before he said that he didn't carry any blades that were smaller than this, and it was like he was apologizing to him that this knife was too big for him to handle. I've had just enough of your attitude. Zoro snarled and he actually bit down on the sword with such force that he ended up chipping off a piece of tooth. But he didn't care as he charged at him recklessly, now you die. You have no idea how big the world really is, Mihawk said almost forebodingly as he held up the little knife. Onigiri. Zoro yelled as he struck, but to everyone's amazement, Hawkeye didn't just catch the attack, but he stopped all three swords dead in mid-strike. What the? Zoro gasped when he tried to move forward, but nothing budged. Zoro. Luffy yelled worriedly from where he stood, but didn't do anything else as he could only stand by and watch. What? Big Bro's Onigiri was stopped. Johnny yelled incredulously. But that's crazy. Yosaku shouted, also in disbelief, that attacks never fails to stop an enemy. What's going on here? Finally, either through a sudden burst of strength, or Mihawk simply grew bored, Zoro broke free of the standstill. I am not that far behind the world's strongest. He yelled as he attacked again, but this time no longer as calm or collective as he usually was in battle. It was here that they could fully see that Mihawk shook Zoro to the core. He now began to swing at Hawkeye viciously with his swords. But Mihawk barely had to defend himself as he parried each swing or merely stepped lightly out of the way, so he didn't even get a scratch on him. After a few moments of this, Mihawk stepped to the side and caused Zoro to fall to the deck, panting hard. You're just toying with him, right? Yosaku screamed, his eyes wide, fight for real Big Bro. Big Bro, added Johnny, sounding close to openly sobbing. But it was clear from the look on Zoro's face that he was past listening. You can't be that much better than me. He yelled, shaking with rage, and seeing the expressionless look on Mihawk's face just seemed to even angrier. Again, he got up and began to violently attack. There was no skill or plan here, just vicious slashes. Using the dagger to block another attack, Mihawk stated, such ferocious swordplay. Using his mouth, Zoro moved his sword up to strike, but Hawkeye stopped it, creating a shockwave from the strength that both swordsmen created. How can he defend against Zoro's three-sword style with such a small knife? One of the Krieg pirate yelled in astonishment. He's even more of a monster with a blade than even the great Zoro. Another cried, the swings were so quick that all they could see were flashes of light. As Zoro lunged forward, Mihawk moved and then hit the back of Zoro's neck with the side of his hand. They watched Zoro's eyes roll into the back of his head and they knew that he was fighting to stay conscious after an attack like that. The green-haired swordsman slowly got back up, though now dazed from that last attack. He was exhausted as he marched forward, trying again, but he was so slow and worn out that even a weak swordsman could have easily stepped out of the way. With nothing to hit, he fell forward again, gasping for air as he lay there, with Mihawk looking down at him, but there was something different in his gaze this time. Curiosity perhaps. What is it then? Mihawk suddenly asked, what weight do you carry upon your shoulders? Speak up, weakling. Johnny and Yosaku were both ready to defend Zoro for that insult. How dare you call him weakling? Yosaku cried, his hand on his sword, you'll pay for that. We'll teach you a lesson. Johnny added and with screams they jumped, ready to get in the fight but Luffy wouldn't allow it. No, he yelled, quickly grabbing them by the scruffs of their necks. Yosaku, Johnny, get back here. He then held them both down as he commanded, just stay put. But Luffy was clearly just as upset as they were about it. His teeth were grit together and were slowly becoming fangs, his eyes were slitted, and fur and scales were popping up in random places before disappearing once more. Even Usopp noticed it as he glanced over at him. "Luffy," he began, but Zoro was up on his feet. Zoro was still looking angry, although it was clear that he was far from giving up. "No, I won't lose," he declared. "I refuse to be defeated." Mihawk didn't say a word as he watched him cross his 3 blades. "Tiger." But Zoro barely finished finishing the attack when Mihawk rushed forward and impaled him with the small blade, just right above his heart. Despite the look of complete shock on his face, there was a steely-eyed determination there as he refused to back away from the blade. "You are defeated, yet won't step back. Why not?" Mihawk asked, as if wondering what he would do now. "I don't know," Zoro answered honestly as blood trailed from his mouth and ran down the side of his face to stain his shirt. "But, I will not run. Even if I retreat a single step I'd be shattering the promises I made. I can't run. I would lose my honor. You see, without that there'd be nothing left for me here. That's what defeat is," Mihawk stated simply. But Zoro merely answered, "Then I won't accept defeat." "Then you die," Mihawk pointed out coldly. Looking at him dead in the hawk-like eyes, Zoro said without a trace of hesitation or regret in his voice, "I rather die than give up." Hawkeye was now giving him a new look of respect as he pulled his knife out of his chest. He stepped back and resheathed it before he demanded Zoro's name. Moving his swords into an almost triangle shape, he proclaimed, "I am Roronoa Zoro." Mihawk reached behind his head to grab his black sword. "I'll remember it," he informed him. "No one as strong as you has come around in quite some time." "So as a swordsman courtesy," Mihawk finished, showing off the bright gleam of the sword as he brought it swinging around. "I'll use the world's strongest black sword to defeat you." "Thank you. I appreciate it," Zoro said as Johnny and Yosaku pleaded for him to stop, which he naturally ignored. Spinning his swords, Zoro was ready to perform the strongest attack he knew back then. Mihawk charged. At first no one could see what happened. It looked as though Hawkeye merely ran past him. The two froze where they stood, and then time seemed to slow as the 2 katanas in Zoro's hands suddenly shattered into pieces. Only the white sword in his mouth remained as Zoro fell to his knees in defeat. The Straw Hats couldn't believe it. They had never seen him lose in such a way. It wasn't even close. Without saying a word, Zoro carefully put his last sword back in its sheath as Mihawk raised his blade up, to finish him off. But before he could finish the attack, Zoro spun around and stood up, his arms wide, and his white sword still in one hand. Even Mihawk looked startled at that and asked him what he was doing. Raising his head so that they could see the dark smile on his face, he answered simply, "Scars on the back are a swordsman's shame." Hawkeye returned the grin. "Fine," he answered. And with a single slash, he cleaved open a massive diagonal cut across Zoro's entire chest. For a second there wasn't anything, but then blood cascaded out so that the Straw Hats all felt green at the sight of it. Unable to stand any longer, Zoro's body slowly fell backwards to the sea. "Zoro!" Luffy screamed in horror. "You shouldn't rush these things, young man," Mihawk informed him coolly as Zoro's body fell. "Zoro!" Usopp screamed out, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Big bro!" Both Johnny and Yosaku yelled, a fountain of tears falling from their eyes. "No!" Luffy screamed, tears also appearing in his eyes as he gripped the side of the boat so tightly that it looked as if he would break it into pieces. Suddenly another voice sounded from right next to them. "Don't be stupid!" Sanji screamed out just as Zoro fell into the sea. "Give up your ambitions and live." Luffy was shaking from where he stood. "Darn you!" he growled out, unable to sit still anymore. With a roar that sent miniature waves away from the Baratie, Luffy went into his Chimera form. However, the form he took looked even more feral than normal in his rage, and he even looked bigger than normal at a staggering 20 feet tall, packed with animal savagery, claws, fangs, and muscles. 2 leathery bat-like wings burst from his back as he rocketed himself over to deal with Mihawk himself just as Johnny and Yosaku jumped in after Zoro. Seeing his powers for the first time, everyone was freaked out as they watched. Even Sanji had dropped the cigarette from his mouth. It looked as though Luffy was gonna slam into Mihawk as he came flying right at him, but the world's greatest swordsman simply moved out of the way just in time so that Luffy crashed into the side of the wreckage in his blind rage. "Are you that young warrior's comrade?" Mihawk questioned calmly when Luffy got his head horn stuck and was now attempting to pull them out. "I'm impressed with you for not interfering." Luffy managed to pull his head out and fell on his back. "There's nothing to be upset about," Hawkeye informed him calmly, "your friend will live." At his word, however, Luffy's eyes lost their savagery as he sat bolt upright at once and turned around to see that Johnny and Yosaku had already pulled Zoro out of the water. "Big bro, say something please," Yosaku begged as Zoro hung over their shoulders lifelessly for a moment. "Zoro!" Luffy exclaimed anxiously, his voice slightly more bestial than it normally was in his Chimera form. At hearing his name, Zoro suddenly came back to life and began to cough up water and blood. "Zoro!" Luffy called back again worriedly, shifting back to human as the two dragged Zoro back to their boat where Usopp was waiting for them. Together, they pulled him on board and Usopp went to get some medicine for him. "It's still far too early for you to die," Mihawk said as he folded his arms and proclaimed loudly. "My name is Dracula Mihawk. You're strong, but there is still much for you to learn." No matter how many years it takes, I will hold this title as the greatest in the world and wait for you. Until that day you must hone your skills. Then, seek me out. Roronoa Zoro. Chef Zeph had stood there the whole time with that composed expression. Not just anyone can earn the regards of Hawkeye Mihawk, he said, and there was also a tone of respect in his voice. Mihawk turning to Luffy and asking him what his one goal was. Without any emotion in his face, Luffy answered with as little hesitation as Zoro showed, to be the king. Again, Mihawk smiled. Your ambitions are even loftier than your friends, he informed him. That's quite the task. Even though you're strong, you both have a long way to go. Yeah, well you just let me worry about that, Luffy said defiantly, and even stuck his tongue out at him, letting him know just what he thought about that. He's alive. Usopp's voice suddenly called out and they all looked to the boat. He was just unconsciousness, he declared as Zoro continued to cough up blood and seawater. Johnny and Yosaku were trying to get him to say something as Luffy called out his name worriedly. Gasping for breath, Zoro proved that he was far from dead as he lifted his white katana into the air, the sun gleaming on the silver blade. Luffy, can you hear me? He gasped out so hoarsely that they could hardly make out the words. Yeah, Luffy shouted, and they were all wondering just what he was gonna say. I'm sorry for disappointing you, Zoro gasped out, breathing hard as if every word was painful. I know you need nothing less than the greatest swordsman in the world. Luffy's eyes widened and he stood there, completely taken aback by what Zoro was saying. I've let you down, please forgive me. Zoro's was suddenly coughing up more blood and water as the three around him tried to get him to stop. But he kept going on, ignoring their advice as he declared for them all to hear, I solemnly swear, from this moment forward, that I will never lose again. And to their amazement, he was sounding choked up, like he was crying. Until the day comes, he went on, struggling for air, when I defeat him and take his title. Mihawk smirked at that, as if he was privately looking forward to seeing him try. But then Zoro finally called out, I will never be defeated. Is that okay, King of the Pirates? There was silence at that and a huge smile spread over Luffy's face. Yep. Mihawk seemed pleased also as he turned and headed back to his boat. You're a good team. I hope to see you again, someday. Hey, Hawkeye, Krieg yelled jumping down to face him. I was under the impression that you had come here to take my life, he said, sounding insulted. Weren't you here to kill Don Krieg, ruler of the East Blue? The thought had crossed my mind, Hawkeye admitted, not even bothering to look at him, but I've had enough fun for today so I'm going home to get some rest. Krieg cracked his neck as he said with a grin, I don't care if you've had enough, I haven't even gotten started. As Krieg's crew begged him to change his mind, Krieg suddenly revealed guns and miniature cannons from underneath his armor and attacked. He just won't learn, will he? Mihawk asked in a bored way as his hand went back to his sword. No one could see what happened to him, but when the smoke from the projectiles cleared, Mihawk was gone. Luffy had jumped over and was hanging onto the Baratie, and the rest of the crew was on the tiny boat. Usopp, Luffy cried out, towards everyone on the boat, go on ahead. I'll leave Nami to you. Roger that. Usopp cried back, waving the straw hat around, don't you worry about a thing. Zoro and I are gonna get her right back. Make sure you get the cook to join our crew. And then, he grinned wider as he threw the hat to him, the five of us will set sail to the Grand Line. Luffy stretched out to grab the hat, and he was grinning from ear to ear. Yeah, let's do it. The Krieg pirates were getting ready to attack them again now that the threat was gone and Usopp took charge of sailing the boat after Nami. Hey Pops, Luffy cried out, still hanging on the side of the Baratie. Can I stop doing these chores if I get those pirates out of here? Suit yourself, Zeph answered in a voice as if he couldn't care less. Grinning from ear to ear, Luffy leaned up, to continue hanging from the railing as he looked at Zeph. Okay Pops, you promised me, remember? He said, just making sure he understood everything. If I run those pirates off then my debt to you is clear. No more chores. That's the deal, Zeph confirmed with a nod. There's no telling how much more of my restaurant you'll screw up if you stick around. Luffy laughed in agreement and bonked his own head, letting them know that he knew how clumsy he was. So kid, Zeph said in interest, you said you were gonna be king of the pirates. Were you serious? Well yeah, of course, Luffy answered without a doubt in his mind, I'm definitely gonna be king of the pirates someday. Zeph smirked. I've seen a whole lot of pirates in my day, but you're the first to state your desire so clearly and without a doubt. I heard that back in the day, you were a pretty awesome pirate yourself, Luffy said. So did you wanna be king of the pirates too? Luffy asked curiously. Zeph looked up at the sky to see a seagull soaring above and answered, I do my best to forget about the past, I'm the owner of Baratie now and that's quite enough for me. Krieg gave the command for the pirates to start attacking the Baratie. However, the chefs were ready to fight. Luffy launched himself over them and momentarily was lost from view. However, a huge shadow suddenly formed over the Krieg pirates and they all looked up, causing them all to pale and quite a few to scream out, holy crap. Before there was a cry of, blue whale belly flop. With that, a huge blue whale, still wearing Luffy's hat on its head, crashed onto the pirates, heavily injuring most of them and knocking a large number out. The chefs cheered on their chore boy, which was quickly reduced to spluttering when the waves from the belly flop splashed most of them right in the face. It's hard to believe. The Grand Line is crawling with guys like these. Sanji asked, shaking his head, both in disbelief and to get the water out of his hair. Sanji, Zeph said, remarkably still dry, while staring ahead at the fight, but still addressing the Sanji standing next to him. Pay special attention to how this one fights, he said, don't take your eyes off him for a moment, until this fight is over. Is that clear? Sanji gave a hesitant nod and went back to observing the fight. Luffy, who transformed back and was now hanging from one of the broken masts, was looking down at the pirates calling out, so let me see if I got this straight. You're attacking the restaurant that gave you food. I got no choice but to beat some manners into you. Krieg laughed, mocking him to fight on the water, which goes to show how stupid he actually is since he just saw Luffy plunge in and out of the water as the whole restaurant began to shake. With a great rumbling noise, something was coming up from under the sea and some of them were screaming in fear. There was a cry from the chefs of, raise the fins. Before dark wood broke through the surface. It turns out the fins were actually a wooden deck for them to all stand on. Suddenly, Patty and Carne pulled out a secret weapon that had been hidden in the fish head of the Bharati and declared that they were gonna use it to protect the ship no matter what. It turns out, however, that Krieg was more than just some armor and pistols. He was able to stop the weapon with his bare hands and had actually threw it back towards the chefs. Thankfully Sanji took care of it when he jumped up and with a single kick, stopped it in its tracks. The fish head smashed into the fin and leaving the restaurant unscathed. Bursting out from the wreckage, Patty and Carne were yelling at Sanji for almost killing them just as the conscious Krieg pirates jumped up to fight, boarding the fins and laughing. It started off as a standoff, but the cooks rushed in to fight, but they were no match for their sheer numbers. However, the worst part was listening to them brag at how strong they were. The cooks refused to take it, they said that this restaurant was their home and they weren't giving it up to them without a fight. Patty and Carne were a lot stronger than the rest of them and were able to fight them off, at least until another one of Krieg's men appeared. He was a towering man, was dressed with 2 large iron plates covering his front and back side, as well as 2 small plates on his hands with large pearls embedded in them. I am Pearl, the invincible shield, he cried out. Pearl had taken out both Patty and Carne, but when the pirates tried to take Patty's knife from his hands, Sanji kicked them out, outraged that they would try to touch a kitchen knife, a chef's soul. As the pirates charged him, he took them all out with a few kicks as Pearl mocked him about only fighting with his legs. I'm a cook, remember? Sanji demanded. I couldn't do my job very well if I ruined my hands in battle. He held up a leg and finished, so I'll be taking you down with my feet. Pearl merely went on to explain that he won all 61 battles without a stretch, that he never shed a drop of blood in battle. And no sooner were those words out of Pearl's mouth when Krieg pulled out a spiked ball and swung it around, trying to take Luffy out with it. Luffy was sent flying through the air, but when he landed, he ended up hitting Pearl in the back of the head with such force he gave him a nosebleed. As Pearl stared at the blood, his eyes were widening and he was shaking. The other Krieg pirates were all telling Pearl to stay calm, that it was only a nosebleed. These people aren't just mean, they're dangerous. Pearl muttered, his face twitching horribly at that. The other pirates meanwhile were getting more and more frantic by the look on Pearl's face. So, Sanji said slowly, looking around at everyone, wanna tell me why everyone's freaking out? Luffy, who was picking his nose, said, they're worried about a nosebleed. Pearl was banging the 2 shields on his hands together, looking close to freaking out, screaming out, danger, danger. Gez, what is that guy doing? Sanji yelled in annoyance. Just then, Pearl set himself on fire. Pearl set the ship and even his own crewmates on fire, and as the blaze spread, it had created a sort of wall of fire around him to keep any potential attackers at bay. Before you could blink, the fire spread and soon the entire fin was now in flames. Sanji couldn't take it anymore as he jumped high, over the wall of flames, landing a drop kick on Pearl's face. After working off the minor concussion, Pearl looked horrified. But these flames scare everyone away. He screamed out, looking ready to cry. Well, Sanji answered, holding out his cigarette, looking like he didn't have a care in the world at that moment. I wouldn't be much of a cook if I was afraid of fire. Pearl seemed to lose it completely as he shot out flaming pearls, aiming them directly at the restaurant, determined to set it on fire too. But Zeph was one step ahead of him. When the pearls neared him, he stood on his one good leg and used the peg leg to give a swift kick, and the gust from that attack had actually put the fires out and caused them to drop to the deck harmlessly. But with the fire still raging, Krieg had decided to take out the fin himself with the spiked ball. When he threw it, he aimed it directly over where Sanji and Pearl were fighting, but with them both trapped by the fire, they had nowhere to go. But just before it hit, Luffy came jumping through the fire and saved Sanji by transforming his arm into a muscular, scale-covered claw in order to send the ball flying back towards Krieg with a hard punch. He tossed that thing right back. Sanji gasped in shock as Luffy was now attempting to put out the fire on his backside. The spiked ball was flung into another broken mast, smashing it apart even further, and when it fell, it ended up breaking on Pearl's head, knocking him out and put an end to the fire. However, the Krieg pirates have not said their last word. While they were fighting, Jin had snuck up behind Zeph, and was now holding him at gunpoint. With this, Sanji was asked to surrender. Jin demanded to have the ship, then threatened to kill Zeph if Sanji fought back against Pearl, who managed to get back to his feet. But Sanji wasn't moving, and he even went as far as to mock Zeph for the state he was in. However, the whole time, he tried to get Jin to come after him instead. Pearl launched another attack, and without raising a leg to defend himself, Sanji was slammed into the side of the restaurant. Sanji! Luffy screamed out as blood started dripping down from Sanji's face. Because, Sanji hissed to Luffy, answering his question, if I did that rat over there would have pulled the trigger on Zeph. There was silence for a moment as that sunk in. Jin tried to plead into just giving up the restaurant and that he wouldn't get hurt. But Sanji just couldn't, he couldn't give it up, and he knew what was gonna come up. This restaurant is that old man's life. Sanji declared from where he lay, lowering his head in guilt as he confessed. I've already took everything else that man holds dear. His power, his dreams. So while I'm around, he then screamed out, I'm not gonna let anything else get taken from him. Seeing this behavior, the other chefs asked Sanji what he meant by this before the blonde cook was once again attacked by Pearl, who took the opportunity for some payback, and had slammed his shields into his head, and blood was now pouring out of his mouth and nose. Sanji was able to raise his head and told the cooks everything. He explained that he owed Zeph his life. How that, 9 years earlier, when he was a child, he was working as a ship's cook on a cruise ship in the North Blue. One night, the pirate Red Leg Zeph and his crew attacked the ship and pilfered it for anything valuable. However, both ships were caught in a sudden storm, and were destroyed. As they sank, Zeph managed to save them both from drowning, but had lost part of his leg in the process, and the two were washed onto a rock outcropping, high above the sea. Apparently the two of them were the only survivors, but despite living through the storm, the island they were on was like a slow and painful death sentence. There was little food for them. Only a few rations had washed onto the rock with them, but there wasn't any trees or plants, no animals, and no way to reach the water to fish. Splitting up what little rations they had, Zeph ordered Sanji to sit at the other end of the island, and look for a ship. Zeph had given Sanji enough food for 5 days, but he had been able to make it last for about 20, and how he had nothing left but a moldy loaf of bread. But still no one ever came. Weeks passed and then months. Finally it came to a point that it was like he had been trapped in a daze. He was stuck staring out at the sea for so long that he could no longer tell the difference between the sun rising or setting. After about 3 months, he was starved to within an inch of his life, hardly more than skin and bones. Emaciated and desperate for food, he decided to take a chance and kill Zeph for his food. But when he slashed open the old man's sack in a fit of rage, he discovered that there was only treasure inside. That was when he realized that, not only did Zeph give him all the food that they had, but Zeph had sacrificed his own leg for him as well. Soon afterwards, a ship finally appeared, and they were spared from death. Because of this ordeal, Sanji pledged to never refuse food to a starving individual, no matter how evil or poor they may be. The smoking chef was struggling to get back to his feet. His hand curling up into a fist, he gasped out, "That old fart gave up his leg so that I could live." Everyone in the area stared at him as he got to his feet and declared, "There's no way to repay the old geezer for his kindness unless I risk my life for him." However, not everyone agreed. Luffy's eyes turned dark and was just looking at him as Jin asked Sanji why he got back up. Sanji smirked as he said, "Afraid I can't do that. It's a little too much like giving up." The other cooks were trying to warn Sanji that he was gonna get himself killed. Their words all fell on deaf ears because his eyes said that Sanji was ready to die for the Bharati. But then Luffy did something unexpected. He seemed to have lost it completely. With a dangerous look in his eyes, shaking in anger, he launched himself into the air before becoming incredibly large with a big snout and tough, grayish skin. "No, don't!" Sanji screamed, understanding what was about to happen. Jin'll shot the old man. But Luffy was no longer listening as he screamed out the top of his lung, "Hippo," and like that, his body came slamming down from the sky so that when he landed on the fin, it was instantly smashed to pieces. As Luffy hit the fin, there was a dangerous, wild look in his, still human, eyes that was nothing his normal, cheerful self as he finished declaring his attack, Cannonball. The world seemed to shake as his body came down, and with a great booming sound, the shrapnel went flying every which way and the ocean water came down like rain. There was stunned silence for a moment as they tried to recover from what just happened. Luffy was smiling as he surfaced in human form, glad for what he did. But with fury on his face, Krieg ordered Jin to hurry and kill Zeph, except Jin seemed reluctant to do so. "I don't see why you're all so upset," Luffy said as Sanji tried to tell him off for what he did to the Bharati, but as he got up Luffy finished, "But I'm gonna sink it." And by looking at the look on his face, they could tell that he was deadly serious. No one could seem to believe what they were hearing, and Sanji even got right up in Luffy's face. "You moron, that's what you're doing," he demanded furiously. "You can't sink this ship. But if the restaurant's gone, then there's no reason to attack, then, is there?" Luffy retorted. "No." Sanji screamed at him, "This ship saved my life. I owe everything to her. And you will not take that away." You're gonna die for a dumb old restaurant. Luffy asked him, and for the first time it sounded like he thought Sanji was the crazy one here. Are you stupid? What did you say? Sanji growled. Getting killed. Luffy yelled out as he grabbed Sanji by his jacket and pulled him right into his face. That's how you're gonna repay your debt. The old man didn't save you so you could kill yourself. He did it so that you could do something with your life. Not to die like a fool. And so your big idea is to help them attack us. Sanji yelled back, the two almost nose to nose again, like how he and Zeph usually fight. Meanwhile, Pearl was laughing, telling them all that they couldn't do anything so long as Zeph was their captive and that he was gonna kill them both himself. However, before Pearl could strike Sanji and Luffy, Jin suddenly abandoned his duty of holding Zeph at gunpoint and dashed forward so that he quickly defeated him, shattering his invincible shield in one blow with a pair of tonfas that had cannonballs welded to their ends. Krieg was yelling at Jin, demanding to know what he was doing, but Jin stated that he will be the one to finish off Sanji, that he owed him this much. Here, the chefs found out that Jin was Krieg's chef commander, his second in command more or less. And the rest of the Krieg pirates all agreed that he was strong and a merciless monster to them all. Sanji, look, I'm just following orders, Jin said, sounding remorseful. I don't want to ruin this ship, but I think it's too late for that. Maybe, Sanji said to him darkly. But, if you think you're gonna get to this restaurant without killing me, then you got another thing coming. Perhaps in our next lives we'll be friends. Sounds fair, Jin said, lifting his weapon on his shoulder. Then it'll be an absolute pleasure to kill you, my good friend. Geez, that's comforting, Sanji said as he lit a cigarette, crap face. You as well, chore boy, Jin added, looking over at Luffy. Geez, thanks, Luffy said indifferently, but he didn't seem worried at all, but I'm not afraid of any Krieg pirate. Jin was looking annoyed as the rest of Krieg's crew were all angry and were shrieking out insults and death threats, just outraged he had the gall to say something like that. We are the Krieg pirates, the strongest in East Blue. One of the pirates declared without a doubt in his mind. Luffy looked at them all, as if pitying them and said, only because you outnumbered the other pirates in the East Blue. There was nothing but silence, all the pirates grinding their teeth, looking like they wanted to dismiss it, yet at the same time, they couldn't declare that was a lie. Oh boy, Sanji said, now you really ticked him off. Yes, I was right, Luffy answered. The Krieg pirates saw this as unforgivable and they started to rush in, ready to try and prove themselves. However, they are immediately stopped by Krieg, telling Jin to hurry up and kill them. The battle went on and soon it was Jin and Sanji going at each other. Though strong, there was no doubt in anyone's minds that Sanji could have beaten him if he hadn't been injured by Pearl. Jin was fast and able to keep up with him, as well as even breaking some of Sanji's ribs by the sounds of it, but in the end, the injuries were what was making it almost impossible for Sanji to attack without terrible pain. It ended when Jin managed to pin him down and have his weapon above his head. With Sanji in pain, Luffy went after Krieg, but Krieg releases his armored and planned to kill Luffy there. He shoots Luffy with bombs and spears. Luffy was able to use his knife to deflect most of the spears and his animal-honed reflexes to jump over the others, however the bombs blew him far away from the armored pirate. Then, Luffy asks if Krieg is not serious to fight with him as he brushed himself off from the explosions like it was an everyday thing for him. So, Krieg answers if the important thing in fighting is strategy to kill the opponent. Krieg jeers Luffy as a monkey because he just attacks without strategy, causing Luffy to gain a mischievous grin. With Luffy dealing with Krieg, something else happened. Just as Jin was about to land the final blow, Sanji found himself before a supposedly heartless pirate unable to kill him. Even with Krieg bellowing at him to it, Jin was crying, declaring that because of Sanji's previous kindness, he just couldn't bring himself to finish the job, he just can't forgive himself if he killed him. Krieg was disappointed with Jin. Although, before that, Jin was the person he trusted the most. Krieg sees excess in Jin's personality that will win in the battlefield with anyway. Then, Jin said that he always followed every order that Krieg had ever given him and that he will always respect and admire him. But, Jin still cannot kill him and begs to let the Baraties ship go. While this saved Sanji from being bludgeoned by Jin, it angered Krieg. You little brat, Krieg yelled furiously as he stood up. You think you can defy my orders and then tell me what to do? Jin could say nothing as tears continued to flow down his face. It's pathetic. Morality, sympathy, weaknesses I never expected to see from you. Krieg yelled. You are not my chef commander anymore. Krieg continued to yell as he grabbed part of his armor and pointed it directly at the three of them. Pirates, he called to his crew, step aside. Just then, the skull on the shield opened its mouth to reveal the nozzle of a miniature cannon. At the sight of it, Jin gasped in horror. No, not the gas. He cried. All the other pirates freaked out as well. He's gonna use the MH5. We're all gonna die. Where's my mask? Just breathing it in can kill a normal person in just a few minutes to even a few hours. The pirates all fished masks out of nowhere and were covering their faces. The only thing that matters in a battle is who ends up winning, Krieg stated before he smirked, even if more have got to die. Poison gas is just a means to an end. Victory is all that decides what's right and what's wrong. If you're dead, no one's gonna hear you complain anyway. When you don't hesitate to do unspeakable, horrible things, Krieg stated, grinning ever wider, that is true power. Luffy's face was cold and they were all sickened at the thought. Might as well throw that gas mask away, ordered Krieg as he saw Jin pulling out his mask. You're no longer worthy to be a Krieg pirate. Luffy charged at Krieg, trying to make one last-ditch effort to stop him, and even proclaiming that he wasn't going to let him do it. You're wasting your time, chore boy, Krieg said as he punched the mast Luffy was running on, shattering it to pieces and causing him to lose his footing. In his desperation, Luffy dove into the water out of sight. The military pirate seemed surprised and pleased at this turn of events, thinking that he'd won as he prepared to fire the MH5, thinking that now he only had to deal with 2 small annoyances, believing Luffy to have drowned. Suddenly, a hammerhead shark, wearing Luffy's straw hat, burst from the water and nailed Krieg right in the stomach with a cry of, "Hammerhead butt." Unfortunately, the blow only knocked Krieg slightly off balance as he was still protected by his armor, and he was able to fire the gas bomb directly at the Baratie. Both pirates and cooks dove into the water as Patty and Carne took Zeph inside. But the 2 on the platform didn't have time to move anywhere. Thinking fast, Luffy dove back into the water to try and intercept the bomb, but he knew it would be too late as the bomb landed on one of the platforms. A giant explosion rocked the area and a wave of purple gas filled the air, shrouding everything in front of them so that they couldn't see anything. It was deadly silent, the only sound came from the cry of a seagull above them, but soon it fell from the sky, dead before it hit the water. They waited, and waited, every minute feeling like it stretched onto an hour. But after a painful 5-minute wait, the gas finally started to clear for them to see just what happened. Luffy was safe as he hopped out of the water in human form, but the problem was Jin. Sanji yelling through his mask to get Jin off him, who was holding it there, making sure that he couldn't move. "Jin, are you okay?" Luffy gasped. Jin didn't answer him, but his skin was now a sickly, dark purple and he was struggling for breath, coughing up blood from his mouth and nose. Every single painful gasp was weaker than the last. "It's your mask, you gave it to Sanji," Luffy whispered, staring at the mask on the blonde cook's face, realizing what happened. Jin collapsed just as more blood erupted from his mouth. "No," Luffy yelled, heading towards them as Sanji quickly caught him and held him up as he fought for his breath. But when Krieg started to laugh at it, Luffy stopped and turned to glare at him. "What a fool," Krieg said, having removed his own mask, and was now mocking Jin's condition. "You're paying for a plate of food with your life. Oh well, maybe you'll learn, when you're dead." Sanji was still holding Jin, who was gasping out Krieg's name. Whether it was in anger or pleading, it was hard to say as he wheezed for air. "Jin," Sanji whispered softly, "so it seems," he glared up at Krieg with disgust, "that Don Krieg wasn't the right man for you to follow, was he?" Krieg just laughed, and the sound of it was making them long to hit him. "It figures that you would still feel for that pathetic scum," he said loudly. "Scum," Sanji exclaimed in rage. "That's right. Anyone who loses focus and betrays my ship is worthless to me," Krieg said as he grinned again. He would almost certainly do it again. "Putting him out of his misery is an act of mercy to keep him from dishonoring himself in the future and endangering my crew." The Krieg pirates, meanwhile, just couldn't believe that Krieg would kill Jin. No one was more loyal to Krieg than Jin, and the chefs all learned that when they escaped from the Grand Line and were being pursued by Full Body, Jin went out alone and masqueraded as Krieg. Jin always sacrificed himself to save Krieg and he did anything to win, that's why people called him, Demon. Sanji turned to Patty and Carne and told them to get the kit used for food poisoning, as Zeph told him to put the mask on to detoxify the gas in his lungs and then to take him to the upper deck of the Baratie where the air was fresher. Krieg just laughed and claimed that because of the poison, Jin will die in 1 hour. Luffy suddenly spoke again. "Don't you dare die, Jin," he said, and though his words were quiet, everyone seemed to have heard it and turned to look at him. Even Jin raised his head a little to try and see him, though it was hard to tell with the mask over his face. "You can't let someone like him win," Luffy told him, his eyes as sharp and cold as Mihawk's had been as he glared at Krieg. "Stick around. Now I'm mad. You'll wanna see what I'm gonna do to him next." Jin, however, didn't believe that Luffy can defeat Krieg. Even Sanji tries to stop him too and yelled that he will be killed if he attacks him head-on. To make everyone stop worrying, Luffy just said, "I'm not worried." And then he started his attack at Krieg's front. "Go ahead and give it your best shot," he screamed as Krieg grinned cockily and Sanji cried for him not to do it. But Luffy ignored him as he charged ahead, and they knew that he wasn't going to back down this time. "You are only running towards one thing, chore boy. And that is," Krieg said as he threw several small bombs into the water, "your funeral." "My funeral," Luffy repeated scathingly. The bombs went off to both blind the animal man and to prevent him from jumping back into the water. The water splashed up around him and that was when Krieg took out his spike machine gun again and shot through the water. But Luffy still ran through it, and when he burst out of the waves the chefs noticed his body was covered in a shell-like material from the front of a turtle. Unfortunately this didn't stop several of the spikes from hitting Luffy's unprotected limbs. But Luffy ignored the pain as he neared Krieg. Reeling his arm back as scales started to cover it, Luffy cried out, "Turtle." Realizing that he was going to try an attack, Krieg revealed a robe made of dangerous spikes to deter any attacks. Jab! Luffy yelled, as he went and punched him right through the metal spikes, the spikes scraping against the scales on his hand, and managed to strike Krieg dead in the face. Both pirates and cooks were staring in horror at what Luffy had just done. Someone then summed up all their thoughts by shouting out 3 words, "That's messed up." Luffy was standing there almost like a zombie for a moment before he went and began to pull the spikes out. It was then that everyone noticed that the cuts on Luffy's hands weren't much worse than paper cuts, most likely the worst of the damage was blocked due to the tough scales. "So is this my funeral?" he asked as he pulled out the first spike and threw it to the ground and went on, "Or yours?" He went for another spike. "You can't kill me, with little spikes." Out came that one. "My funeral," he threw out the last spike, "will take more than this." Breathing hard for a minute and biting back the pain, he went on, "You'll have to do better than that, if you wanna beat me." He looked back up, grinned wildly, "'Cause I don't think it's time for me to die just yet." Sanji, who was nursing his wounds from Jin, was now looking over at him. "I know one thing, he's nuts," he said to Zeph. Zeph smirked down at him before he said, "I've seen 1 or 2 like him before. Stubborn kids who rather die and have to turn away from a fight once it's started." "He'll stay," Sanji said knowingly. "That's for sure. I'm glad he's with us cause guys like that are hell to fight," Zeph said conversationally. "I don't care if he wins or loses," Zeph finished. "I consider it an honor just to be able to watch him." "So boy, it's not your funeral yet is it?" "Too bad," Krieg snarled from where he lay and slowly began to lift himself up. "Because one of us has got to go. And since I'm here, I'd really like to pay my respects." He charged Luffy and slammed one of his shields at point blank. "Die!" He screamed as he fired a miniature explosion. But Luffy easily jumped to avoid it and even hooked his foot on Krieg's shoulder when he jumped over him, knocking him down twice in under a minute. "You first," Luffy shouted out as the bulky armor hit the platform with a resounding thud. Unnoticed by all was how dark hair was starting to creep up the Chimera boy's limbs and the beginnings of a tail started to sprout from his spine. Meanwhile, this creates severe anguish amongst his crew members, as Krieg has always came out of a battle unscathed. It was the first time they had ever seen Krieg being knocked down and they were all wondering that he wasn't invincible after all and his reputation would be destroyed if a kid was able to defeat him. However, when one crewmate began to believe that Luffy might just be stronger than Krieg, that got his attention. "Shut up maggots. Never doubt me," Krieg screamed before combining his shoulder plates together to form his mighty battle spear, which he slams into the ground next to Luffy, creating an explosion. The Krieg pirates were finally rejoicing as they see Krieg's secret weapon, as he discards his cape and explained that it was stronger than the spikes he fired at Luffy earlier. While Luffy wondered out loud how the spear made an explosion as he hid behind a broken part of the ship, Krieg gave him an answer by bragging once again. "My mighty battle spear," he boasted, "it's different from any other. When this thing hits you, you won't just be wounded and failing, you'll be blown straight into the afterlife." Continuing the battle, the surrounding wreckage was eventually reduced to sunken rubble with both combatants having very little room to move on. Krieg swung it again, sending Luffy flying over the ocean, but after the swing was completed, Krieg couldn't see Luffy at all. Noticing that his spear felt heavier for some reason, the villainous pirate looked at the spear's end and was shocked to see Luffy hanging upside down from the head of the spear with a long brown tail wrapped around the shaft. Not just the tail, but Luffy's arms, legs, and part of his face were covered in dark hair while his feet had gained opposable thumbs, the pirate going for his monkey man form. Seeing the cheerful grin on the straw hat wearing monkey boy, Krieg lost what little patience he had left and started swinging his spear like a baseball bat in order to throw off the annoyance. Luffy was able to easily flip off the spear before he was thrown, however, and landed gracefully several feet away from the larger man before slipping into a battle stance. "You said earlier that I fought like a monkey with no plan at all," Luffy chittered. "Well, let me show you how a real monkey fights." Krieg gave a roar as he made several attempts at stabbing the agile monkey, all of which Luffy either dodged with ease with impressive acrobatic movements or was able to punch and kick the spear away before it could make contact. Krieg was looking slightly out of breath after 5 minutes of this and the Chimera man's victory looked assured, but just then Luffy's one leg buckled leaving him kneeling and trying to catch his breath, a dark reed starting to stain his fur from the wounds on his arms and legs. "He's lost way too much blood," Sanji said, still holding onto his hurt ribs. "He can't fight for much longer. This better end quickly." Krieg continues his assault on Luffy, who was now dodging for his life as the wounds started to take their toll. He jumped to the section of the ship Luffy was resting on and ended up blowing it up. On and on, Luffy was being attacked and was forced to only dodge until he found a way out of it. He was able to keep it up for a while before he finally lost his balance, which makes him wide open for an attack. However, just in the nick of time, Luffy grabbed the lance before it can hit him once more. Enraged, Krieg slams the spear into the ground, forcing Luffy to let go. Krieg proceeded to ram the spear at Luffy, who punched the tip, creating an explosion which sent him flying through the air. But already, Luffy was forcing his wounded body to get back up. And like before, Krieg swung the spear at him, and again, Luffy punched the blade, making it explode a second time. Krieg swung again, declaring that he was stronger than Luffy. Nonetheless, Luffy took each hit without budging an inch. Crap, Sanji hissed. There's no way that Chorboy can take much more of this. That spear is way too powerful. No, you're wrong, Zeph said to Sanji in disagreement. Even with 100,000 more weapons, our Chorboy can still bring him to his knees because he does not know fear. Sanji looked up at Zeph in confusion as Krieg dished out another attack at Luffy, and of course Luffy met it head-on. Burnt black with his fur now smoldering, Luffy landed flat on his back on the wreckage, smoking lightly. Krieg smirked as he turned and walked away, sneering that it was too easy. But at those words, Luffy began to push himself back up. Stopping dead in his tracks, Krieg turned to look as he raised the spear back up. Now that's impressive, he muttered, but he was looking angry now. Stand or fall, Zeph went on, life or death, in a struggle for your very existence, you cannot have even the slightest bit of fear or you will be lost. But Sanji didn't seem to understand as he asked him what he was talking about. That kid out there, Zeph answered impatiently, as if speaking to someone dumb, as Luffy charged again and took another blast to the face. When he's fighting, Zeph said as Luffy pushed himself back up through the broken boards with a grin. He's not afraid of anything. Not even death. Still smiling, Luffy got up once again and went up for another blast to the face. Is it all instinct? Zeph asked suddenly, or all a plan? He grinned, as if he figured it all out on his own. We'll know soon, if he lives. What plan? Sanji asked him. Killing himself. Krieg was getting more annoyed, veins sticking out on his head as he snarled at Luffy, cursing him out. But Luffy just continued to grin as the chefs all cheered from the background. I told you. Krieg yelled as he ran with his spear, today is your funeral. Another boom went off, I am invincible. Just then, Luffy threw himself back at Krieg one more time. Another boom sounded off and there was silence for a moment. There is no doubt that Krieg and his pirates are strong, Zeph continued one, but Chorboy has something they'll never have. Krieg may have more pirates at his command than anyone else before him, he may have terrible weapons of mass destruction to everything in his path, but he will never have that kid's heart. Sanji was just watching it before his one visible eye suddenly widened in understanding. No sooner did he say that did Luffy slam his foot into the deck, and the shockwave from that broke the tip of the spear, much to Krieg's confusion and horror. The great battle spear, Krieg yelled in disbelief. What did you do, boy? Luffy grinned at him. I just punched it in the head 5 times. It looks tired, maybe it needs a rest. Luffy's eyes narrowed as he said, now it's my turn. You ready for this? Because that was all I needed, Luffy said with a huge grin. Now that your little toy's broken, you're nothing to me. Krieg's eyes narrowed. Oh yeah. Yeah, without the blade, it's just a bomb on a stick. And let's face it, that's pretty lame, Luffy stated. Krieg smirked again before going in for another attack, but Luffy dodged it and jumps up to the mast, swinging around like how an actual monkey would from the tree. Then Krieg breaks the mast, missing Luffy completely as he threw the mast like a javelin back at him. But, Krieg destroyed it by shooting fire at it from a miniature flamethrower attached to his wrist. Once they were on a stable platform, Luffy ran forward to hit Krieg with a series of punches and kicks with his animalistic strength. Krieg's armor, however, withstood the attack. Finally angry, Luffy ran forward, becoming more muscular as his tail disappeared, his gorilla man form, and reared back his arm so that he could hit him once again. When his fist hit the armor they could hear the deep ringing noise like a bell when he hit. Luffy kept going, but Krieg hit him with the remains of the spear and he was sent back across the deck. As Luffy was trying to recover, Krieg jumped to the top of the tallest remaining mast and sneered down at him, calling to him to get him to look up. You don't stand a chance, boy. He yelled down, real power comes from deadly weapons. They're the source of true strength. He sneered, see, only the strong are meant to live. And that's me. You're just a stupid, filthy animal. Krieg threw out bombs from his place on top the mast but Luffy chased in to try and stop him. The whole time, there was an evil grin still on his face, yeah. He challenged, that's what you think. He threw his muscular and hairy arms back when he got near enough to the cocky jerk. Krieg hit him with his weapon one more time, but it wasn't enough to stop the gorilla double hammer. That came flying at him. Through the explosion and smoke, Luffy charged through and finished crying out his attack, Krieg screaming in shock. And that was when he was sent flying into the air, his bombs falling from his hands. Something was wrong though, as there was a blank look in Luffy's eyes, smoke coming out of his mouth from that last detonation. That's it, Krieg bragged as he went flying backwards. After all that big talk, that's all you got. But then he blinked in surprise to see that his golden arm was cracking apart and was then yelling in disbelief about it. However, his smirk was back soon when he noticed that Luffy still didn't move. To him, his destroyed armor was enough of a price for this victory. But Sanji realized what those bombs were and screamed up at Luffy, it's a trap. Get out. The bombs Krieg's dropped exploded and destroyed the rest of the battlefield. There wasn't anything left but splinters, the rocking waves put everyone in the water in danger and Sanji cried out over the noise in fear. Once again, Luffy surprised them all, bursting through the smoke with his arms now changed into a bird's wings, Krieg screaming out in terror at the sight of his face, losing all his cool. What? Krieg screamed in utter shock. Luffy quickly shifted his arms back to human and then once more into their gorilla form and gave another yell of, "Gorilla double hammer," and when this attack hit, it did the job. He destroyed the armor by shattered it to pieces and sent Krieg falling to the ocean. "I totally win," Luffy screamed out, his hands in the air in victory. "This isn't over yet, boy," Krieg screamed, and Luffy looked taken aback by the fact that he was still in it. Krieg shot a steel net from the same arm that had the flamethrower and wrapped around Luffy. He was now trapped and Krieg was laughing as he pulled him to the sea, confident that Luffy would still get tangled up and drown in the net, believing he could only turn into larger animals. Krieg laughed in triumph as he pulled Luffy towards the sea. "You can't escape. This is a steel net." Luffy struggled in the net, as Krieg screamed out triumphantly, "It's over. That's the ocean down there. Looks like I'll be getting the last laugh after all, chore boy." But Luffy suddenly had an idea, transforming into a small hummingbird and slipping right out of the net before going back to human, much to Krieg's shock and horror. Falling towards Krieg at neck-breaking speeds, Luffy laughed out, "I got that jerk right where I wanted him." Luffy began to grow bigger as his skin took on a grayish hue and his nose turned into a long trunk while sharp tusks poked through his mouth, turning him into an elephant. The straw hat-wearing elephant wrapped his trunk around Krieg's head and spun around to trap him, spinning like a propeller as he aimed it right at the Barati's fin. "Time for me to end this, right now. Elephant," he cried out eagerly. The two were both screaming, but for different reasons. "Giant hammer." And with that, Luffy slammed Krieg's head into the fin, shattering what was left of it, where Krieg finally lost and backed out. Luffy, going back to his normal form, grinned before exhaustion took over. He was out cold before he even hit the water. Scene break. Luffy was sitting up in bed, looking around sleepily and realized that he wasn't alone. Sanji was sitting in the window, looking out at the sea. Luffy blinked a few times, and they could see that he had several bandages wrapped in the places where he pulled the spikes out as he put his hand on his head and screamed out in panic. "My hat! Where's my hat? It's right there." "Calm down," Sanji said loudly. Luffy's hat was sitting on a shelf with things like cigarettes and even a picture of Sanji and Zeph when they first opened the restaurant. Luffy sighed in relief and put it happily on his head. "Have a good nap," Sanji asked as Luffy looked around the room. "Hey, those pirates?" Luffy asked in confusion, and it was clear he was trying to figure out how he got here. "They're gone now," Sanji answered, "all thanks to you." "Me?" he asked in surprise. "Yeah, though you're lucky. One of those spikes hit a vein and with you both jumping around and changing so much, it's a miracle you didn't bleed to death. You're one freaky guy, you know that right?" To which Luffy smiled sheepishly while scratching the back of his head. Sanji gave an amused chuckle before continuing, "Oh, and before I forget, Jin asked me to tell you that he said he'll see you on the Grand Line," Sanji said, looking back out at the ocean. "He did?" Luffy asked in surprise. "To you?" "No, to you," Sanji yelled back as he climbed out the window to the balcony and walked to the railing. There was silence all around them for a moment before Luffy reminded him that he didn't have to be chore boy anymore since he got Krieg out of here. "That's the deal," Sanji confirmed for him. "Hey, I was wondering," Luffy said, but Sanji already guessed what he was gonna say and beat him by telling him that his answer was still no, he wasn't going to become a pirate. That he was going to stay here at the Barati until Zeph acknowledged him as a real cook. Luffy sighed, his eyes overshadowed as he told him that he finally gave up. However, his words and his actions didn't match. His arm became scaly and reached out to grab hold of Sanji's collar like a snake and the blonde chef was gasping at him to let go. Sanji was telling Luffy that he couldn't leave just yet, but that he did promise himself that one day he would go to the Grand Line. Luffy beamed as he stretched out to join him on the balcony. "Well, let's go right now," he said. "It just isn't the right time." "Not yet," Sanji said. They continued to look out at the sea for a moment before he said, "There is one place," and without another word, he turned back to Luffy and asked, his face suddenly lighting up with exhilaration as he asked, "Say, have you ever heard of All Blue?" "No," Luffy answered bluntly. "You've got to be kidding me," Sanji asked, still never losing his smile. "That sea is a miracle." Luffy's eyes widened as he went on and on about his dream of one day seeing the All Blue. "In the All Blue there are fish from the East Blue, the West Blue, the North Blue, and the South Blue," he said breathlessly. "That one stretch of ocean has it all. To us cooks it's a culinary dream come true. A place that fantastic has got to be on the Grand Line somewhere, right?" Luffy was intrigued, because he'd talked to several fish by his island yet none mentioned anything like the All Blue. Of course, most fish aren't known for their attention spans. This continued on for some time about Sanji's dreams of seeing the All Blue and what he would make once he got there. When Patty screamed out that lunch was served, the two decided to go down and get some as well. But they came before a surprising incident. First, there wasn't any seating left and he and Luffy were forced to sit on the floor. Luffy decided to eat in dog form, since it was much more comfortable eating on the floor that way. That is until several chefs, including Sanji, whacked the clothed dog over the head, correctly guessing that he was the one playing the cute puppy act to win table scraps from the customers. Things settled back down as the chefs went back to their meals. Soon though it got nasty when all the chefs kept going on about how they hated his food. It ended with a big fight with Zeph and Sanji before he went charging out. The only one who didn't have something to say about Sanji's cooking was Luffy, who was gulping it all down. "What's all the fuss about?" he asked, ladling himself more and licking some off his muzzle. "This soup's totally awesome." "All of us know the soup is good," Zeph said, and Luffy looked up in surprise. "I know he's an outstanding chef. Everyone here on the Baratie does," Zeph said. Not a single one of the other cooks disagreed, all of them nodding the same way and told him what they all thought. "But the thick-skulled idiot wouldn't listen to us if we tried to reason with him," he said. Luffy continued to enjoy the soup when Zeph made a surprising request. "Hey, listen, you were saying that you needed a cook for your ship, right? Well, this isn't something I wanna be asking anyone, but would you mind taking that little brat along with ya? Take him to the Grand Line." He smiled. That would be best for him. The Grand Line is his dream. "Geez boss, you sure made us put on a heck of a show," Patty said, looking close to laughing. "Oh man," Carne laughed, "I was worried he was gonna figure it out cause of your bad acting." Patty laughed, "Come on, your acting was way worse than mine." But their fight was interrupted when Luffy said something that made them all almost fall over. "No way. But earlier you mentioned you needed a cook for your ship," Zeph said loudly, and he was now sounding angry. "Just what are you trying to say? That he's suddenly not good enough for you?" "Oh, he's good," Luffy admitted, turning back to his food, "and I'd love it if he joined my crew and came with us." He swallowed and finished, "But it seems like he really wants to stay here and cook with all of you guys. You can ask me all you want, but I'm just not gonna take him." "So you're saying you can't agree to it unless he tells you himself," Zeph said, playing with his mustache. "Is that right?" "That's right," Luffy said before he held out his plate in his mouth and asked for more food. Zeph thought it over before he said, "Well, I suppose that's fair enough. But who knows if that hard-headed little brat will ever agree to join up with ya." "Yeah," Patty added, "once that guy makes up his mind there's nothing anybody can do to change it." No sooner did he said that when something came with a crash right through the wall, causing Luffy to leap up into human form as he got into a battle stance. Through the dust they saw that it was a large pan shark with Yosaku hanging from his mouth, and with Sanji underneath them. After they pulled Yosaku out of the thing's mouth, it went back to the water and took off as they heard what happened. They had Yosaku with a blanket and he explained that though they weren't able to catch up to Nami, they figured out where she was heading. But Yosaku also added that he came back here to get Luffy, explaining that they needed his help because the place they were going to could mean certain death for them all. "Alright," Luffy said, "I don't really get it, but I got it." Sanji was leaning against the railing outside as the two got up and walked past, going to get ready to leave. But as soon as Luffy walked past him, he said to wait. "Your dream is foolish," he said when Luffy did stop to listen, "but then again, so is mine." Luffy didn't look at him as Sanji looked up to the sky. "Now's as good a time as any. Why not start my quest right now?" "Sanji?" Luffy asked, turning his head slightly. Pushing himself off the banister, Sanji looked at him and said, "I'll be joining your little crew on your journey to be king of the pirates." Luffy turned to stare at him as Sanji finished up, "You hear me? I wanna be the cook on your ship." They sized each other up as he finished, "Alright. What'a say?" A big grin appeared on his face and he screamed out, "Yeah. Of course." He and Yosaku were both jumping around, dancing and singing happily as Sanji looked up at the cooks. "Are you guys happy now or what?" he asked grumpily, but he was smirking when he saw their sour expressions. "Sorry, really. I'll leave now." Patty snorted and said that he wanted to throw him out himself for up and abandoning them. "I'm especially sorry for making the lot of you resort to bad acting," Sanji told him. "Hey wait," Patty yelled, "how'd you know?" "I heard everything, you bunch of jerks," Sanji answered, now turning to glare at Zeph. "Was stomping on my pride the best plan you could come up with?" "Was it, you old geezer? Every little thing has to be a fight with you," Patty yelled, holding up a fist. "I'm sick and tired of it. Bring it on." But Zeph was holding Patty back as he looked to Sanji. "I have never liked children. As a matter of fact, I hate children. There wasn't a day past that I didn't regret letting a useless little brat like you live, Sanji." "Fine by me, you rotten old man," Sanji smirked back, "enjoy the rest of your miserable life." With that, Sanji made to leave with Luffy and Yosaku. He told them that he was going to get his stuff and that he would meet up with them later. Later, as he was packing, Luffy got a surprise when Zeph had offered him his logbook. But Luffy had refused, and caused Zeph to smirk again and leave. Soon, with everyone on board, Luffy and Yosaku were waiting with all the other cooks outside on the fins, that was patched together rather sloppily. Finally, Sanji appeared in the doorway with his knives in his case and a sack over his shoulder. He stood there for a minute in the doorway, as if realizing that this was all for real. He slowly walked forward. But Patty and Carne jumped him, ready to give him a beating. Of course, with 2 kicks, Sanji took them out. "Really guys, that was just dumb," a chef said to them as they bled on the deck, and Sanji continued on as if no one interrupted him. It was silent after that as Sanji walked with all the cooks on either side of him, only the sounds of his footsteps and the waves could be heard. It was as if he was about to leave for a dangerous war and might never come back. Though, thinking about it, that wasn't impossible. He reached the boat and said, without ever looking back, "Let's get going." "You don't need to say goodbye," Luffy asked a little surprised. But Sanji smiled as he said it was fine, and was about to get in when Zeph called out behind him. "Sanji," he said from the upper balcony, "take care of yourself, okay?" Sanji was standing there frozen at those words. Even after all this time, those words seemed to have echoed inside him. Though those simple words wouldn't mean much to others, to Sanji, those words meant so much. Zeph, a man who usually belittled him one way or another, asked him to take care of himself. He was fighting the tears that threatened to come out but was quickly breaking down as an understanding smile appeared on Luffy's face. "Chef Zeefffffff." Sanji screamed out, and to their astonishment he spun around and fell to his knees, his forehead touching the Barati's deck. He was so completely moved by what Zeph said, that he just couldn't hold it in. "Thanks you geezer. I'll never forget your kindness. I owe my life to you old man, so thank you." Tears had also appeared in Zeph's eyes. Soon all the other chefs were crying as well, saying how much they were gonna miss him. There wasn't a dry eye around and Sanji was smiling through his tears. "Stupid words," Zeph said, his eyes bloodshot as he rubbed them. "Real men should part without a word, let alone tears." Luffy stood grinning as they watched them all try and mop up their feelings, and Sanji finally stepped onto the boat. "Let's go. Set sail," Luffy hollered, and they pushed off, with Sanji waving to them all, still crying the whole way. "I will see you again," he promised them. "I'll come back someday." The whole time the chefs waved him off, yelling they wished him good luck and that they would miss him. With an emotional Barati behind, they watched the three head off as the chefs waving him off even after he was out of their sights. Chapter 9. It has been a couple days since the group had left the Barati, in search of their absent crew members. Yosaku and Sanji were near the front of the ship and resting there as Luffy jumped around like a little kid hopped up on sugar. Finally, Sanji yelled at Luffy to calm down. Still excited, he came over to sit at the very front of the boat and turned to Yosaku. "So, are we getting close to where Nami is?" "You know, the island." Suddenly, Yosaku slammed his hand down on his knee, and got their attention. Pointing an accusing finger at him he yelled out, "You're way too naive and way too young. Don't you get it? Don't you realize every second that passes brings us closer to the infamous Arlong?" Yosaku spoke to Sanji and Luffy that, due to Nami's suspicious behavior being connected to their copy of Arlong's wanted poster, he and Johnny suspected that there had to be a connection between them. Of course Luffy and Sanji didn't seem at all concerned as Luffy asked for food. Yosaku looked ready to fall over at how clueless they were and went on to yell about everything he knew about Arlong. But Sanji was starting to swoon at the idea of mermaids, and Luffy made gills appear on his neck along with a fish tail to mimic the idea, but was knocked out of it by a well-placed kick to the head courtesy of Sanji. Yosaku was getting frustrated and told them all about the 7 warlords and mentioned Mihawk and a member who was also a fishman and just how dangerous they were. "Arlong has taken control of 20 towns since coming to the East Blue," Yosaku said with fear in his voice. "His strength easily surpasses anyone you've encountered, including Don Krieg. He's devastating." But Sanji couldn't understand why Nami would go after him by herself, which Yosaku responded that she was trying to get his bounty, with Sanji now fantasying about her being a mermaid. Sanji then went to get food done as Luffy said they would worry about it when they got there. But as the three were sitting down to really enjoy their food, there was a rumble beneath them. Suddenly, what sounded like a moo came from beneath the waves. The sea rose up on the side of the boat, and through the giant wave were a pair of horns. Sanji looked overboard to see a giant sea cow rising up out of the sea. He had a big round nose with a gold nose ring, cow-esque face and horns, green spots throughout his body, with a great big seal-like body. Yosaku screamed in panic as Luffy and Sanji looked at it in mild curiosity. Luffy, wanting to know what the creature wanted, dived into the water and suddenly another giant sea cow erupted from the water, startling everyone present. Yosaku screamed while foaming at the mouth before Sanji calmed down and pointed out the second sea monster. Unlike the first monstrous cow though, this one had black spots on its body, as well as a highly familiar scar under the eye and straw hat resting on the top of his head. The two creatures seemed to be talking to each other for a minute or two, the soft moos being the only thing the two humans could make out. Suddenly though, the black spotted sea cow's eyes went white with rage and it gave a devastating headbutt to the first one, sending it flying back into the sea with tears of pain streaming from its eyes. The straw-hatted one suddenly turned back into Luffy, who landed gracefully on the railing of the ship before turning back to where he sent the cow flying, screaming out, "Bad sea cow! Stay away from our food!" As the sea cow mooed in anger and pain, Sanji told him off for that and went over to where the sea cow had swam to. He went to try to feed him, but as soon as it opened his mouth, Sanji kicked it so hard that he was thrown backwards into the sea. "What the crap are you doing? You jerk!" Yosaku bellowed at him furiously. "He was gonna eat me with the plate, what could I do?" Sanji asked casually, one leg up on the side of the boat, clearly waiting for it to come back up. The beast roared in fury, falling towards them, but Sanji ran up the mast and kicked him so hard in the neck that it hit the ocean, out cold. And to add insult to injury, Sanji and Luffy sat back down at the table to finish their food. "You guys are insane," Yosaku whispered, staring at them with admiration and horror. "Would have been a waste of good food," Sanji said causally. Soon enough, the boys finished their meal and tied a rope around the cow's horns once he woke up tearfully. "Onwards, cow!" Luffy cried out, and a terrified sea cow set off. Soon they were almost flying across the water as the cow pulled them. Only 15 minutes later they spotted land in the distance. Luffy jumped to the bow of the ship, and enjoyed the ride, yelling out that he could see Arlong Park from here to the other two. The building, several stories high and Arlong's Jolly Roger at the top, was conspicuously placed at the coast to show that they had no fear of the law, and where the pool on the outside was linked to the outer seas with a pair of steel gates that kept it closed. Luffy yelled excitedly from the front and yelled at the large cow to pick up the pace. "I feel sorry for it," Yosaku said with his hand on his chin. Sanji's kick must have really taken its toll. The monstrous cow suddenly began to turn away from Arlong Park and headed more to the right of it. "Not that way," Luffy yelled as he pointed back to the building, "your other left." "To the building, stupid." The cow ignored him and kept going in the wrong direction as Luffy continued to laugh in excitement as they headed straight for the shoreline. The cow then crashed into the shore with such force that when the sea cow hit, it knocked itself out and launched the little boat right into the air so that it was sent soaring across the island. "Oh, it's almost like we're flying," Luffy exclaimed happily. "We are flying, you moron," Sanji yelled as he and Yosaku clung on. "No, we're falling," Yosaku screamed. Luffy gave a scream of delight as they descended into the forest and started to slide across the ground like a skatewood on ice. "Landing successful," Luffy cried happily. But Luffy suddenly stopped laughing and was shouting out, "Hey Zoro!" The swordsman was standing there staring at them with a gaping mouth. The boat crashed into him, but the pain didn't last long however as they finally burst through the trees, over some wetlands, and they finally crashed right into a high cliff, destroying the boat. Eventually, they tried to get out of the wreckage. As the smoke and dust of the crash disappeared, Luffy's voice was calling out, "Awesome. We're here, guys." After dusting off his hat, he was standing up and looking around eagerly as a muffled voice beneath the boards. "What the heck?" Zoro forced the boards off him, screaming out at them all, "Were you doing?" "What do you mean?" Luffy asked innocently as he stood up. Sanji was still sitting on a crate, also a mess, but didn't seem to have moved from his seat. Yosaku on the other hand was in the background, his legs up in the air as the rest of him was buried in the debris. "We're here to pick up Nami, duh," Luffy went on as if it was obvious. "How come you haven't found her yet?" He paused and thought as if he just remembered something. "Oh yeah, and what about Usopp and Johnny?" But then Zoro's eyes suddenly widened as the mention of Usopp. "Usopp," he exclaimed as he stood up. "Oh no, come on, we gotta hurry." He started to run off. "Why? What's wrong?" Luffy asked after him. "That idiot was caught by Arlong," he explained quickly. "We gotta hurry before they kill him. He's already dead," a familiar voice stated for them. Jumping at the voice, they looked up in time to see Johnny slowly coming towards them. He was looking tired and out of breath as tears fell from his eyes. "What?" Zoro exclaimed as he came towards them. "We're too late," Johnny continued numbly as he fell to his knees in front of them. "Big bro Usopp is dead." Johnny punched the ground bitterly and cried out, "Nami murdered him." "You can't be serious," Yosaku cried out. But it was Luffy who was looking furious, shouting out, "That's a lie." "Yeah, it's true," Johnny exclaimed as he fell back to the ground and sat cross-legged. "She was a traitor all along. She's been winning Arlong's favor so she could have the treasure buried in Kokoyashi village all for herself." He slammed his hand on the ground. "That woman's just a cold-hearted killer. She won't stop till she gets what she wants. Nami had us fooled the entire." But Luffy wouldn't hear any more of it. He charged again and screamed out that Johnny was a liar as he grabbed him by his collar and shook him so violently that he even let his hat fall off. "Say another word and you'll regret it." "Easy Luffy, this has nothing to do with Johnny," Zoro said in a calm voice. Johnny turned his head. "Go on, believe whatever you want. But I know what I saw. Nami killed big bro Usopp." "Shut your mouth," Luffy yelled as he shook Johnny again, refusing to believe anything he said. His pupils had taken on a slit, feral appearance. Never in a million years would Nami kill Usopp. She wouldn't do that to her friends. But I saw it," Johnny stammered out as Luffy looked like he was ready to throw a punch. But then another familiar voice spoke up in a contemptuous way. "What was that about friends, Luffy?" They looked up to see Nami was standing on the road. She had changed into a green spotted shirt and was now sporting a tattoo on her shoulder of a saw-nosed shark turned to the left with the tail curving inward. Around the shark is a semi-oval with 3 curves emitting from it. She stood there with her staff in her hands, arms folded, and staring at them all as if they were strangers who were bugging her. "Nami," Luffy exclaimed in surprise as he dropped Johnny, calming down almost at once and his appearance went back to normal. She didn't answer for a moment as her eyes narrowed coldly, and they all had their eyes widen in surprise. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice bored, as if she couldn't care less for the answer. "What are we doing here?" "You're our friend," Luffy said in surprise, "we came to get you." He picked up his hat, as she just jeered at him. "What a pest," she said. "Nami?" Luffy questioned, wondering as she spoke in the same cold voice. "Friends, huh? Don't make me laugh. You're just pathetic enough to deserve each other," she said with a sneer that made her look quite unlike herself. "Damn you, you killed him. I watched you do it." Johnny yelled angrily, pointing a shaking finger at her, "and now, big bro Usopp is gone." "Yep, that's right. So why don't you kill me, get your revenge?" Nami said without batting an eye. "What?" gasped Johnny, who seemed stunned that she answered him so causally. "Word to the wise, fellas," she said sarcastically, "because of your friend's stupidity." She looked to Zoro and rolled her eyes and explained, "Arlong is preparing to kill Zoro along with his entire crew. And I don't care about how monstrously strong you guys think you are. You're no match for the real monsters." She played with the staff on her shoulder, and that was when they all noticed the thick bandage around her hand. "I promise you, you stay on this island, you will die. So you have a choice to make between life and death." Nami finally finished as Zoro was now growling angrily at her. Sanji on the other hand was looking love-struck once again and cried out, "Her heartless face is so hot." He waved his arms excitedly as he swooned. "Hi Nami, it's me Sanji. Let's run away together." "Can it, Romeo? This isn't the time or place for that." Zoro yelled in annoyance at him. "Excuse me," Sanji challenged. "Love is like a hurricane. So back off." But Zoro was no longer listening as he turned his back to him and looked directly at Nami, something that ticked him off. "Hey, look at me when I'm talking to you." He was ignored as Zoro demanded to know where Usopp was. "With the fishes," she answered, and some of the crew shivered at that. "Dang it," he yelled as he pulled out his one sword, "cut the crap." He looked ready to attack her, but Sanji stood in the way and Zoro had to dodge the kick aimed at his face. "How sad, a swordsman attacking a lady?" he asked him coldly. "Idiot." Zoro growled at Sanji, "Can't you see what's happening here? You're starting to tick me off." Sanji just laughed. "If someone stopped me that easily, I'd be mad too." "What?" Zoro demanded hotly. "You should watch your mouth. I'll say whatever I want, jerkwad." Sanji growled right back, and it looked like they were going to have a fight as Yosaku was now trying to get them to stop from fighting. "Big bros, we're all in this together, okay?" he yelled. "This is no time to fight." "Your pal's right," Nami agreed darkly. "Now quit your bickering and leave while you still can. You outsiders have no right to butt into this island's affairs. Don't you get it yet? The only reason I got close to you idiots was so that I could rob you of everything you had. But now that you're broke, it looks like your dream's dead. So go, take your ship. Go on, find a navigator dumb enough to join you and go to the Grand Line. Continue on your quest to find the One Piece or whatever," she went on before she pointed her staff at them all. "Just leave here. You're an eyesore." Johnny and Yosaku growled furiously at her, looking like they wanted to attack. Convinced that she had scared them away, Nami sighed and her eyes were now being hidden by her bangs as she told them all goodbye. But there, her voice had changed. It was no longer cold or scolding. It was sad. Luffy just looked at her with a blank stare. "Nami," he said softly. For a few more seconds he stood there before he closed his eyes and fell back onto the ground. "Big bro Luffy," Johnny exclaimed in surprise. "Sleepy," Luffy stated. "Sleep," Johnny exclaimed in disbelief. "Right now, in the middle of the road?" Yosaku questioned him. "Well, I'm pretty tired," Luffy answered coolly before he yawned. "I'm not gonna butt in their affairs, not interested. But I'm not leaving either. Night." Yosaku's jaw fell open, unable to believe what he was hearing. "Big bro," Johnny stuttered, and even Zoro face-palmed himself at those words. Nami seemed to snap at this. She lost all coldness in her expression and she was now shaking with rage, and she finally screamed out, "Whatever. Just go ahead and die." And without a backward glance she turned and went running away as fast as she could, as if afraid to stay near them any longer. When Luffy awoke to the yelling of Sanji and Zoro, he gave a shout of surprise as he rushed to Usopp, who was both alive and a mess. His face was smashed in from both sides as if he got stuck between two boulders, and blood was dripping down from his mouth and crooked nose. "Usopp," he screamed out, shaking him a little. "Did Nami do all this to you?" Luffy shouted, his eyes wide as he continued to shake him. Sanji answered by pointing to Zoro and explained, "Sorry, Zoro, and I did that." "No, you did," Zoro disagreed darkly. Usopp was slowly coming to and had to focus hard on Luffy. "Luffy, you're here now?" "Yep, sure am," Luffy answered, sounding truly relieved that Usopp wasn't dead. "I'm here too." "Hi there," Sanji greeted, and Usopp seemed to have instantly recovered as he stood up and began yelling, "One of these days I'll kill you." "Oh, you just made a full recovery," Sanji said, greatly impressed as he clapped him on the shoulder. "Shut up," he yelled, knocking his hand away and looking ready to go into a shouting match before Zoro reminded them of something. "Oh, and by the way, we kinda heard you were dead." Killed by Nami, he stated causally, as if they had been told that he went out to the store instead of getting killed. Usopp blinked, as if remembering that as well. Stupid Johnny, Luffy growled, getting up, he was sprouting nonsense that entire time. Well, Usopp stated, his anger gone and looking thoughtful, in a way, it is the truth. Blinking in surprise they looked at him. But I'm alive, he went on frowning, cause you see, she actually saved my life. They looked completely lost as he explained everything. The fishmen had captured him and were going to kill him, but he made things worse when he asked Nami for help, which made the fishmen suspicious of her. He then used a smoke star to try to escape, but Nami intercepted him and announced that she would kill him herself. However, instead, she stabbed her own hand to make it look like she killed him before she kicked him into the ocean so that he could swim away. When they told him that Johnny said that he saw the whole thing, Usopp supposed that Johnny must have been watching from a safe distance and was tricked like the fishmen. So that's it, Usopp said, finishing up telling them, that's how Nami pretended to kill me and make sure I could escape from Arlong Park. He looked up at them and finished, looks to me like she's got some sort of hidden motive for hanging out with a bunch of renegade fishmen. Fine, Zoro said, his arms still folded, what next? Are we gonna destroy Arlong Park? But Usopp was waving his hands around in front of them, trying to get their attention before they did something they'd regret. Whoa, hang on just a second. He said loudly, don't you think we better find out what's going on with Nami first? Suddenly, another voice spoke up, it's no use either way. Looking up, the group saw a young woman was there with short, light purple hair and an even tan skin. Her right arm and chest were heavily tattooed very similar to Nami's, but she was giving them all a dark and stern look. No matter what you guys do, Arlong's rule won't come to an end, she informed them. Nojiko, Usopp exclaimed in surprise. Who's she? Luffy questioned him. Nami's big sister, Usopp stated. Sanji was already smitten as he swooned. What? Nami's sister? No wonder she's so hot. What do you mean that it's no use? Zoro questioned her. Just trust me. Don't get yourselves involved here, Nojiko said bluntly, and for those who haven't met her could tell that she was just as stubborn and strong-willed as her little sister. And leave poor Nami alone. I'll explain the situation. Situation, Sanji repeated in confusion. Usopp was now giving her his complete attention. Do you mean that you can tell us why she joined up with Arlong's group? He asked. Yeah, Nojiko admitted, folding her arms. And if that doesn't get you to leave, I don't know what will. I'll pass, Luffy said as he walked past Nojiko and Usopp called for him to wait, but Luffy barely paid attention, I don't care about her past. Even as Sanji called out to know where he was going, he just kept going. For a walk, he answered coolly. A walk? Usopp yelled after him, do you mean you're not gonna listen to this? Nope, he answered back before leaving the area. The Chimera boy walked for a while until he ended up on the edge of the village. But suddenly he saw a group of Marines closely following a man covered in scars and a spinning pinwheel on his hat. Luffy stopped walking and watched them walk past him. Luffy watched after them for a while when he said to himself, that pinwheel is so cool. Soon, Luffy was leaning his back up against a tree and staring up at the sky with a thoughtful expression. A pinwheel, huh? Whispered Luffy's voice and brought them back to the matter at hand. When they looked, he blinked before he suddenly smiled to himself. I just thought of a new move. But all too soon there was a commotion not too far away and soon there was a gathering of people with the man called Genzo calling out for a doctor. Genzo, what is it? A man with a white coat and sunglasses yelled as he came running over and she stared at him as well. Nojiko's been shot, Genzo explained as he and Nami gently lowered a body to the ground. When Genzo explained, the villagers were all horrified. The Marines, the doctor repeated in disbelief. As Luffy spotted Nami and got up to head towards her. Her face was hidden by her hair and she was shaking hard with her teeth grounded together. As he got nearer, her sister's head was lying in her lap and she was holding her very gently. Nojiko, the doctor asked as he checked her. I'm alright, Nojiko whispered back through gritted teeth. Arlong has been working with those damn Marines, Genzo told them all and the doctor looked up at him in outrage. He's been lying to Nami for the last 8 years. He explained, he never intended to honor their agreement at all. That monster. A villager yelled out furiously, and soon there were shouts that were filled with anger and shock. Oh, no, a woman whispered, horrified at the thought, that means. That scoundrel, he lied to our Nami. Someone else shouted, but Nami just carefully moved Nojiko's head from her lap as she got up, her fingers curling into tight fists. Nami, the doctor whispered as she stood there. Hey Nami, Luffy greeted happily, waving as he came up behind her, what's up? Need help with anything? Instead of answering she turned and glared at him so fiercely that the smile was wiped off his face. Her eyes weren't the cold ones she had seen before, they were full of rage that seemed to burn a hole in whatever she stared at. Why are you still here? She screamed at him as she grabbed him by the front of his shirt and pulled up to her face and continued to yell into his fearful face, stay out of my business. Just get away from our island. Tears were beginning to burn and she then threw him down to the ground as she went running off before she lost all control. Luffy picked himself up from the ground and went towards a nearby tree and leaned up against it much like before. He was looking deeply annoyed as he muttered darkly, "What's her problem?" And here he sounded like a little boy would when faced with a girl on the playground who didn't want to play with him. Luffy continued to lean against the tree as the other 3 crewmates arrived together. All of them were close together so that they could see what was going on, but out of the way so that they couldn't be seen. Here, what looked like the entire village was out holding weapons, mostly things like clubs and homemade spears that were knives tied to staffs. There wasn't even a gun among them as they all gathered around, with Genzo cheering them on to take up arms. 8 long years ago, Genzo told the townspeople, "We promised we wouldn't live our lives in vain. No matter the pain and humiliation we had to endure under Arlong, we swore we would fight the long fight so that Nami could meet their demands. But they lied," he shouted out, getting them all riled up. They never intended to keep their end of the deal. Instead they stole our only chance at freedom. So now, his eyes were bloodshot as he finally called out, "We should make those filthy fishmen pay for the years they manipulated a kind young girl. Am I right? Yeah, let's do this." Someone yelled out, "We've always been ready to fight those monsters." Someone else yelled, "Time to show those lousy, stinkin' fishmen what we're made of." More shouts came and they were all ready to go. The 4 straw hats were all watching calmly. They looked like they wanted to join in, but something seemed to be holding them back. But what that was became clear when they heard someone shouting for them to stop. Looking up the road, they spotted Nami coming towards them with a big forced smile, but all present could tell she was fighting back tears as she came towards them. "Calm down. It's not that much money. I can make it back in no time. I'll take care of it. Don't worry. It'll be easy this time, I'm used to it. I'll be fine," Nami said, still in that fake confident voice that fooled no one. "Just relax, it'll be okay. Hey, it's nothing compared to back then." She came in front of them. "Come on everyone, I'm perfectly fine." The straw hats each felt as if their insides were shriveling up at how hard she was trying. It was clear that she was still in denial, just trying to stop the people she loved so much from getting themselves killed. But Genzo wasn't fooled as he walked to her and embraced her tightly. She stood there frozen as tears fell from his eyes. "You've done enough," he said softly but firmly. "You have to know that there's no point now. You've struggled so hard, carrying our lives on your back this whole time. I can only imagine that joining them must have been more painful than getting stabbed in the heart. You fought very well, Genzo," Nami whispered in a broken voice as she also started to cry. Genzo pulled away, his hand firmly on her shoulder before he said, "Set yourself free from this village." Nami looked horrified at those words and she cried out, unable to believe what he was saying, "Genzo. Nami, do it," Nojiko encouraged, now wearing a heavy bandage around her shoulder and arm. "What, Nojiko?" Nami yelled as she looked around for some support, but it was clear from the rest of their faces that the entire town agreed. Nojiko gave her a brave look, no fear in her face as she said, "You're an exceptional young woman, and you have a dream. Everyone, listen," Nami yelled desperately, still trying to stop them. "I won't let you go." And to some surprise, she pulled out a knife and pointed it at them with shaking hands. "Just stay right there. I'm not going to let anyone else get hurt by these monsters." Her eyes were pleading as she told them, "You'll all die." "We know that," Genzo told her as he grabbed hold of the knife and gripped it so hard that he was starting to bleed. She looked startled at that as the doctor also spoke up in a grim way, "Nami, it's no use, we've made up our minds." Still crying, she shook her head, not wanting to do it, but Genzo wasn't taking no for an answer. "Get out of the way." He finally yelled and she backed off, startled as he pulled out his sword and yelled to the people behind him, "Move out. We may not win, but we will give him hell." The doctor added, and without anyone showing any fear they charged off, past Nami, and heading towards Arlong Park. Nami just stood there, not moving as they ran past her before the knife fell from her limp hand and she fell to her knees. The young thief was shaking as she glared at the mark on her arm and dug her nails into it so hard that it looked like she might have ripped her own skin off. Tears fell as she stared at it and her eyes widened as she finally snapped. She hated that disgusting mark with so much loathing and detest and she couldn't stand to look at it anymore. And the tears of pure, uncovered feelings were smearing her face and falling fast as she grabbed the knife again into some of the straw hat's horror, she began to stab her arm. With each stab with the knife she screamed out the venomous name of the pirate who robbed her of her family and her dreams, the one who had given her so much hopelessness and hatred. She kept going and probably would have gone on until she either bled to death, or simply severed her entire arm. But then it stopped. Luffy had come over and grabbed hold of Nami's wrist and stopped her from another stab. She didn't move for a second before she slowly turned to see who it was. Luffy's face was blank, his eyes hidden by the shadow of his hat, but also letting her know that he wasn't going to let her hurt herself like this anymore. "Luffy," she whispered softly as her hand went limp a second time and she seemed to lose all strength as she let the blood-soaked knife fall onto the road. "What do you want?" Nami demanded in a choked-up voice. "You don't know anything about this. You don't know what has been happening on this island for the past 8 years." "Nope, I don't," Luffy answered honestly. She was shaking as her hands gripped handfuls of dirt as she cried softly. "This has nothing to do with you," she said louder. "I told you to leave this place." "Yep, you sure did," Luffy said, without any doubt. "So leave," Nami yelled as she threw a handful of dirt behind her. And with every word she threw more dirt, now desperate to get him to leave. "I told you to leave. Get out of here. Get out of here now. Go. Go away. Go. Go. Go." But she finally ran out of steam and openly cried out, sobbing and no longer trying to hold herself back as she let out all the feelings she kept inside for those 8 miserable years. Luffy didn't react at all as he watched, just standing there as she finally said the words that he had been waiting to say. At the end of her rope, she whispered, "Luffy." She looked back, tears in her eyes. "Help me," she finally begged. For a moment, Luffy didn't do anything. But then he silently took off his straw hat and placed it on her head, and for a moment the tears stopped flowing as he turned and walked a few steps away. "Of course," he answered, "that's what friends do." He suddenly stopped and took a deep breath before he screamed out at the top of his lungs. "He's gonna p-p-p-p-p-p-a-a-a-a-a-a-y-y-y-y-y-y-y-y." His words echoed around them and they could all feel the determination in that tone. He was going to clobber Arlong's even if it killed him. "Luffy," Nami said, her hand to her face as the tears continued to fall again. Only this time they were tears of happiness when she noticed the other 3 waiting for orders, all of them ready to fight. "Let's go," Luffy ordered. They all looked up. "Right," they said, and they left Nami there, not speaking a word to what they were going to do, but she didn't need it as she sobbed openly, her hand still on the straw hat. The 4 were all side by side as they walked along, no one speaking a word as they marched along the road. They were ready to fight for each other merely for the sake of defending a single friend as they got nearer to the gate. Thankfully, the villagers hadn't even made it past that point. Johnny and Yosaku were there, both looking severely beat up. When they neared the villagers, Luffy told them all to step aside, and they parted almost at once without a word. Zoro smirked wider as they walked past them all. As they stared in disbelief, it was worth it just to see the looks on their faces. Johnny and Yosaku moved aside respectfully as they got to the door. "Take them out, big bros." Yosaku cheered on. "Show them no mercy," Johnny added, holding up a fist and grinning. Luffy didn't even smile, as he cracked his knuckles and held up his own fist. "Oh, don't worry, I intend to." Before they knew it, he pulled his fist back and punched the door enough times to make it seem as if a bomb went off as the front gate was smashed apart and exploded. Through the rubble, they could see fishmen of all shapes and types staring at them. And there, sitting in a lawn chair, was Arlong. Arlong was large and muscular. He was a light blue saw shark fishman and his nose proved that for its saw-like shape. His black hair sprouted from the back of his neck and reached down past his shoulders, but they could also make out a shark's fin on his back, and the gills on both the sides of his neck. Sporting the tattoo of the Sun Pirates on the left side of his chest, and the identical mark that he had given Nami was on his arm. His eyes were wide in shock as he looked at him. "What the? Now, which one of you is Arlong?" Luffy asked threateningly, holding up his fist and glaring at each one of them, daring them to speak. The fishmen all glared at him, all of them outraged that they had come here on their turf. Once the shock was over, Arlong leaned back in the chair, not believing that he was worth the trouble. "Arlong," he repeated darkly. "Well, that just so happens that I'm Arlong." Luffy walked to them, his head held up high and without a fear in the world as he marched in. However, Arlong seemed to be different from the other fishmen. He was calm and relaxed, but there was something dangerous in him that seemed to earn the respect of the rest of the crew. Not sure why he thought he deserved it. "Good," Luffy said as he gave him an empty look. "I'm Luffy." "Luffy," Arlong repeated, obviously not recognizing the name, and clearly wondering just what he was doing here. "What are you supposed to be?" "A pirate," Luffy answered bluntly. "Hold it right there," one of the fishmen said as he and another attempted to cut Luffy off. "Where do you think you're going? You wanna talk to the boss?" The other asked. "Well, you gotta talk to us first." "Get it?" They smirked evilly as they put their hands on his shoulders, but Luffy banged their heads together and knocked them out as he told them to all move it. The other fishmen looked startled at that as he walked right up to Arlong. "So what does a pirate want with me?" Arlong asked causally, though there was a hint of irritation in his tone. Luffy stopped in front of Arlong. He glared at him for just a moment longer before he seized his wrist and threw it back, and by the time he swung it back, he sucker punched Arlong so hard that he was launched from his chair and hit the ground, rolling over several times before was smashed through the wall. As Arlong pushed himself from the rubble, everyone was staring, slack-jaw, at Luffy. "Who the heck are you?" Arlong demanded furiously. Luffy's face was filled with nothing but fury, his face making look like some kind of monster as steam actually came out of his nose. "That's for making our navigator cry," he yelled at him. Sanji came running up behind Luffy. After this declaration of war, the fishmen started to attack Luffy, but the cook easily took them all out with a few kicks. "Back off, you're out of your league," Sanji yelled, kicking their asses and walked on to stand next to Luffy so that he could scold him for going in by himself, which Luffy responded not to worry about him, and that he could take care of these guys on his own. You fool, Sanji said in annoyance, I never said anything about being worried, I just don't want you hogging all the actions. Oh, Luffy said in understanding. Well, Usopp said nervously, also coming up, I just want to let you guys know that I don't mind it if you hog it all. Zoro came up and rolled his eyes, I see that you're raring to go, as usual. As soon as he saw him, an octopus fishman named Hachi cried out in anger that Zoro tricked him before. But soon Hachi screamed in fear when he saw that Usopp was alive and a ray fishman, who was named Karubi snarled that Nami was a traitor. Arlong began to laugh and sent waves of cold down the villagers' spines. A pirate. Of course, Arlong said, highly amused, this is all starting to make sense now. You've been after Nami this whole time. He burst out laughing again, louder than ever, the girl is mine and I'm not giving her up. Hachi also laughed as he walked up confidently, a bunch of idiots like you aren't worth Arlong's time. He declared, we know how to deal with you. And he blew through his long mouth like a trumpet. Suddenly, the giant sea cow appeared from the waves, still sporting a giant, swollen lump on its head. Hachi then greeted him as Momo. It leaned forward to see what he wanted, but it stopped dead as soon as it saw Luffy and Sanji there. Oh, look who's back, Luffy said, folding his arms. Seems he's a friend of the fishmen, Sanji nodded in agreement. Momo was now crying as he saw them and mooing softly to himself. Momo turned and was about to leave, still crying as Hachi yelled after him to come back. But the sea cow didn't stop until Arlong told it to. Just a few words from him had apparently scared him enough to want to attack, too bad for him that Luffy was ready for it. Luffy stuck his legs firmly into the ground and transformed his arms until they resembled the tentacles of an octopus. He then used them to grab Momo's horns, showing off his powers. As everyone else freaked out, Zoro yelled at Sanji and Usopp to get back as Luffy yelled out, time for something new. And with his great strength, he was actually able to pick up Momo and was spinning him around, just like a giant pinwheel. Everything in their path, fishmen and the building behind them was either being taken out or destroyed. By the time that he was finished, there was only Arlong, Hachi, and two other fishmen who were left standing while the front of Arlong Park was smashed to pieces. But Luffy focused only on Momo. In the end he was finally able to throw the sea cow as far away as he could from them while the rest of Arlong's crew lay out cold all around them. Everyone was staring at him in shock. Once he caught his breath and transformed his arms back to normal, Luffy was yelling out, alright that's it Arlong, I'm done playing games with you, I didn't come here to beat down all your cronies. I came here to teach you a lesson. He pointed at him in a challenging way and yelled, so step up. They looked to Arlong. Though he was still smiling, his eyes were now angry. Oh, I will, don't worry. Actually I was just thinking about how painfully I'll end your life. He said this in what sounded like a purr, but they weren't sure Luffy heard this as the other three straw hats gathered around him and told him off for that stunt. That was the worst plan ever. Sanji yelled, kicking his head. Yeah, were you trying to kill all of us too? Usopp yelled in his ear. The citizens behind them however were amazed and were cheering them on. They even heard the doctor scream out, I just can't believe there's a human who can throw that giant monster. What are you doing? Usopp screamed with bloodshot eyes as Luffy was now trying to get his feet out of the ground, are you ruining something else? Luffy just looked down at his feet in polite confusion. How dare you hurt our brothers? Hachi demanded, waving his 6 arms around crazily. Very well, Karubi added, it seems like we must join in on this fight. Now you'll get an education on the inferiority of your species. Chu, the remaining fishman with the long lips, who was named Chu, spoke up. Oh, really? Zoro smirked, I'd like to see that. Arlong chuckled to himself as Karubi and Chu both declared that they'd take them out for him. Please let us kill these weaklings. Hachi yelled. Alright, Arlong answered agreeably, they're all yours. Sanji and Zoro were both looking confident, however, Luffy was looking to the others and said a little nervously, guys. There's something I should tell you. But just as Sanji mentioned the best way to cook octopus, Hachi attacked them with an ink jet, squirting black ink at them. Though the other 3 were able to dodge it, Luffy stayed behind and was quickly doused with ink from head to toe. Because of that, he was now blinded, and Zoro was yelling at him to why he didn't dodge it. Hachi then picked up a large chunk of the building that Luffy had destroyed when he threw around Momo, and turned back to Luffy, his attention all too clear. Usopp was screaming for him to run, but then came the sad truth, Luffy couldn't run, his feet were stuck. But you're the one who stuck them into the ground in the first place. Usopp yelled. Zoro smacked himself in the face frustrated. Thankfully, when Hachi threw the broken stone on top of him, Sanji stepped in and destroyed it with a single kick. You're such a pain, he hissed in annoyance as Luffy cheered him on. But then he smirked again as he confessed, looks like I picked one hell of an idiot to be my captain. We all did, Zoro added in light amusement. Sanji added, though in truth, our idiot captain is far better than a gang who prey on a lady. A lady huh? Karubi asked skeptically, huh? You rush into certain death for one lousy girl. I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Sanji glared at him. Lousy girl, he repeated, and they could hear the anger in his voice. If you insult Nami one more time, I can promise you'll go from fishman to fish sticks. He took out his cigarette and said threateningly, got that? Kurubi didn't look concerned nor the least bit impressed. Your skills are quite exceptional, he admitted after a minute, for a human. But I must admit chivalry from a pirate seems just a little fake. Sanji sneered back at him as he admitted smugly, I'm dead good at what I do, he said as he put the cigarette back into his mouth. And I guarantee that there's nothing fake about my desire to help a beautiful lady in need. Sanji and Kurubi faced off as Usopp tried to pull Luffy's feet out, as the monkey-brained captain started picking his nose. Hachi picked up more stone and was determined to go after him, but Zoro was one step ahead of him. He pointed his sword threateningly at him, taunting Hachi to come after him instead. It worked. Furious Hachi yelled out, you're Zoro. I forgot. He threw his stone at him which Zoro dodged easily as he finished yelling, you can't get away tricking me. That stuff's old news octopus man, Zoro said, holding up the white blade. I personally don't care what reasons you have for wanting to kill me, the situation has changed. You see, the tables have turned. Holding his blade and carefully unsheathing it so that no one could miss the gleaming blade, you're not the hunters anymore, understand? Now it's you fish freaks who are being hunted. Luffy. Usopp screamed out at his moron of a captain as he just realized something. Use your powers to transform your legs. That way they'll become unstuck, he explained. Luffy bopped his fist into the palm of his other hand and you could literally see the light bulb go off over his head. With a minute of concentration, Luffy's legs seemed to increase in mass and become grayish like that of an elephant or a rhino's, and the resulting pressure cracked the pavement around his legs, allowing him to easily pull his now human legs out. Usopp cheered but then noticed the last fishman, Chu, who had killing Usopp in his sights. However, Usopp went running off past all the citizens so that Chu was distracted for a moment. Once Chu realized that they were all there, he was planning on killing them all as well, but Usopp sent an exploding star at him from a safe distance away. Did you think that it would be easy? Usopp challenged him. You're dealing with me now. Enough. Chu yelled, losing his cool completely, and went charging after him. I'm going to get rid of you right now. As they watched them go running off, Genzo was asking who he was. Brave 1 minute and cowardly the next, the doctor said confused, he's a baffling man. Arlong finally got up from where he sat and walked towards them. You morons are a pathetic sight to behold, he growled, now sounding ticked off. I'm sick of watching this, so get out of my way. But sir, Kurubi said quickly, there's no need for you to go on a rampage, think of Arlong Park. Don't worry, Arlong said, I know. I'll make sure this will be over quick. Luffy charged at the approaching fishman and his arms became scaled as he balled his hand into a fist. Going for a clothesline, Luffy cried out, lizard lariat. However, Arlong simply opened his mouth wide and bit into Luffy's arm, causing him to cry out in pain. Fortunately for Luffy, the hard scales on his arm prevented a majority of the damage. The worst of it was a few small lines of blood under some broken scales. Growling like an animal, Luffy used his other arm to punch the evil pirate across the face. Arlong cried out as the rough scales grazed his face, but like with Luffy, his rough skin prevented a majority of the damage. You stupid human. Arlong raged as he grabbed Luffy by the head with both hands and prepared to slam his face with a rising knee. Thinking fast, a hard shell started to coat the Chimera pirate's forehead, blocking the blow. Phew, I'm glad Hercules beetles have such hard heads. Luffy sighed in relief, confident that blow would have definitely hurt. His relief didn't last long, however, as he gave a yelp when Arlong tried to spear him with his saw-like nose. Gritting his teeth, Luffy shouted out, let's see how you like it. As his nose suddenly gained the long horn of a rhino. Rhino rapier, he cried as he used the horn to stab Arlong right in the shoulder. The shark gave a cry of pain before he gritted his sharp teeth and pulled Luffy out of his shoulder. Curse you, let's see how well you can fly. Arlong screamed in rage. Grabbing Luffy by the head, Arlong got into a pitcher stance and threw the animal man with all his monstrous strength. Luffy cried out as he was flung far into the air. He sailed out of Arlong Park and was far out over the open water before he was able to slow down enough to transform into a seahawk and started to fly back towards the island. Unfortunately, due to how far he was flung and his own bad sense of direction, it still took Luffy a good 15 minutes before the park was back in his sights. When he flew to where he started off at, a bad sight greeted him. It was a mess, the whole battlefield was mostly destroyed, and Arlong was on his feet, holding a wounded Zoro by the throat. Suddenly something was sent flying high in the sky, and Luffy's voice was screaming out, I'm back. Luffy saved Zoro by switching places with him and actually throwing him off into the distance. Luffy, he was now launching several attacks against Arlong. They seemed to be inefficient against him, though Luffy claimed it was just warm-up. Arlong pulling himself from the side of the building that Luffy knocked him through. What a bunch of fools, he hissed menacingly. You think you can actually beat me? You were better off flying over the ocean. No, I don't think so, Luffy answered back, still stretching out. I like it down here, yep. Arlong glared up at him before he snarled, do you not understand my anger? He then got up on his feet, I saw my brothers crushed like worms. You'll realize soon enough. You should have quit fighting long ago. Luffy. Usopp cried from a hole in the wall and they were surprised to see him there with blood dripping down from his face. I got your back, pal. If he loses, Sanji's voice said out and they looked up to see him soaking wet, and leaning up against the wall with Genzo and Nojiko. 1. He was trying to light a wet match before he just gave up. Then we'll all, he flicked the match away, die. Yeah, Genzo agreed softly as they watched the match go flying off, almost as if in slow motion, we will. If that happens, Nojiko also added softly, it's the end of the East Blue too. After a few minutes of silence, Arlong finally spoke. Do you know what the biggest difference between you and me is? He asked conceitedly. The nose, guessed Luffy, and as a joke he turned his into that of a saw shark's too. The jaw, Luffy then suggested, baring his now sharp teeth before then held up his hand, webbing. As webbing grew between them, Arlong's eyes turned white in rage. Species. He screamed and he lunged forward to try and bite him, but Luffy easily dodged it. Again and again Arlong tried to bite, like a wild animal, but Luffy moved back. They went at it until Arlong had finally grabbed hold of his head and slammed him against a pillar. He would have bitten him here, but Luffy shrunk into a mouse that got out of the way so that Arlong bit the pillar, and shattered it into pieces. Luffy snuck away from the collapsing building. Arlong turned back to sneer at him as if he just proved a valid point. You see, he asked him mockingly, this is the inherent power of fishmen. While you may be able to look like a fishman, you are but a pale imitation. I feel sorry for you humans for having been created with such limited powers. He slowly walked towards him, still taunting him the whole time. We've been on a different level since the beginning of time. You are inferior, it only makes sense for you to bow before us. He stopped and stood before him as he proclaimed, you're so weak. Your presence on this planet is deplorable. Don't you think your time has come to an end? Arlong demanded again. He chuckled, as if he told a funny joke, I'll show you. Show you the real difference between you and I. Luffy just smiled as he turned back to human. Sure, he told him pleasantly, go ahead. There's no way I'm losing to a big fish. Because, I'm gonna be king of the pirates. Arlong picked up a piece of the stone pillar and tossed it up and down like a ball in his hands. King of the pirates. Don't be foolish. A puny human like you couldn't possibly conquer the Grand Line. You can't even crush a pillar with your jaws. And like that he crushed the rock with little effort. Yeah, so what? Demanded Luffy. He then went and broke through the stone with his fist. Stop your bragging. You aren't that awesome. Besides, smashing stone with your teeth's not that smart, Luffy added, holding up a fist. That's right. You're the best big bro. Tell him like it is. Yosaku cheered on in the back. Yeah, yelled Johnny, also agreeing, what idiot bites a rock anyway? Veins stood out on Arlong's neck. Fools. He yelled out furiously, knowing that he was being mocked. That's not the point. Every member of the human race is ignorant and weak. Arlong pointed at Luffy and demanded, what good are you if you can't even pull yourself out of the water? He then flew at him for another bite as Luffy dodged it and was able to grab hold of a couple swords that lay discarded. As a matter of fact, Luffy said, pulling the swords back and then getting right into Arlong's face, I'm worthless without my friends to help me out. Luffy chuckled as he held out the swords and took everyone by surprise, thinking that he knew how to use them as he swung and attacked. But he wasn't really using them, just swinging them around much like how Zoro did when completely losing it against Mihawk. Arlong effortlessly broke the swords, but it turns out that it was a ruse. With Arlong overconfident over destroying the swords, Luffy delivered a powerful blow shattering his teeth. Luffy stood up and thought it all over for a moment. You're right, I don't know how to use a sword, you bastard. He yelled after the brief pause. I'm a terrible sailor. I definitely can't cook, and I can't even lie. Without my friends to help me I would have been dead a long time ago. Arlong chuckled from where he laid his hand over the place where Luffy struck. So you fully admit how pathetic you are. You may be a fool, he said as he sat up, but you're certainly honest. How much your crew feel tolerating this idiocy day in and day out. I bet they're sick of it. But that makes me wonder why they tried so desperately to save their half-wit leader, Arlong finished. Luffy glared at him as Arlong held his hand to his mouth, still to his broken teeth. Someone like you doesn't deserve a ship or a crew. What good is a helpless whelp of a captain to them? Arlong finished, what can you possibly do? I can clobber you, Luffy responded confidently. Usopp and the rest of villagers cheered him on as Nami smiled. Even Sanji said irritably, well, get to it, you numbskull. Cheer all you want, but it won't change a thing. Arlong shouted out, and within seconds he regrew his teeth. Luffy gasped out. He's got new teeth, he said in shock. I'm a shark, Arlong reminded him, new teeth will grow one after the other. And with each set, I will grow stronger and stronger. Within seconds, his teeth had regrown and, using this, he pulled his teeth out to create handheld castanet weapons for each hand. And when he attacked, they thought the worse for a minute as he laughed hysterically at each attack, one after another. However, it took him some time for him to realize that Luffy used one of his crew as a human shield the whole time. Enraged, Arlong hollered at such a dirty tactic and screamed about how he dared to use his own crewmate as a shield. What are you talking about? Luffy asked, as if he was being scolded by his parents for something that someone else did. You're the one who attacked me, don't you remember? Don't move a muscle, Arlong warned, clinking the teeth together, animal boy. Luffy thought it over before he said, say, now that's an idea. Again Luffy was forced to dodge it before he was able to get in another kick. When he came back up though, his body was much bulkier as his skin took on a bluish sheen complete with gills, webbed digits, and a small dorsal fin. Luffy grinned, showing rows of razor teeth similar to Arlong's. Let's see who's got the bigger bite. The shark boy declared as he rushed at the enemy fishman. The two got into a grappling contest for a few minutes before Luffy saw his opening. Rearing his head back, the shark-like man was able to sink his teeth into Arlong's side, causing him to yell in pain. Snarling like a mad dog, Arlong was able to get Luffy's arm inside his mouth. Big bro's gonna get his arm bitten off. Yosaku screamed and Nami looked horrified. But to everyone's surprise, Luffy reached up and grabbed Arlong's hair. In the end, he was able to pull him down so that he could slam his foot into his head to get him to let go. They both fell to the ground exhausted, lying on their backs, both now injured. Arlong had gotten up, and quick as a flash, he jumped for the sea. Luffy also got up as he shrank back down to normal and pulled the teeth out of his side. He was already looking around just as a dark fin appeared above the water. Nami was screaming for him to look at the water. Wow, a shark, he said eagerly, and the Straw Hat sighed. Really? He hadn't noticed who it was. Usopp almost fell over and yelled, no. That's Arlong. The fin suddenly disappeared and they were waiting for him to come out almost anxiously. Luffy got ready to dive in after him, when suddenly Arlong launched himself like a torpedo. His attack shark dart's increasing speed was able to break through all solid objects. Luffy was sent flying and crashed painfully on the ground as Arlong went smashing through an upper floor of the building. Through the hole in the building, he stood there, still cocky. Wow, I'm impressed you could dodge that. Arlong proclaimed as Luffy looked up. Good job. But the longer you evade death, the more painful it will be. The fishman dashed down with another attack and landed like an arrow with his nose embedded in the concrete, posed there perfectly on his nose. Thankfully Luffy had been able to dodge it in time and Arlong's nose eventually broke through the solid stone. Pulling out to face Luffy, he went flying towards him again. Luffy had no time to transform into one of his quicker or sturdier forms. He narrowly missed a death shot, but there was still blood splattered. After a third failed attack, though Luffy was sent flying, Arlong dove back into the sea again. The others were all screaming for him to hide before Arlong came back out as Luffy regained his footing, but he was shaking in anger as he declared that he wasn't going to hide this time. Stop being so stupid. Sanji yelled at him angrily, go run for cover before you become a target. No way. Luffy yelled back stubbornly, I'm not running anywhere. I'm gonna catch him and break his nose. He turned to the water and yelled, come on. You shark. Didn't you hear from us to go somewhere and hide? Usopp yelled at him furiously, you barely escaped his last attacks. One direct hit will kill you. Luffy, listen to us. Go and hide. Ignoring him, Luffy dived into the water, much to the shock and horror of the spectators. The water was still for a moment before waves started to pick up, as if something was thrashing under the surface. Bubbles came to the surface and before anyone could blink, Arlong was shooting out of the water once more like a rocket. However, he wasn't alone this time. A black dolphin, one with a curious scar under the one eye, was quickly darting after the fleeing fishman. The dolphin was suddenly right on top of Arlong and it cried out in Luffy's voice, Dolphin Slam. With a mighty swing of his tail, Luffy was able to send Arlong flying right into the side of the main building. The wall easily shattered on impact as Luffy, now fully human, landed gracefully on the shore. Here, it was the last straw. Arlong snapped, and his eyes changed, to a wild, insane look, that's similar to a monster. Oh no, Sanji stated uneasily, it's the same expression that a sea king makes just before they snap. He must have snapped with Luffy's last attack. I guess he finally went over the edge, Zoro said as the red veins were standing out in those cold eyes, his head swirling around wildly, trying to find him. His eyes, Nami whispered, her hands to her face, I've never seen them like that. You wretched human, screamed Arlong as he grabbed hold of Luffy by the head and swung him around like a lasso before slamming him into the building. Luffy was sitting up. Whoa, that was crazy, he said to himself, it didn't really hurt but I can tell he's really like, matter. Arlong jumped towards him and then punched through the wall when Luffy hopped on cricket legs to safety. But judging how indifferent he was to this, they couldn't help but wonder if this was what Arlong had planned from the start. Now the fishman fumbled his hand around for a moment inside, he knew the building well enough to know exactly what he was reaching for. And when he pulled his hand out, they saw just what it was that they stared at it. It was a giant black pole with 6 saw-toothed patterned black blades, resembling a shark's saw-like teeth with a katana handle. The saw blade. Nami screamed. That thing's gigantic. Johnny screamed as Yosaku screamed in terror. With a battle cry, Arlong was now determined to end it as he jumped to the first roof with Luffy having to jump higher and higher to avoid it all. Up and up they climbed, with Arlong destroyed everything in his way. On the top floor Luffy had finally ran out of room, but then noticed the window next to him and went diving towards it, smashing through the window. Luffy came crashing through the window with Arlong screaming up that he no longer has a place to run. They were in a room that was filled with maps, thousands of them were scattered everywhere in stacks, some of them still hanging from the ceiling as they were left to dry while there were shelves full of books and tools. Luffy was up and was now trying to catch his breath. That was a little too close, he gasped. Arlong came walking through, stepping on the shards of the broken window and glared at Luffy, the saw-like blade still in his hand. There's nowhere else to run, Arlong said in a low voice. You and me, here, the highest level of Arlong Park. He grinned evilly, and they knew that he was planning something terrible. At last, the time of your death has come. But Luffy was looking around at this place. What is this room? Lots of paper. This isn't just any room, Arlong explained, this is the room where I had Nami draw all of her sea charts for me. This is Nami's room, Luffy questioned now looking around with a more focused look. These sea charts are all that she's worked on for 8 years, Arlong paused for a moment as he looked almost fondly at the maps. Just look around you. These maps are more valuable than any amount of treasure. You see, to us fishmen, collecting data about the ocean is a simple affair. But assembling that information into a usable chart is a difficult task. That's why we needed a navigator. In fact, that's the sole reason why I'm so keen on keeping that woman in my possession. She's absolutely brilliant. The accuracy of her charts is beyond comparison. Luffy continued to blankly look around at everything. But Arlong didn't seem to be expecting an answer. She's too good for human trash like you, he went on, her talents should be used solely to build up the mighty Arlong Empire. Arlong pointed the weapon at him, still grinning, now listen. Nami belongs to me. Is that so? Luffy's voice suddenly said. And you're interfering in our business, Arlong said smugly, you human scum. Luffy narrowed his eyes dangerously as the shark saw was now being pointed at his head. He then sneered as he said slowly and carefully so that he couldn't hope to miss his words, she's not your friend. Luffy sat there for a moment without saying anything. But then, I don't care, he answered, still staring defiantly at him. I don't care what you say, he said firmly as Arlong looked annoyed that he wasn't agreeing with him. But with his eyes not showing any signs of fear, Luffy declared loudly, because Nami is our navigator. 1. Karubi had dragged Sanji underwater in hopes of getting an advantage, but the fight ended up like in canon. 2. I would imagine for a proud fishman like Arlong, having someone like Luffy being able to mimic a fishman's appearance is a grave insult. However, he isn't as surprised by Luffy's powers as the previous villains have been, because he had seen similar things on the Grand Line. The same could be said for Buggy, but he's a cowardly idiot, so it's no wonder he was caught off guard. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Chimera Luffy by mellra. Chapter 10. Because Nami is our navigator, proclaimed Luffy so loudly that his voice echoed through the room. Really? Arlong asked mockingly, you want her to navigate your pathetic little ship for you? Huh, I guess you truly have no idea what a monumental waste of talent that would be. He gestured around to the maps in the room. Look, there is no one else on the face of the planet who can draw sea charts with such accuracy and efficacy. That young lady has a gift. Luffy kept looking around as his eyes went to the desk, a small pen fell and clattered on the floor. Luffy stretched his hand over to grab it and stare at it himself. And there isn't really anything as ultimately regrettable as wasting natural talent. Staying here and drawing up charts for me is her only chance of living up to her full potential. Arlong declared, not noticing Luffy was no longer paying attention to him. But when Luffy next spoke, he said in a quiet, but dark voice, this pen is stained with blood. Arlong, ignorant of the Chimera boy in front of him, was continuing to boast, in order for me to obtain world supremacy her sea charts are absolutely vital. He took his shark saw and held it to Luffy's neck so that his neck was between two of the blades. She will continue drawing her sea charts for my own ambitions. And once her charts give me full knowledge of all the world's oceans, we fishmen will be totally invincible. And the world shall kneel before us. Luffy still just sat there, holding the pen before he finally sighed. The first step is, this island. Then we'll move on to the whole East Blue. Arlong continued to rant. You can never use her like me. She would be wasted on you. Luffy, who had just put the pen carefully on the floor in front of him, almost reverently. Those words had struck a nerve and you could sense that there was something in him that was now filled with a great anger. It could even be felt in the air as Luffy very gently took hold of one of the blades on Arlong's shark saw. His head was down and his eyes were shadowed. Arlong kept smiling until it was wiped off his face. His arm was shaking slightly and he seemed to be completely confused to what was happening. Luffy's fingers tightened on the blade. He could see that he was shaking too, but from anger, not fear. Then, all of a sudden, Luffy broke the blade as easily as if it was made of glass. No, Arlong exclaimed in shock, so that he was left holding a blade with only 2 of the 6 blades left. Luffy's expression was terrifying and the fishman felt his own spirit freeze at the look. There was no trace of his usual happy-go-lucky attitude, not even the blank or usual angry look that he got when he was faced with an opponent. There was cold fury on his face, a sense of a hidden power radiated from inside him as if there was a wildfire burning inside him. Use her, Luffy repeated in a voice that was filled with as much rage as his face, you jerk. What the hell do you take her for? Arlong just laughed as he said, she is an inferior creature, but she has risen far above her peers. If all other humans are sewer rats, then she's a feisty little kitten. After all, she is adorable. She has her place and it's here beside me. Can't you understand that? I can give her everything she needs, Arlong finished with a wide grin on his face. And all she has to do is continue to draw those marvelous charts for me. Arlong went on, but what he said next raged Luffy to the core. So, Nami will forever be my tool. No, she'll be my friend. He laughed again. Finally, Luffy had gotten back to his feet, but instead of attacking Arlong he kicked the desk right through the wall. Arlong stopped laughing and his grin was wiped off as if Luffy had kicked him. He blinked before he stared at the giant hole where they could see the desk hover in the air for a moment before it fell. Before he could register what happened, Luffy had kicked a bookshelf and one of the stacks of maps out as well. What do you think you're doing? Arlong screamed, but Luffy completely ignored him as if he couldn't hear him as he continued his destruction of the room, making sure to take out as much as he could with every kick so that the sky was filled with paper. Stop it now, Arlong screamed as he then waved what was left of his weapon at him, but Luffy easily dodged it so that Arlong ended up destroying an enormous stack of maps and he screamed, horrified at what he had done. The charts. Once he landed, Luffy then kicked another stack out. My charts. Arlong continued to yell as he watched all his plans and ambitions being destroyed before his eyes. His anger now growing out of his control, he finally pinned Luffy against a wall and held him there with his hand at his throat. Curse you, Arlong yelled, that's 8 years of work. 8 years of planning and ambition. Luffy turned his arm into a long mantis-like scythe and used the extended blade to take out more of the room, and they could hear the books and papers smashing to the ground or splashing in the water below them. Enraged, Arlong snapped even further as he bit down on Luffy's neck. Now you've gone too far. Arlong yelled as blood sprayed everywhere. Luffy was growling with pain, but he didn't back down as he changed his arms into that of a monkey so that he could use the extended reach to grab Arlong by his nose behind his head and started to pull on it. You keep jabbering on about how much better fishmen are, he said loudly, stuttering a little from pain, and how much you need those sea charts. I don't understand anything about that stuff. His monkey-like hands started to bleed as he cut them on the sharp nose, but I finally figured out how to save her. With one huge heave, Luffy snapped Arlong's nose like a twig, causing the fishman to scream in pain, and as he opened his mouth to yell, he pulled his teeth out of Luffy's neck. Luffy was still on his feet, his eyes wide, looking worse than ever before. This room isn't anything but her jail cell, he declared with a hiss. There's only one way for Nami to escape, I gotta tear this place apart. Arlong glared up at him, looking ridiculous with his bent nose as Luffy suddenly grew larger and larger while his nose lengthened and he grew tusks, becoming a human-elephant hybrid. With a mighty leap, the Chimera captain was able to jump to the point where he broke through the roof and hovered for a few seconds before he started to descend. Elephant, he began, but Arlong wasn't beaten yet. You fool! Arlong yelled and was getting up. Arlong Park cannot be brought down by some inferior human. Arlong continued as grabbed hold of his nose and straightened it with a sickening cracking sound, especially not by some animal freak like you. Shark tooth, drill. Arlong screamed out before he jumped and began to spin like a propeller, or even a drill, towards Luffy's falling form, his teeth bared. Luffy's eyes widened in terror, but he managed to finish the attack as he landed on the tower, cannonball. Arlong's teeth sank deeply into his side just as Luffy's heavy body came down and slammed his face to the floor. For a moment, they were there, frozen as they stared at what happened. It was almost as if time had stopped here, but then the floor began to break apart. With Luffy's trumpet-like scream echoed as the force of the attack was so great that Arlong started to cough up blood just before Luffy's body slammed him down floor after floor of Arlong Park and hit the ground with an almighty boom. As Luffy stood from where he landed, the rest of the building was starting to collapse. The walls crumbled and the roof was falling in. Luffy just didn't seem to get to the hole he made in the wall in time. The ceiling gave way and the floor broke apart as he fell through it. The noise was so loud, but then everything went dark around him as the night sky came back. But suddenly the top of the rubble was moved and Luffy burst through so that he was standing on top of the remains. He slowly shrank down back to his human form, showing that his thicker hide prevented a majority of the damage along with his natural resistance. No one spoke as they all stared at him, though he didn't say a word, their eyes were all drawn to him as if he had shouted. Luffy then took a deep breath and yelled out, Nami. He finished screaming out, Nami, you'll always be my friend. It slowly dawned on all the crowd what just happened as they were all screaming in joy. All of them cheering and crying as well. Finally, their nightmare was over. And the cry that echoed through the village was Nami's happy tears while Johnny and Yosaku screamed out, Big Bro won. Later, back in Kokoyashi village, after a small altercation with a group of marines, an enormous party going on. The villagers were all dancing and feasting, music and laughter was in the air, and every single person here was smiling. You moron. The doctor snapped as Zoro was gritting his teeth and moving painfully around on the bed as Johnny and Yosaku slept in the background. Well, almost everyone was smiling. The doctor continued, "Did you think this would heal on its own? Seriously, pirates are supposed to be smarter than this." Zoro tried to defend himself, but the doctor shoved his hand in Zoro's face to keep him still as he continued stitching. "Don't you have a doctor for this?" Just then a familiar face appeared in the window above Zoro's head, with a leg of meat in his hand, and he repeated, "Doctor. Never thought of that. Good idea, Luffy," Zoro said in surprise. "But we need to get a musician first, right?" Luffy asked, as if making sure that he got it. "Why's that?" Zoro asked him. "'Cause pirates really like to sing," he said as if it was obvious. Zoro actually laughed at that and sounded sarcastic as he said, "That's true, but why is that first?" Luffy didn't answer, but he grinned at him before he looked up to the doctor and asked where Nami was, claiming that she wasn't in the village. "Well then," the doctor said, looking away as he thought it all over, "if she's not in the village, there's only one place she'd go." Later still. It was still a dark night around, and the only thing that had changed was that Genzo was in the more quiet location. He was on a cliff that overlooked the ocean, a bright moon was reflected in the sparkling sea below them, and there was a very simple grave raised there with a wooden cross. Genzo had poured an entire bottle of sake over it, as if the one who was buried there could enjoy it as well. It was very peaceful for a few quiet moments, but that soon ended when someone yelled out, "Where's the food?" Genzo had jumped and spun around to see who it was. Luffy was barely aware that he wasn't alone as he looked for food. "Oh, no food out here," he said to himself, sounding disappointed before he turned around and muttered something about leaving. "Wait, boy," Genzo suddenly shouted, stopping Luffy so that he would look back, and they looked over at him. "Huh, a grave?" Luffy asked before he asked tactlessly, "Did somebody die?" Genzo turned back to look at the wooden cross and admitted to Luffy that someone did die a long time ago. "Oh, I'm sorry," Luffy said, bowing his head, though it probably would have been easier to take him seriously if he took the food out of his mouth first. "I give you to my conveniences." Luffy realized that he said it wrong and tried again. "Wait, my sincere compliments, no, my deepest," he said several times before Genzo corrected him. "My deepest condolences," he said. "Yeah, thanks," Luffy said. "Listen boy," Genzo said, still not looking away, but his voice was very serious, "I know Nami is going away with you. She has her mind set on becoming a pirate and that, dangerous business. And I'm fine with that, it can't be helped. But if any of you do anything to hurt her, I will kill you," Genzo said, his voice deadly serious. "We're not gonna hurt her," Luffy said to him firmly. But Genzo spun around and yelled out at the top of his lungs, "You sure?" Luffy looked startled at that before he nodded, "I'm sure." Genzo moved his cap back down so that he couldn't see his eyes, but a satisfied smile was tugging at the scarred man's lips, as if he just had a hard question answered for him. Day of departure. The 4 straw hats were already on the deck of the Going Merry as they began piling on crates and boxes of food and supplies. It looked like the whole island had come to say goodbye. Suddenly, Sanji had run to the side of the ship. "There she is," he screamed out, barely able to contain himself. Looking up, they saw Nami standing far along the road and everyone was looking directly at her. Her eyes were hidden by bangs before she screamed out, "Set the sails." And suddenly she started sprinting towards them as if she was being chased by something. "I don't get it," Usopp said, watching her sprint towards them, "why is she running?" "She said set sail," Luffy reminded him, and he jumped a little at the seriousness in his tone. "No," Genzo suddenly cried out as Nojiko and the doctor all looked surprised at Nami. "She's planning on leaving without letting any of us thank her or say goodbye." "Set sail," Luffy yelled, and they did as Zoro pulled up the anchor. Soon they were moving away from the dock. "Wait, don't go," someone screamed. "They're leaving. Stop. At least let us say goodbye." Nami didn't respond to any of their words as she continued to sprint with the citizens trying to stop her. Genzo fought his way through to the front. "Nami," he yelled, "come back here. You can't leave this way." "So," Sanji said to Luffy, "you sure you wanna let her leave like this?" "Not my decision," Luffy told him, "she does what she wants." They sailed farther and farther away, with Nami now in danger of being left behind. But they didn't need to worry. Nami started to run between them all, zigzag, diagonal, up and down. She ran past all of them all, slipping away without any trouble, thanks to her years of stealing. Once she passed the doctor and her sister, she jumped, almost flying through the air, just barely made it to the ship. "Why?" Genzo cried out as she landed on the Mary's deck. Breathing hard, she didn't move for a moment before she pulled back her shirt to show dozens of wallets and coin purses falling out. At that they all checked their pockets and realized that she stole from each of them. Nami was pulling out some of the money. She kissed it before looking back with a smug smirk, "Thanks a bunch." The looks on each of their faces was priceless. "Why, you little brat," Genzo shouted as their jaws all dropped. Usopp whispered to Zoro darkly, "Great. She hasn't changed a bit. I'd watch ma back if I were you," Zoro agreed, giving Nami a shady look. But Luffy was laughing as Sanji gave her a thumbs up. "You lousy pickpocket." Genzo cried out, "We'll miss you." But then Genzo suddenly yelled at Luffy and got their attention. "Boy." Luffy looked back up, as he finished by yelling, "Remember what I told you?" Luffy just smirked and gave him the thumbs up. "You got it." Nami began to scream out, waving goodbye, "Goodbye everybody, I'll miss you. Take care." She then turned to the rest of the crew and said, "Now that that's over with, I say it's about time we head off to the Grand Line." Everyone cheered and started to laugh together, glad that was finally over. It was another beautiful day later and the whole crew was relaxing on the Mary's deck. Nami was stretching out on a lawn chair as Usopp sat there, mixing together some of his infamous Tabasco stars. Zoro was on the upper deck and taking a nap, and after looking around for a minute, they spotted Luffy cautiously reaching for some tangerines that had been put on the top of the cabin. Sanji came out of nowhere and kicked him so hard that he was flung backwards right into Usopp, who had some of it get splashed into his eyes. Luffy however was glaring up at Sanji and yelled, "Ah, come on. I just want one of them." "No," Sanji yelled, standing there in front of the trees like a bodyguard, his arms folded. "This is Nami's tangerine orchard. I won't let anyone lay a finger on it." He then turned to Nami with his eyes as hearts and cried out, his arms now wide, "Nami, can you see how well I'm protecting your trees?" "Yes," she said, without turning to look at him, "you're doing very well." Soon, Nami was still going over the paper as Luffy sat up on the railing, looking hungrily up at the fruit as Usopp lay on his back with a cool cloth to his red eyes. "I only want one tangerine," Luffy whined. "Just give it here, you're so mean." He stuck his tongue at him. "No," Sanji yelled again. "Oh well," Luffy said, beaming widely, "I'm pretty happy anyway." "The world sure is a turbulent place," Nami suddenly stated, telling them what she was reading. She flipped the page and a straight piece of paper fell out. "What's that?" Luffy asked just as it fluttered to the deck and they saw what it was. Everyone gasped at what they saw and soon they were all screaming, some of them were joyous, or horrified. Luffy jumped up and picked it up to stare at it. His eyes were as big as dinner plates as he stared at it and held it up for them all to see, laughing out proudly. "All right guys. We're wanted criminals." Usopp leaned over to look at it. "Wanted, dead or alive, 30 million. That's a whole lot of berries." Luffy cried out, still laughing. "Check it out." Usopp cried out, pointing at it as a dreamy look came over his face, "I'll be seen all around the world." "What?" Sanji screamed out, staring at it, "They put long nose in but left me out." He was then looking all over the poster, now demanding to know where he was because he couldn't see him. Usopp pointed in the lower corner where the back of his head was and began to laugh as Sanji sat on the deck to pout. "It's the back of your head. That's not so great." Usopp giggled and said, "Ah, don't be so glum. You don't have to be a captain to get your picture on one of these things." Sanji cheered up almost at once. "Is that true?" he asked excitedly. "Yeah," Usopp said, "just work really hard." The three male Straw Hats were all celebrating and dancing as Nami looked like she wanted to crack their heads together. "Let's go to the Grand Line, men," Luffy shouted out and the other two cheered along. "Yet again, you guys don't understand how grim our situation really is." Nami yelled at them before she slapped her hand to her head, "This means all of our lives will be in constant danger." Soon they were back on the Mary's deck, and the five of them were all on the upper deck with Nami poring over the map and find a way to the Grand Line. "We're getting closer," she informed them. "We've almost made it to the Grand Line and it looks like the only way through is here, Reverse Mountain." "There's not," Sanji suddenly said, "from what the geezer told me that's the only place to enter." Usopp looked over at him. "Well, how come?" "'Cause it's really dangerous," he answered as if it was obvious, which soon led to the two arguing, again. "See, the reason is," Nami began, but Luffy interrupted, "I got an idea. Why don't we sail right into it?" Nami looked deeply annoyed and snapped at him, "Are you really that clueless?" "My way sounds a lot more fun," he said brightly, smiling, "plus it'd be a whole lot better to dive right into it, right?" Nami put her hand to her head as if she had a headache and said, "Talking to you drives me completely insane." "First off," Luffy said, sounding more serious, "we have to stop by an island. We need to pick up some meat." "Need meat?" Giving him an annoyed look, she pointed to a small island on the map and explained, "There's a famous city on this island. Known as Louchtown." "Louchtown," Luffy repeated mildly, "why is it famous?" "They got delicious meat. You know," Sanji stated, "I'm surprised you love meat so much. I mean, you turn into most animals anyway. Shouldn't you be a vegetarian or something?" Luffy went wide-eyed before sticking his tongue out in a yuck face and declared, "No way. Vegetables are gross." "I'm pretty sure I've heard of it before," Zoro said as he looked up at the sky, ignoring the captain and chef's developing argument on the values of vegetables. "It's the city of the beginning, and the end." Luffy looked confused and Nami explained, "It's the town where the old king of the pirates, Gold Roger, was both born and killed." The Straw Hats were all looking at the make with new interest as Luffy asked in a hushed tone, "That's where the king of the pirates died?" She looked at him with a small smile. "Well, yeah, let's do it," Luffy said seriously, "this was the man who had the One Piece. Everything the world has to offer, I need to see where he was born and executed." Before long they were standing in a large town in what looked like the main square, though it was wide open it was filled with people. After agreeing to meet up later, the Straw Hats soon went their separate ways. Before long, someone in the crowd at the town square yelled that someone was up on the execution's platform. When the other members of the crowd looked up, they could see a tall metal structure, several stories high, and starting to rust from the years of being exposed to the elements. Standing at the top, with his eyes shielded so that he could see everything, was Luffy. In the crowd someone screamed, "Hey, you up there." Looking down, Luffy saw that a police officer, dressed in attire very similar to Genzo had been, was there with a loudspeaker. "Get down from there, immediately." "But why?" Luffy shouted back, like a child who had been told that he had to go to bed and didn't understand why he couldn't stay up later. "You are standing on an execution platform that belongs to the world government." The officer yelled. "Now, get down from there right now." "Fine, I'll come down." Luffy yelled down agreeably. "But first you have to say the magic word and smile too." "I'm not playing, I will arrest you if you don't come down." The officer yelled, and he truly sounded annoyed. But before he could make good on his threat, someone came out from the crowd with a colossal iron mace over her shoulder before she hit the man so hard that he was out as soon as he hit the ground. She was a truly beautiful woman that was slim, well endowed, with dark green eyes before his brown, and full ruby red lips, but the most noticeable thing about her was her silky looking skin that looked so soft. Ahem, what was I saying? "Oh yeah," the woman spoke. "Now's not the time for such trifles," she said in a sweet voice that seemed strangely familiar. The woman was looking up to Luffy and cooed out, "Long time no see, Luffy. I've been looking for you." Apparently Luffy didn't recognize her as he looked down with a confused look on his face. When she noticed this, the woman sighed. "Now that's just rude," she said. "You mean to tell me that you, of all people, this face?" "Forgot. I'm pretty sure we haven't even met," Luffy said in confusion. "Who are you? I'll never forget you. You were the first man who ever truly struck me," the woman said fondly, causing the other people around them to scowl up at Luffy, outraged that he had done something to this girl. "What? I never hit you," Luffy yelled incredulity, looking a little lost as to why everyone was glaring at him. "When you struck me with your powerful fist," she answered, her hand over her stomach. "It felt good." Luffy looked most uncomfortable at this and his eyes were darting around, as if hoping for a way to escape. "Listen up boys, who is the most beautiful person on these seas?" The woman suddenly asked the crowd. "That would be you." Everyone in the crowd yelled as they got down on their knees and held their arms out to her. "That's correct," the now highly familiar sounding woman said with a smirk, holding out her arm. "I am quite breathtaking, aren't I? There isn't a man alive that won't crumble before my beauty. But I prefer strong men, like you." Looking back to the platform she cooed out, "I'm gonna make you all mine, Luffy." "Just wait," Luffy shouted out, now sounding completely sickened at the thought. "Gross. No way. Just who the heck are you? You still haven't figured it out," she exclaimed in annoyance, losing her patience. Several officers came running to the square with their weapons and telling the woman to put her mace down and come with them. "I'm placing you under arrest for assaulting a police captain," another officer yelled before he turned up to Luffy and shouted out, "As for you up there, get off that platform." "Hold on, who did you say you were arresting?" the woman asked, as if she just wanted to make sure she heard right. We're arresting you," the officer stuttered, taken in by her beauty as she batted her eyelashes at him. "Are you really going to arrest me?" she asked sweetly, smiling as hearts now appeared in the officer's eyes, causing them to start saying that they couldn't arrest her because she's too beautiful. "I don't give a crap," another yelled, though he was now looking close to proclaiming undying love as well. "Arrest her." But before they could act, a large cannonball came flying from behind them and it hit the fountain so that it ended up blowing it apart in large chunks when a large part of the fountain flew at the woman, but as it hit, it slid right off her as if it had been a giant bar of soap and went flying off near Luffy's direction but moved in time. "Aw man, that's weird," Luffy exclaimed loudly as everyone stared at her. "That little stunt was dangerous, you know," the woman asked, sounding just a little irritated as she turned her attention to a group of people who had come from the direction of the cannonball, each of them wearing a dark cloak to cover themselves. "I'm flashily sorry," the one out front said softly. "But that smooth skin of yours is unharmed of course. So there's no need to worry, fairest Alvida." "Alvida," Luffy repeated to himself, as he finally made the connection, or maybe not. "I don't see Alvida." "Don't be so dense, you nimwit," the woman yelled angrily. "I'm Alvida. Whaaaaa. The collective fans of One Piece screamed out upon reading this. "You sure?" Luffy asked, "'Cause I don't think you're her." Alvida smiled. "I guessed I really did change after eating the fruit called." She removed her heart cloak to fully reveal her new body to them all, and get the whole picture to how much she had changed. Smooth fruit. "No attack can hurt my skin because it slides right off. Unfortunately, a lowly fruit could not improve on my already stunning good looks." Alvida sighed in disappointment as she touched her cheek. "One big change you may have noticed was that I lost my freckles." Sure, that must be it, Luffy whispered, though it was clear that he didn't believe a word he said as he continued to look around for a way to get away from her. After becoming a whole new person, Alvida went on. I decided to join forces with someone who shared my goal of finding you. She then finally gestured to the cloaked men. Here, the cloaked man laughed insanely as he and his crew threw off the cloaks, revealing to be Buggy the Clown, and his whole circus was back. Now that I flashily made my entrance, time for the real star of the show. He screamed out and pointed up at Luffy, Monkey D. Luffy, ever since the day you sent me flying, I've been obsessed with exacting my revenge on you. That alone led to me finally finding my crew. My travels are an epic saga. I went to hell, found friendship, I even lost parts of my body. I call this tale, Tiny Buggy's Great Adventure. The first thing that happened was, why the hell am I telling you a story? Luffy stared blankly at Buggy. Don't know. Now, he folded his arms as he said, what was your name again? Boggy, Buggy, Boohee, Baggy, I know. He said proudly, it's Buffoon. Buffoon, Buggy screamed, enraged. You got a lot of nerve, you bratty animal. And now Buggy the Clown is gonna make you pay for that. Hey, that's Buggy the Clown, one of the people yelled in fear. And at the mention of pirates, all the people there turned and began to try and run, wanting nothing more than to get away from the square as fast as they could. But the Buggy pirates seemed to be prepared for this as they each pulled out guns and swords, making sure that they wouldn't move. You people flashily stay where you are. Buggy proclaimed to them all. I want every single one of you to see exactly how scary I can be. Oh yeah, Luffy yelled proudly, having just remembered Buggy's real name, Buggy Right. You mean you just now remembered it? Buggy screamed. Too late, with Luffy distracted, the man who fought Zoro on the unicycle, Kabaji, appeared behind him and slammed a large metal and wood board down on top of him to trap him so that he was pinned in the stalks that held his head and hands there. Hey, Luffy questioned in surprise, looking around up at Kabaji, what gives? Long time no see, animal freak, Kabaji greeted with a scolding tone as he sat on the stalk and asked how Zoro was doing. Good shot, Kabaji, Buggy praised as he began to laugh and call out to everyone, to all of my followers. Hundreds of billions of them around the world. We will now begin the most flashily public execution. You're trapped, Monkey D. Luffy, you can't move so much as an inch. Luffy attempted to pull his head out of the board, but he couldn't pull his head out of the hole, and it wasn't easy for him to do so while he was being held like this. He honestly couldn't move at all. Suddenly he felt weaker for some reason and could no longer feel like he could transform into one of his animal forms to escape. 2. Tell me, Straw Hat. Buggy yelled up at him as he laughed. Feel honored. You'll die in the same place as the king of the pirates. Again, despite his weakness, Luffy was trying to move as a wind began to pick up and dark clouds were being blown over them so that the entire square was cast in shadows. And perhaps it was just the trace of electrical energy in the air that caused it, but there was also a strong sense that something big was going to happen here, was building with each minute. Ignoring this, Buggy started speaking again like an announcer. Pirate Monkey D. Luffy of the Straw Hats will be flashily executed for the crime of being stuck up and making me angry. Buggy yelled as he lifted his arms, suddenly standing beside the trapped Luffy. At his words, all the pirates around them were screaming in celebration, shooting off guns and jumping as if a great show was about to take place. Now live it up, flashily. Buggy shouted as his men all cheered at that. Luffy was looking down at them excitedly. Oh boy. I've never seen an execution. Well, you're about to, kid, Buggy informed him with a dark chuckle in his voice. Luffy blinked at that and looked up as he slowly processed what he said. What? He screamed out in horror. Stop joking. It's no joke. Buggy screamed as Luffy was now trying to desperately pull himself free and call for help. I even got a little bit of sea stone just for you so you won't turn into something like a rat and escape. It wasn't easy, I'll tell you that. Now, he said as he turned away from the struggling Straw Hat. Alright, Buggy yelled to the crowd as Luffy continued to try pull his head free. I hereby flashily begin the festivities of this public execution. Luffy finally stopped struggling and was now lying there with a pout on his face. I'm so sorry. Really I am, please spare my life, he said in a droning voice, and it sounded as if Nami forced him to apologize for breaking something instead of pleading for his life. It couldn't have been any clearer to them that he didn't mean a word to what he said. Why would I spare your life? Buggy bellowed in frustration. This is what happens when you go against us, Kabaji commented, moving back down to the ground so that he could watch with the others. Alvida sighed a little regretfully. I guess this is it for the man I had my eye on. Buggy held up a long sword and looked down at Luffy as he stated, you've got quite a big audience here today, Straw Hat. You want to say a few words before you die? Luffy continued to sit there with a grumpy look on his face, even as Buggy stepped on his head. Ah, cat got your tongue? Buggy asked, still taunting him. That's alright. Stay quiet or say a few words. It doesn't matter, you're still gonna die. Luffy lay there for a moment before he took a deep breath. Just as a great wind swept over them all, he bellowed out at the top of his lungs, so that the words seemed to echo all around them, listen. I'm the man who will be king of the pirates. There was stunned silence all around them as the crowd stared at him in disbelief, yet at the same time it was as if they could feel a strange energy coming from him, as if confirming his words. Buggy however wasn't impressed as he grinned evilly. "We're finally getting to the best part of the show," he asked him, looking truly pleased at what he was going to do. Bye now." Luffy had tried to pull his head out one last time, but it was clear that he was trapped here. But then Zoro's voice echoed out behind them, "Stop the execution." There they were, Zoro and Sanji had finally shown up and were now standing at the edge of the crowd as they watched on. Now, they both screamed out at Buggy, clearly warning him that they weren't playing around here. "Zoro, Sanji," Luffy yelled in relief. "Luffy, you idiot," Zoro teased, his hand resting on the two new swords hanging at his hip. "Guess all that fooling around finally caught up with ya, huh? You starting a sideshow," Sanji added, looking around at the Buggy pirates. "Or is that how you look? Pretty sad," he continued as he smoked. "Now, all we gotta do is drive these goons away." The citizens all screamed Zoro's name in terror and fled. Thankfully the Buggy pirates turned their full attention away from them and onto the two men. "Hey guys," Luffy screamed again happily. "You made it here, Zoro." Buggy yelled cockily. "But you're just a little bit too late." He raised his sword over his head, ready to cut Luffy's head off, and that got their attention as they rushed in to try and take down the platform before that sword fell. Of course, that was difficult to do since the pirates were now standing in their way, with Alvida now taking control and telling them what to do. Though the two members of the monster trio were easily able to plow through these weaklings, they were outnumbered and it was taking too long already. Buggy laughed victoriously as he held his sword high as the sky continued to darken overhead. The storm was almost here. "Not even the great Zoro can stop me now. There's nothing you two can do. This is the end of your captain." Luffy's expression became terrified as he stared up at the blade as Buggy continued to laugh insanely. Zoro and Sanji were now fighting tooth and nail to reach the platform in time. They were quickly becoming more frantic and scared as they tried to force their way through. "Creep!" Sanji screamed at Buggy as the thunder roared around them. As the Straw Hats all watched the two fight to get closer, Luffy's voice from above them sounded out. "Zoro! Sanji! Usopp! Nami!" They looked up to see Luffy looking up. Everyone in the square was now staring up as the fear completely left Luffy's face. Instead, he was smiling. Each of the Straw Hats felt as if they had frozen in place as they stared at him. It wasn't a forced or painful smile, but serene, as if he was truly happy. This lingering smile, Luffy truly believed he was going to die here, but he wasn't upset about it. "Sorry," Luffy went on, and he truly did sound like he meant it this time, but this time he was apologizing to his crew, not Buggy. "But, I'm dead," he informed them all. And he kept smiling even as Buggy brought his sword down on his neck. "Idiot," Zoro as he stared up in horror. "Don't say that," Sanji yelled, now desperately kicking 5 or 6 pirates out of his way to get to them. But as the blade fell, it sparkled with electricity from the air, and with a great explosion from above them a single bolt of lightning came crashing from the dark clouds and struck the tower. The entire tower burst into blue flames and the skies opened up to the rain. In a matter of seconds, it was pouring, but the platform continued to burn, slowly bending and twisting around as it broke and landed with a crash sideways. The sound of when it hit the ground echoed throughout the square. No one said a word, on one even moved as they watched. They were all staring with their mouths open in shock at the twisted heap of metal and burnt wood. Just at that moment, Luffy had pulled himself out of the debris, his head still on and his body looking only slightly singed and dirty. Buggy wasn't so lucky, taking the brunt of the blast. He was lying on the ground and was badly burnt and out cold. 3. Like a puppy finding its owner, Luffy's straw hat dropped at his feet and Luffy picked it up to put it back on. As soon as he did, he started to laugh, a laugh that cut through the silence. "Hey, I'm still alive. That's nice." The people in the crowd hadn't recovered as quickly as they had and were all staring in stunned disbelief at what they just saw. Sanji's own mouth was open so that his cigarette fell out, but Zoro's face didn't react at all, but there was a strange contemplation expression there as he looked at Luffy coming towards them, talking about how lucky an escape that was. "That was divine intervention," Sanji suddenly declared. "Stop talking nonsense," Zoro said at once, the first one to really recover. Though still shaken up by what just happened, he grasped the seriousness of the situation as he said loudly, looking around them, "We gotta get out of this town. Our troubles are not over." It looked like he was right, because at that moment, a small army of Marines came charging out from all sides. It was clear that they had the entire place surrounded from the moment that the pirates began fighting each other and were now trying to round them all up. Luffy was looking ready for a fight, but Zoro grabbed him and reminded him that they had to run now. That if they didn't get back to the Mary now, they weren't going to leave at all. So, with everyone's attentions on each other, the three turned and went running down the street in the direction of the docks. As they ran through the empty streets, the rain was now coming down harder than ever before. Zoro yelled in frustration, "What the hell is up with all this rain?" "Nami was right about this storm," Sanji said loudly, trying to shield his eyes from the water with his arm so that he could see where they were going. If we don't get back to the ship and set sail soon, then we'll be stuck here for good. On they ran, even when the Marines were right behind them, they kept going, not bothering to stop and fight. With every step they seemed to take, however, the rain seemed to become thicker and fall harder so that it was getting hard to see anything in front of them. But eventually, they spotted someone standing in their way, a young woman with short navy blue hair and a sword in her hands. "I didn't know you were Zoro, and a pirate as well." "You lied," the woman said, her head down. But then she looked up and glared at Zoro and said loudly, "You're just another liar." Zoro told her irritably, "You never asked what my name was, did you? So I never lied, did I?" The woman got angry at him and declared that she wasn't going to let him leave town with his sword. In the end, Zoro decided to stay behind and fight. The woman, Tashigi, charged ahead in anger and pulled out her blade, but Zoro was more than able to hold her back. His eyes held a thoughtful expression as Sanji yelled that he shouldn't fight a girl. That got Tashigi even angrier than before and told him off for that, as Zoro told them to go on ahead. Luffy nodded, deciding to leave it all to him as he and Sanji left, with Sanji threatening to kick his ass if he hurt her. As Luffy and Sanji ran through the raging storm that suddenly appeared in Logatown, Luffy met up with another Marine. This particular Marine's name was Smoker and he was the leading officer in Logatown. He was around Zoro's height with short white hair and wore a white marine jacket that looked like it was made to look like a biker's. He had a large metal jute strapped to his back and, most curiously, had 2 cigars in his mouth with more strapped along his body. Luffy and Smoker weren't waiting around as they began to fight. But here, no matter what Luffy threw at him, none of his attacks did any good. Any attack launched at the Marine passed through him as his body turned to smoke, showing the Marine to be a devil fruit user. Luffy jumped around on cricket legs and tried multiple rapid-fire kicks on Smoker, however his attacks just ended up going right through him like smoke. The Marine then flew a smoky fist that caught Luffy in the face during one of his failed attacks, sending the young pirate crashing to the ground. "What's wrong?" Smoker challenged, had enough already. Luffy slowly go back up and tried to attack, but nothing he did worked. "This is bad," he thought frantically, "I can't think of any animal that can hurt Smoke." 4. Smoker trapped Luffy in a cloud of smoke and slammed him to the ground, his face in the concrete and his hand on his head. "I told you," Smoker yelled at him, "you gotta go through me to get to the Grand Line. You're not worth 30 million berries. Huh, your luck's run out." But as Smoker reached for his weapon, someone stepped out of the shadows and took hold of it to prevent him from moving. The man's face was a mystery. Not only was the rain obstructing their view, but the man was wearing a long, dark green cloak that hid him completely from their view. "I wouldn't be so sure about that," the man said in a hoarse voice. Though his tone carried no trace of a threat, they could tell that he meant business. There was something in that voice that seemed to demand attention despite speaking so softly. "It's you," Smoker snarled almost exactly as Robin spoke. "Hey, what's going on?" demanded Luffy with a muffled voice, hard for him to speak with his face to the ground. "Who's that?" "The most wanted man in the world, Dragon the Revolutionary." "How nice," Smoker said to him, "now the government can have your head." Dragon didn't speak for a moment, but then he went on in that same hoarse voice, "The world is still waiting for our answer." Just then the whole area was surrounded with an eerie green light and a great wind came rushing out of nowhere, a wind that was so strong that it was as if they were in the middle of a maelstrom. Luffy screamed as he was sent flying back, falling backwards onto soft grass. After recovering, Luffy was soon standing on the Going Merry, but it was still raining hard and the storm raged around him. Fierce gales and heavy rains battered the ship. Something awful as Nami was shouting out instructions as they just left Logatown. "Feels like she's gonna capsize," Luffy yelled from the front, but instead of worried, he sounded excited at the thought that they might end up drowning. "Hey look, a light," Nami suddenly screamed out and they looked up to see a bright light burning in the distance, point the way through the storm. "Is that a lighthouse?" Usopp screamed over the noise of the storm as he hung on to the mast to keep himself from slipping. "The Grand Line is just out ahead," Luffy repeated in awe, his eyes bright as he grinned at the lighthouse. Nami smiled just as brightly as she looked to him, and she was as excited as he was here. Zoro smirked and Sanji grinned wildly, giving them a thumbs up. Luffy and Nami were grinning at each other as Luffy held onto his hat to keep it from being blown off. Sanji then yelled out, "Okay then, I think we should say something to mark the occasion." "Good idea," Usopp exclaimed, finally able to pull himself off the mast at the suggestion as Luffy yelled in agreement to that idea. Sanji rolled out a large barrel on the upper deck and the 5 crewmates stepped around it. Each one had an excited gleam in their eye, because they all knew that this was the first time of them fulfilling their dreams. They smiled at the barrel, as if each one was thinking the same thing as the others. Sanji stepped up first and put his foot on the top of the barrel. "I'm going to the Grand Line to find all blue." Following suit, Luffy also put his foot up and proclaimed that he was going to become the king of the pirates. One by one, they all put a foot up and told each other their dreams. The reason they set out to sea with each other in the first place was for these reasons. Zoro and Nami both proclaimed their reasons for being here and looked to Usopp who stood there thinking, as if he didn't know what to say, but then he quickly put his foot up and said, "I guess I'm going to be a brave warrior of the sea." Though the 5 of them held their feet there for only a few seconds, it felt so much longer. They looked at the barrel that held their goals and hopes, each one smiling through the rain. At this moment, there was no fear or hesitation in any of them, there was no turning back for them even if they wanted to. They all knew what they wanted, and it was here that they decided that they were going to go to the ends of the world if that's what it took to get it, and no matter what happened, they were going to do it together. And now, Luffy yelled as they all raised their legs high, and brought them down to smash the barrel, to the Grand Line. "Yeah," the Straw Hats shouted, with the little boat continuing on through the rough storm, following the light. 1. I thought this'd be funny to add, showing Luffy's line of reasoning for why he's not a vegetarian like Beast Boy. Not quite sure what Luffy's actual opinion on vegetables is, but due to his childish behavior and his obsession with meat, I'd assume this is spot on. 2. This is the only way that I could think of for Buggy to successfully capture Luffy. I imagine that with all the sea stone the Marines use to capture pirates, chances are there is some black market stuff that Buggy could get a hold of just for capturing Luffy. 3. Buggy acted as a lightning rod and cannon, and with Luffy's durability I'd imagine he'd survive with or without rubber powers. He did get a bit more damage than in cannon, but not enough to be noticeable. 4. I myself can't think of any animal, real or otherwise, that can hurt Smoke, but I plan on researching this so that by the next time Luffy and Smoker fight, it'll be much more interesting. This will be because Luffy himself will be trying to find any animal that can fight Smoke. Also, he couldn't use his other forms that might have worked because, in his hurry, Luffy couldn't come up with a strategy in time. While smart while fighting, that doesn't mean Luffy can come up with an answer for everything. After all, it took him 3 tries before he could take down Crocodile in cannon. Chapter 11. The Straw Hats all enjoyed the breakneck ride down Reverse Mountain, the wind blowing past them as they continued to pick up speed as they went, the water sprayed everywhere creating more mist. The entire crew was shouting in joy, obviously loving every minute of it. Downwards they sped, almost as if they were on a waterslide, breaking through the clouds so that they couldn't see anything but the white fog in front of them. All 5 were laughing, sounding as if they didn't have a care in the world, but then Zoro was shouting out, "Did you just hear something?" "Huh, what's that?" Nami yelled over at him as the Straw Hats stopped laughing long enough to hear them. "That groaning sound," Zoro shouted out, "didn't you hear it? It was probably just the wind." She dismissed at him as they started to go even faster. At this speed, everything sounds distorted. But then they heard it, a distant wailing that sounded like a foghorn had come through the clouds. Usopp began to look through his goggles to try and find that answer as well. "Nami," screamed Sanji from the mast, "I see a mountain up ahead." "What? That's impossible." Nami yelled up at him in panic. "But it's right there," Sanji screamed back as he pointed in front of them, "I can see it." "Who cares?" Luffy yelled from the Mary's head, and it was obvious that he couldn't have cared less to what might happen. "Go." Nami began to scream that they should be home free after they passed the Twin Capes. But then that groaning wail sounded off once again, louder than ever so that no one could deny that they didn't hear it. Luffy was now trying to squint his eyes through the thick fog, trying to make something out. Just then, they broke through the white sheet and all that could be seen was a vast navy blue, almost black, which caused the 5 Straw Hats to scream in shock. "It's a black wall." Luffy screamed in fear. "No, it's not." Nami shouted in horror as she grabbed hold of the railing, tears in her eyes. "Then what is it?" Zoro yelled before she could finish. "It's a whale," Usopp screamed. To say that this whale was enormous would be the understatement of the century. In front of them was a magnificent creature that was so large, it looked like it could swallow an entire island in one gulp. The whale's massive mouth opened a little so that they could see the row of sharp teeth, and a single tooth about the size of the Mary, if not bigger, and his great head was also covered in dozens of scars, both old and new. But unaware of what was going on around him, the whale wailed out once again, the loudest one yet, that made the entire mountain shake. They all covered their ears, the noise piercing their brains and their eardrums felt as if they were about to burst. The Straw Hats, however, were all screaming in a panic. What are we gonna do?" Usopp screamed out, looking ready to faint as he stared at them all, desperate that one of them had a plan here. "Should we fight?" Luffy suggested quickly. "Idiot, how are we supposed to fight a 100-ton whale?" Nami demanded hysterically. "Well, do something." Usopp screamed at them both. "Our path is blocked. How do we escape?" "Calm down," Sanji yelled, though he too sounded close to losing his mind in blind fear. "If this creature looks like a giant wall to us, we must be a speck." Zoro yelled out that it wouldn't matter if they were small to him because they were going to crash right into him unless they changed course. "Look," he then shouted, pointing to the Titan's side where there was an opening, "we can get by on the left." "Port, hard to port, the rudder's broken," Usopp reminded him loudly. "Do something for Pete's sake." Zoro yelled, and it was strange to see him lose control of his calm like this. "Anything." "Wait, I know," Luffy yelled as he jumped off the figurehead and headed straight down to the hull. "This'll work, it has to." Nami yelled after him what he was up to, but he didn't stick around to answer as he disappeared through the front of the ship. The other 3 men went and tried to pull what was left of the rudder to the left. "This is pointless," Usopp yelled as the other 2 cursed, "the ship's not gonna turn." Just as they had almost reached Laboon, below deck there was an enormous blast which could only mean one thing. "The cannon!" they screamed. The impact of the blast shot the ship back slightly and blew up in front of them once it hit the whale. The cannon had stopped them from crashing right into the whale and being destroyed, but it wasn't enough to stop them completely. The ship had slowed down considerably, but when it bumped into the whale, it ended up breaking off the Mary's figurehead. The sheep's head broke with a loud crack and went flying overhead so that when it hit the deck they could hear Luffy's scream of horror, "Hey! That was my special seat." Once everyone had caught their breath and let sink in what happened, they broke out the paddles and were now trying to slip past the whale without him noticing anything. Zoro, Usopp, and Sanji were all yelling at each other about what just happened. "Alright, let's get out of here before it's too late," Zoro began. "Someone mind telling me what the heck is going on?" Usopp shouted back, looking ready to cry. "It's so big that the cannonball didn't even make it flinch." Sanji cried as they were working hard to paddle, that, or his reaction time is really slow. "Who cares?" Zoro yelled at him, "at least we're alive." Once again, the gigantic whale howled out, feeling as if his voice was a shockwave. The Straw Hats were all trying to block out the sound and only focused on paddling right past him. They kept rowing until they were passing right underneath the whale's eye, which was easily more than 4 times bigger than the little ship, when Luffy came back up to the deck, looking furious. "Luffy," Nami whispered, wondering just what it was that he was going to do now. "You think you can break my special seat and get away with it?" Luffy yelled as he balled his fist. Leaping off the ship, the wings of a hawk sprang from Luffy's back as he flew full force right into the whale's eye. "Take this, you moron!" All the straw yelled, each one of them had tears of fear in their eyes. For a second, time seemed to freeze, for nothing could be heard but the sounds of the waves hitting the ship, but then the massive eye suddenly looked down at them and they screamed in terror. "It sees us!" they yelled, and looked ready to start paddling like crazy away from there. Luffy, naturally, stood his ground as he used his wings to hover in between the whale and his ship. "I'm not through with you. There's a lot more where that came from." However, before their idiotic captain could escalate the situation even more, Nami threw a lasso from the ship's rigging that snagged the childish captain around his neck. With a yank, the noose dragged Luffy to the Merry where Zoro and Usopp proceeded to kick him in the head, yelling at him that he could get them all killed. The massive aquatic mammal groaned angrily before he slowly opened his massive mouth, revealing the large teeth once again. "Please, no," Nami croaked out, now crying hard. But the rushing water going into the gaping mouth was like a current and their little ship didn't stand a chance as it was quickly pulled in. It acted as a black hole, they were pulled right into the whale's mouth and there wasn't anything they could do but hold on tight and hope for the best. But as they were swept away into the mouth, Luffy was knocked overboard, screaming the whole way as his crew called after him earnestly. Luffy almost hit the water, but had enough sense to regrow his wings and grab onto one of the iceberg-sized teeth and hung on tightly, lest the powerful winds brought up by the behemoth's breathing suck him in as well. "I am not gonna die here," Luffy growled as he held on for dear life. Through the wind he struggled to climb his way up. After a few moments, the whale closed his mouth, eating the going merry whole, the ship spinning as if it was going down the drain. However, it was almost anticlimactic when it was over. Just then, Luffy had been able to climb up to the head, breathing heavily as if he had run for hours. As he attempted to catch his breath, he had anger and fear on his face as he looked around, wondering what to do. "Aw man," Luffy stated, barely controlling his panic. Everyone was swallowed whole. "Hey!" he screamed as he started punching the rubbery skin under him, yelling that he spit them all at once. With each hit, Luffy shifted between some of his heavy hitter forms such as a grizzly bear, an elephant man, and a tiger hybrid. Seemingly ignoring the, for all intent and purpose, zoo hitting its hide, the whale stared to submerge. "Where do you think you're going, you jerk?" Luffy demanded, sounding more and more angry with each second. "Listen you big whale, I'm not gonna ask again. Stop sinking. I mean it. My friends and me are on an important adventure. I can't lose them." Luffy seemed to be going nuts as he took his chimera form and roared out, "Give them BAAAAACCCCCCCK." Meanwhile, the whale was continuing to go down and it would only be a matter of seconds before Luffy would sink along with it. The water was rising up quickly and as he stared around looking for where he should swim off to and thinking of any form that could do any damage to the whale, Luffy noticed something embedded in the whale's head. Luffy noticed it looked like a hatch for a submarine and, without thinking, he ran over to it and opened it so that he could jump in. He managed to close the door just as the entire area was submerged into the water. While he could have turned into any number of sea creatures, Luffy didn't want to lose track of the whale and by extension his crew. Despite the whale's size, Luffy didn't want to risk it. "I might not know what kind of whale this is," Luffy said to himself after he got a good look around and found himself to be standing in an iron hallway with light hanging every few feet, but I'm pretty sure most animals don't have doors and lighted hallways in them. "What kind of whale is this?" The Chimera boy started to walk down the hallway, but then something else happened. The room seemed to tilt and Luffy was knocked off his feet so that he went tumbling down. Luffy was bouncing around like a rubber ball down the hallway until he ended up in a large tunnel with metal walkways on either side of a river. He was going so fast that he couldn't even concentrate properly to get into a form that would prevent his fast descent. Luffy bounced around violently and landing with a painful thudding sound on the walkway. Gasping for breath, Luffy raised his head and stared around. Hey, that's weird, the whale's got a river inside it too. He gasped as the room began to shake again and was tilted up one way. Luffy tried to hold on so that he wouldn't go sliding down again, but it was too steep for him. He slipped and fell. Despite all the constant rocking back and forth, after a few minutes, Luffy had been able to straighten up enough so that he was now running down the hall, looking like he wanted nothing more than to get out of this place. He was waving his arms around in panic, trying to stop himself, but before he could, he looked up in time to see two people standing in front of a large, metal door. The two were a strange-looking duo. There was a middle-aged man with a large crown on the top of his long hair and the numbers 9 written on each of his cheeks. The second was a young woman with long, wavy blue hair tied in a tight ponytail and a bit of a stuck-up expression. The duo didn't seem pleased to see Luffy. They looked scared stiff at seeing someone come running at them, screaming at the top of his lungs, before he slammed right into them with such force that the doors were forced open and they were flying through the air. It was a bit of a shock to find that they were back under a blue sky and clouds, along with a small island, complete with a coconut tree and shack with the Mary right alongside it. Luffy. Zoro's voice came from the ship, and he saw the four of them standing on deck as they watched Luffy and the other two go flying by. Zoro. Is everyone okay? Luffy yelled in relief before he realized that there wasn't much to stand on and he was falling fast. So I can use a hand. He yelled before the three of them hit the digestive juice. Later, the crew had just fished Luffy and the other two out and were all on deck, and the constant shaking had stopped and there was a deep, almost humming sound that they could hear echoing off the whales, whose name turned out to be Laboon, stomach walls. I don't claim to speak whale, Nami said, going to the railing and looking around, but it seems to have calmed down a bit. Seems that way, Zoro said, looking at woman and the man. Now, we saved your lives for the time being, he told them irritably, you better talk and make it quick. Sanji was right up next to woman and was almost drooling when he saw her. She looked at him with a mixture of apprehension and repugnance as she moved closer to her partner. They then heard her whisper, Mr. 9, these heathens are pirates. Mr. 9 looked to her and they heard him whisper back, yes, that's painfully obvious, Miss Wednesday. But if we speak to their humanity and compassion, they should understand our plight. Maybe. You know, we can hear every word they're saying, Usopp said, all of them shaking their heads at this. Well, I noticed that some people do tend to think that pirates are stupid, Nami proclaimed. And she admitted that when you met people like Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp, she could understand why. You parasites are still here, yelled an aged voice from above them, and they looked up to see an old man standing up on a small iron platform next to the enormous gate that they had come charging out of. He had a rather stocky and muscular body, with a bald patch on the top of his head, but with white hair with yellow flower petal-like things. The man, Crocus, declared loudly, I grow weary of this and for the last time. As long as I draw breath you will not lay a single harmful finger on Laboon. He's back again, Usopp said as Luffy looked to them and asked who he was. Suddenly, the two weirdos were laughing. You can't bully us into abandoning our mission. Miss Wednesday said in a conceited voice as she picked up one of two bazookas that they had been carrying with them. We were sent here to hunt this whale and that's exactly what we're gonna do. Mr. 9 yelled in agreement as he also picked up one, and this time we won't let you interfere. They held up the guns as Luffy looked on. We're about to give this whale a new blowhole. Fire baby. As they launched the two cannonballs at the walls of Laboon's stomach, Crocus jumped right into the line of fire, protecting the whale from the weapons. Crocus, burnt and injured, fell into the pool of acid as the Straw Hats all gasped at what he had done. The woman let out an annoying laugh and proclaimed, your defiance is pointless. Go ahead. Waste your time, Mr. 9 yelled and Miss Wednesday continued to laugh, but make no mistake. That hulking beast will provide food for our town. With Crocus now trying to stay afloat in the acid, the two continued to cackle and Luffy seemed to lose his patience. He slammed their heads so hard that he knocked them out. What was that for? Usopp asked him. Luffy said looking up in aggravation, wanted to hit them. After they fished Crocus out and tied the two up, the old doctor invited them over to the island, which was actually a ship with an iron bottom so it could float here without worry of dissolving. I thank you for saving my life, Crocus said gratefully once he made himself comfortable in a lawn chair, though I must ask, why did you do it? I wasn't trying to save you, Luffy answered bluntly as he started to climb the tree, there was just something about those two I didn't like. Okay, I think it's about time we got some answers, Nami said in annoyance as Usopp tried to pull Luffy back down the tree. Who are these guys? She asked, pointing to Ms. Wednesday and Mr. 9. And how did you end up inside this whale? These two are thugs from a nearby town looking for whale meat, Crocus answered grumpily. If they caught him, Laboon could feed the townspeople for at least 2 or 3 years easy. All they're concerned with is feeding their fat, greedy bellies. Laboon. Nami repeated in confusion. That's the whale's name, Crocus answered gruffly, he a unique and magnificent creature. An island whale, a rare species that can only be found in the West Blue. I won't allow them to slaughter him for food. None of them noticed Luffy's ears perking up as he stored the tidbit of information away for later. But if these whales are found only in the West Blue, how did we end up meeting them in the Grand Line? Usopp asked in confusion. You saw how big they were, I guess that even an entire West Blue Sea isn't big enough all the time. Sanji answered, I mean, it's not that hard to think that such a large pod of whales don't visit the Grand Line from time to time. They're bigger than some sea kings and I'm sure they can take care of themselves. It's a shame he's stuck here so far from his domain, Crocus went on with sigh. You see there's a reason he keeps hitting his head against the red line and hollering at Reverse Mountain. There is? Nami asked a little quietly. Yes, Crocus answered looking at them. To put it one way, inside Laboon's body beats the heart of a human. He has most impatiently awaited and is eternally devoted to a certain band of pirates. He paused and added, going on 50 long years now. All who have seen Laboon ask the same questions. Crocus went on, why does he continuously strike his body against the red line? Why does he keep howling at Reverse Mountain? Listen closely and I will reveal Laboon's tragic story. Crocus sighed and began, one fine, sunny day, while I was fulfilling my duties as lighthouse keeper, some good-natured pirates came down from Reverse Mountain. They were followed by a baby whale, Spry and Chipper, who I would soon come to know as the one and only, Laboon. And so he told them the whole story. How these pirates had met up with a baby whale while they had sailed the West Blue, and Laboon had traveled with them for most of their journey. But knowing how dangerous the Grand Line was, they had decided that it was in Laboon's best interest to leave him behind where he would be safe. But Laboon had followed after them anyway because he had come to see these pirates as his family. The damage that their ship had taken just getting to the Grand Line however was very extensive, so they decided to stay here for several months to sing with Laboon until repairs were made. After about 3 months, and their ship finally repaired, they had asked Crocus to take care of Laboon for them until they came back. They had promised that when they finished sailing around the world, they would come back for him and that the whale would then come with them on their future adventures. Crocus sighed and finished his tale by saying, that was 50 long years ago. 50 years. Sanji repeated as they all stared at him. So Laboon has been waiting here all this time for his friends to return. Usopp whispered, his eyes wide and his jaw falling open at hearing that. No wonder he's upset, Nami said, looking up at the whale with new sympathy, that kind of weight would drive anyone crazy. They could hear Laboon's voice crying out once again as the Straw Hats climbed up on the ship and had Crocus lead them out through the door and through a long canal inside Laboon's body. This is some canal, Zoro suddenly said. Amazing this whale's still alive with a hole like this in its body. I suppose you're responsible for this? Sanji asked Crocus, as the little island boat went sailing alongside them. Crocus was reading the paper and didn't look up as he answered. Just a doctor's playful mind, he stated causally, as if telling them what day it was. Doctor, Usopp repeated in surprise. That's right, he answered, legally certified. I also ran a clinic on the Grand Line once upon a time. Before that I served as a ship's doctor. Really? Luffy said eagerly, as he sat up on the Broke Mary's head. That's great. Then join us. We need a doctor. Don't be ridiculous. He called back, stopping near a ladder and started to climb. I no longer have that kind of energy. Exploring the seas is a young man's job. Sanji asked what kind of doctor would hollow out a whale's insides. Maybe it's part of the treatment. Nami suggested as Crocus reached the top of the ladder and stood on a platform. The girl is right, he answered, looking back at them. With a creature of this size it's virtually impossible to treat it from the outside. Therefore I devised a more drastic solution. Here's the exit, he added as he then turned a wheel and the large door opened up and they could see the sky, the real sky. Don't you think 50 years is a bit extreme? Usopp suddenly asked, those pirates sure know how to test someone's patience. Idiot, don't you get it? This is the Grand Line. Sanji yelled at him as they moved the Mary's head onto the upper deck. His friends are dead. He blew out smoke from his cigarette and added, that whale can wait forever, they won't be back. Nami folded her arms and said, sad to say, but it's probably true. Back in the day when those guys traveled the Grand Line it was an uncharted sea. 1,000 times more treacherous than it is now. Usopp gave a grunt of anger and ran over to them, yelling, why are you all being so pessimistic? You don't know that they're dead. They could still come back for him. Come on, have some sympathy would ya? I thought it was very touching. I mean a whale still believing a promise that his friends made to him despite all these years. That's a true bond, right Pops? Indeed, Crocus agreed, but he leaned his hand against the coconut tree and answered, but the lesson here is that reality is cruel. Laboon's cohorts aren't dead. The truth is that they abandoned their quest. And then told them that he learned that the pirates turned and left the Grand Line through the calm belt. He couldn't claim to know exactly what happened to them, but he doubted that they would ever return for him here. So if I got this straight, Sanji said, now sounding angry, these pirates were a bunch of cowards who cared more about saving their own asses than keeping a promise to a friend. Usopp's voice rang out in outrage. Why would anyone abandon such a loyal creature? Just look at him. It's cruelty on a grand scale. But if you've known all this, why haven't you told him? Nami asked Crocus. Laboon can obviously communicate with you. He seems to understand humans quite well for a whale. I did tell him, Crocus admitted, down to the last miserable detail. He sighed as he said, that was the day Laboon began to howl at Reverse Mountain. Soon after he started slamming his body against the red line. It's as if he believes that wall is what keeps his friends away. And that by breaking it, he can clear the path for their return. He refuses to believe me because then he'll have to admit that it's over, Crocus said grimly, and that though terrifies him more than anything. There's no way for him to go back to the West Blue, so what we have here is a paradox of tragic proportions. Laboon is a lost soul dying to live with his friends, but won't stop killing himself to reach them. Tragedy, Sanji stated, but still, despite all the grief those pirates put him through, they did the same thing to you by saddling you with their burden. He pulled out his cigarette and asked what he was going to do, and added that he had done enough for Laboon. The scars on his hide are deep, Crocus answered simply, those in his heart are even deeper. He needs someone to tend his wounds and I'm all he's got. For years he's battered himself and I patched him up. A strange friendship, but it works. Their attention was brought out of the story as, with a loud cry, Luffy flew high up into the air on eagle's wings. They all watched in shock as Luffy reached Laboon's head, and found a place that was already bleeding, most likely where he had slammed his head against the red line earlier. This was the opening that Luffy needed, and transformed his body into that of a swordfish. The pointed tip of the fish was propelled by gravity right into the wound, causing blood to gush everywhere. This time, Laboon felt the pain and his eyes watered up in pain as he let out a loud howl of agony. Luffy, having transformed his body back into human form, gripped onto the whale's front tightly. If one were to look closely, they would notice the octopus suction cups that had sprouted along his arms. Between thrashes, Luffy would unstick one of his arms and deliver a powerful punch to the open wound. Laboon was now angry as he jumped right out of the sea and slammed Luffy right into the red line with his body. The waves that the whale was creating almost ended up capsizing their ship, and with the size of the waves, there wasn't anything the Straw Hats could do but hold on for dear life. Luffy got right back up and was now grinning cockily at Laboon. The whale was now seriously ticked off and went to smash him with his tail, which did end up hitting him. Luffy then grew in size to that of an elephant and dug his tusks into the whale's side, but Laboon retaliated by slamming him into the lighthouse. This continued on until Laboon had actually managed to lift a part of his body onto land to try and go at him again, but then Luffy suddenly screamed out, "It's a draw." Those words shocked Laboon so much that he stopped. Luffy looked up, dirty and bruised, but was smiling. "I'm stronger than I look. But I had a feeling you knew that." Laboon just looked back, and even those who didn't understand whale could tell that he was completely lost here to what was going on. "I can always tell when someone's itching for a fight," Luffy told him as he looked up. "Well, if you want a battle I'll give you one. Your shipmates used to spare with you, didn't they, and you miss it? Well, I can rival anything they threw at ya. Tell you what, after me and my friends travel the Grand Line, we'll come back here and find you." Tears were forming in Laboon's giant eyes as Luffy finished, "Then you better be ready for a rematch." Tears were now falling from the whale's eyes, the anger and madness that had been there only seconds before seemed to fade as he let out another howl. But this time, it wasn't of sadness, it was the thrill of another fight. After a while later, after they had retrieved the mast off Laboon's head, Luffy had gotten some paint and had managed to do a very poorly drawn version of their Jolly Roger on the whale's head where the scars were. It looked just like Luffy's first attempt to draw their flag before, and it just looked so funny painted there that they all laughed a little at it. "Hey, not bad," Luffy commented as he looked back to admire his work, also covered in paint. "Consider this a symbol of my promise to come to battle with you." He told him, "Course, it's a rushed paint job, so you'll have to be careful and avoid hitting your head or you'll rub it off." "Understand." Laboon grunted in acknowledgement. "Good whale," Luffy stated happily. Nami told Luffy to clean himself up as she tried to work out a plan for the Grand Line journey. Luffy looked annoyed, but did what she said. However, as he got back to the deck he spotted two things different here. First off, Ms. Wednesday and Mr. Nine were gone, and second, he spotted what looked to be a cross between a compass and an hourglass rolling around on the deck. "What's this thing?" Luffy said to himself as he picked it up. But then the crew heard Nami screaming and the noise startled Laboon so that he dove under the water. "You mind?" Luffy yelled back as Sanji and Usopp climbed up to talk with her, Sanji bearing plates of food. "Keep it down. You idiots." Nami's voice yelled, "The compass is broken." Looking surprised, Luffy put the strange device into his pocket and they followed him up so that they were sitting at a small table outside the lighthouse with the other three already gathered around it. Nami was there with the map and her compass in front of her, the little needle was spinning around and round, never stopping. "The needle just spins. It won't stop," she told them all. As they all talked amongst themselves about it, Crocus, who had been standing close by, turned to look at them. "It is sadly apparent that none of you possess the slightest knowledge to how things work here," he said. "Did you all come here to die?" As they all looked to Crocus and he explained, with Sanji warning Luffy not to eat all the food, there is nothing wrong with your compass. The Grand Line has little regards for the rules of the sea. Common sense is useless in this place. The needle, Nami asked slowly, why does it spin? And so Crocus told them the reason why normal compasses don't work on the Grand Line was because of the nature of the island's magnetic fields. In order to navigate the Grand Line, a special compass called a log pose must be used. The log pose works by locking onto one island's magnetic field and then locking onto another island's magnetic field. Luffy pulled out the device, which happened to be a log pose, that he found earlier and Nami ended up punching him for not telling them about it. He argued back that he found it on deck and assumed that those two must have dropped it when they escaped as Nami took it from him. Crocus then finished up his explanation by telling them that there were a total of 7 different routes that diverge from Reverse Mountain and travel east before merging again to the last island, Raftel. An island that's existence was only confirmed by Roger himself. Raftel, Nami repeated softly. That's it. Usopp yelled excitedly, a big grin on his face. That must be where the One Piece is hidden. That's the most promising theory, Crocus said, but no one has been able to set foot on Raftel Island since then. Luffy, who was chewing on some of the bones of the meal, grinned, don't worry. We'll know soon enough. Crocus was looking at him with new surprise as Luffy finished the food and everyone began yelling at him for not leaving anything for them. Sanji, especially, was furious and beat him up for it, however ended up breaking the log pose in the process. Nami kicked both men into the sea, screaming that she was going to kill them if they didn't get out of her face. Fortunately, Crocus had one and he gave it to them as a thank you for helping Laboon. Laboon then came out of the water with both Sanji and Luffy, but also brought up Miss Wednesday and Mr. 9. Since they lost their log pose, they needed a ride back. This brings us to Luffy sitting up on the table with Vivi and Mr. 9 on their knees. Whiskey Peak, repeated Luffy in puzzlement, that's a funny name. So what it is? Usopp asked. It's where we live, Mr. 9 snapped, before he added more respectfully, sir. As Nami asked them what happened to their ship, Vivi answered nervously that it was destroyed. Asking us for a ride is pushing it, Mr. 9, Nami said slyly, especially after you tried to kill the whale. But when they tried to get some real answers out of them, the two refused to answer. Miss Wednesday and Mr. 9 were now begging, telling them that they couldn't tell them anything, because of their line of business. They told them that the only thing they wanted was to just get home. We have confidence in your character, can't you grant us the same courtesy? Miss Wednesday asked. Please, we're begging you, show some mercy. Mr. 9 added. Don't do it, Crocus advised them at once, these two fools are dishonest to the core. They can't be trusted. Nami held up the broken log pose still on her wrist and told them that they didn't have another one and asked if they still wanted to ride with them. The reaction was hilarious as they began yelling at her for trying to trick them. But Nami merely smiled devilishly and said in a fake innocent voice that fooled no one, oh, sorry. I forgot. Crocus gave us his so. And as soon as they heard that, they got back to their knees and began begging for pity again. Mr. 9's face was twitching horribly, as if he was biting back what he really wanted to say. But to their surprise, Luffy said that it was alright for them to ride with them. Why? Usopp demanded, pointing an accusing finger at them, these two are obviously pretty shady characters. Why would we take them anywhere? It's fine, Luffy repeated, don't sweat the small stuff. It'll be alright. Choose your route carefully, Crocus warned him seriously from behind him, once you head out from here, you'll be committed to that course. It's okay, Luffy said happily. If we don't like it, we'll try a different route next time. Crocus smiled at Luffy's words, admiring the younger man's youthful spirit. Okay, it's time we get going, Luffy declared as he jumped to his feet and looked to the rest of his crew. Now that me and Laboon have an understanding, I can leave with a clear conscience. Just who in the world do you think you are anyway? Ms. Wednesday asked as Luffy stretched out his stiff body. What's that? Me? Luffy asked looking back at her before he said confidently, well, I'm the man who'll be king of the pirates. Crocus smiled widely at that, as if remembering something from a long time ago. But Miss Wednesday and Mr. 9 covered their mouths as they fought back the laughs. With the sun setting they all climbed on board the repaired ship with Crocus letting them know that their log should be pointing directly to Whiskey Peak and they finished saying their goodbyes. Luffy looked to Laboon. I'm off, Laboon, he said, be ready to fight when I get back. Laboon gave a surprisingly soft, almost purring sound as the ship pulled away. Next stop, Luffy cried out, Whiskey Peak. Ready gang, let's set sail. They all cheered as Laboon let out noises of farewell, the crew waving goodbye to him and Crocus. The crew and their passengers were surprised a few days later to find the Mary with a thick layer of snow on deck. Sanji was shoveling it all off, but each shovelful that he threw overboard was replaced quickly as the snow continued to fall. Luffy and Usopp meanwhile were fighting over snowmen when they heard Nami screaming in horror from inside the cabin. What's wrong? Usopp yelled as he and Luffy were stopped in the middle of their snowball fight. Sounds mad, Luffy said knowingly as Sanji declared that he would save Nami from whatever the problem was. Nami, dressed in a warm coat, came out of the cabin, staring at the log pose in horror. "No way!" Nami screamed before she cried out. "Make a hard turn 180 degrees, hurry." "A180. Usopp repeated, baffled as he dropped his handful of snow. "Why would you want us to turn back?" "Did you forget something?" Luffy asked curiously. "The ship has turned around. We're sailing in the wrong direction." She yelled at them, still looking at the log pose. "I only took my eyes off the log pose for a second." She looked up at the sky and said, "I thought the waves were calm." Just then, Miss Wednesday asked from inside the cabin in that same conceited way, "You're not a very good navigator, are you? You can't trust anything here. Not the wind, sky, waves, clouds, nothing is what it seems in the sea. The only way to get reliable direction on the Grand Line is with the log pose." Everyone knows that. Miss Wednesday finished with a satisfied smirk. But the woman had finally gone too far and Nami kicked her and her partner outside. "Shut your condensating mouths and do something useful around here," she screamed as she took charge. "Brace the yard. Force the wind starboard. Turn the ship 180 degrees to the left. Usopp man the lateen sails. Sanji take the helm." When they went running off she then barked orders at the two, "Work you two. This girl's crazy," Mr. Nine stated as they began pulling ropes. All except Zoro were working desperately, as he was sleeping against the side of the boat, covered in snow. "Hey wait, looks like the wind changed," Usopp yelled, getting their attention, and he was right. It changed rapidly from freezing cold to a springtime gale. And that was how it went. The winds would constantly change, waves would become violent or calm when you least expect it. Once they almost hit an iceberg as a fog came pouring in. Although they had managed to turn just in time, the helm was damaged and Usopp went off to fix the leak. Dark clouds came pouring in and they were battling the fierce wind right after that as Sanji was forced to keep bringing food for them to keep their strength up. The winds were tearing the sails apart and water was filling the bottom of the ship. It was chaos. Thankfully, the horrible weather had finally calmed down enough that they could all rest on deck, trying to catch their breath. But true to form, Zoro had finally woken up and was telling them all that they shouldn't be so lazy just because the weather was nice. He didn't notice the evil eyes that Nami, Sanji, and Usopp were giving him as he finally noticed the two newcomers on deck. He went on to ask what they were doing there and Luffy explained the whole thing about taking them home. Grinning evilly, Zoro bent down to look at them. "So tell me, what are your strange names again? 'Cause I don't think you two can be trusted." My name is Mr. Nine," Mr. Nine croaked out. "I'm called Miss Wednesday," the woman added nervously, her eyes twitching a little fearfully. "Right," Zoro said skeptically, his thumb under his chin, "you know those names sound familiar and that's what's bothering me. In fact, the more I think about the more I'm sure I've heard them somewhere before." The two were looking terrified just as Nami hit Zoro over the head from behind and began to tell him that he was lucky that they didn't throw him overboard for sleeping when they did all the work. But as he glared back, looking ready to tell her off, she hit him 3 times over the head so that he was on the deck defeated, nursing his wounds. Nami stood up in front of them all and declared, "Listen up everyone. There's no way to know what's gonna happen next." During the terror that most of us just experienced, she shot Zoro another evil look before continuing, "I came to an understanding why this sea was named the Grand Line." She held up her fist and finished, "My navigation skills are useless here. Anything can happen, but mark my words I will guide us through." She then pointed through the mist and yelled out, "We're here. Our first journey on the Grand Line comes to an end." And through the thick mist, they could see the outlines strange, cactus-shaped mountains with several buildings set up on either side of the river that they were traveling on. Luffy was crying out in joy at the idea of visiting another island. As he and the rest of the crew talked in excited voices, Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine both jumped to the railing. They both said their thanks and goodbyes and chuckled darkly. "Bye-bye baby," they finally finished speaking together before jumped overboard. "That was a quick exit," Nami said. "I guess we'll never learn what those nut jobs are up to," Usopp added darkly, looking over the edge to try and see where they went. "Who cares?" Luffy asked, turning back to the matter at hand. "We're landing." The pirates had received a surprisingly warm welcome from the villagers. They even threw a giant party in the pirates' honor. This turned out to be a setup, however, as the town was actually a den of bounty hunters working for an organization called Baroque Works who hoped to capture the Straw Hats when they were out cold from the party. This didn't go according to plan for them though, as Zoro had only faked being drunk and was able to take on the small army of bounty hunters, easily tearing through their ranks. Soon, most of the buildings were mostly destroyed. There was rubble and broken boards cast every few feet along with giant shards of broken glass and the walls around them looked close to crumbling away. The damage, however, was not all caused by the fighting between Zoro and the Baroque Works. Luffy and Zoro, bloodlust in both their eyes, came bursting through a wall and were going at each other. Zoro's blades clashed against Luffy's arms, which had transformed into the bladed pincers of a praying mantis. As it turns out, the Chimera man had woken up later in the night and, seeing the beaten bounty hunters, thought that the swordsman was attacking their hosts for no reason. As a result, the captain wanted to fight him over it. So caught up in their fight that they didn't even notice the two figures who were pulling themselves out of some of the rubble, a man and woman. The woman had short blonde hair, was wearing a yellow dress with a lemon-like pattern and with 2 lemon earrings dangling from her ears. The man with her was a tall, dark-skinned man with black hair and short spiky dreadlocks. He also wore a brown trench coat with the number 5 printed on along with dark sunglasses. These two were Mr. 5 and his partner Miss Valentine's, 2 of Baroque Works agents. Miss Wednesday was also there, riding a duck that size of a horse. She looked different from before. She looked a little beat up as well and her long hair was let down, but she was still staring at Zoro and Luffy with terror on her face. The first two were both beat up, covered in bruises and cuts all over their faces. Looking at them, they didn't have to think hard to what must have happened. The two went charging at the fighting crewmates, convinced that they could win. But they picked the wrong people to fight. "You can't beat us," Mr. 5 yelled, prepared to die at the hands of Baroque Works officer agents. Both Luffy and Zoro stopped their fight and glared murderously at the agents, stopping them all dead in their tracks. The two looked truly terrifying. Their faces were covered in bloody scratches, while their eyes were devoid of any sympathy or benevolence. There was nothing but cold rage that was so strong that they could all feel chills going up their spines. Luffy's were like looking into the eyes of a rabid lion while Zoro's held all the ferocity of a demon. "Shut up and go away," they both yelled, raising their fists. "You're interfering," and together they sent the two flying with such force that one might have felt sympathy for the two poor fools. "With our fight," the two finished screaming out, a trace of evil flashing there. They were sent crashing into the side of the buildings until they were both out cold for good this time. Zoro grumbled to himself, "Stupid pests. Messing with our fight," Luffy growled in agreement as Miss Wednesday was staring at them in amazement as they both went back to glaring at each other. Zoro glared at Luffy, now looking completely insane here. "Shall we continue?" he demanded. "Yeah," Luffy snapped back, looking just as demented as Zoro at that moment. With a crack of his arms, they became the burly clawed arms of a black bear. But as the two moved in for another round, their muscles bulging and the energy they were releasing seemed to bend the air itself as they clashed like sparks between them. However, before these two powerhouses could collide, Nami appeared out of nowhere and punched them both so hard in the faces that they were sent flying, knocked right out of their frenzy mode. "You two, what the heck do you think you're doing here?" Nami yelled at them both as they lay there, looking stunned at what just hit them. "It's lucky for you that you managed to keep the girl safe. You almost lost us 1,000,000,000 berries." She picked them both up by the scruffs of their necks, like how a babysitter would to two brothers who just didn't want to get along, and yelled, "You understand?" Miss Wednesday was staring at her, not understanding what she was talking about, as Luffy and Zoro were continuing to fight by pulling each other's faces and small punches like little kids. "What do you mean?" the other woman asked anxiously. "What berries? I don't understand. Why did you save me?" As the two continued to fight where they hung in Nami's grasp, Nami smiled and said to her, "About that, I think we need to have a little chat. You see, you and I have to work out a contract for a reward." She frowned at the two before she finally slammed them into the ground to stop them fighting for good. "Knock it off," she screamed. Later, the trio and Miss Wednesday, or rather her real name Vivi, were all seated in an alleyway. Luffy was sitting up on a barrel and was laughing his head off. "Oh," he said in new understanding, "they were all bounty hunters. Why didn't you just say so, Zoro?" "I did, like 12 times. Zoro yelled back furiously at him. "What a funny mix-up." Luffy laughed before Nami snarled at them to shut up, which they did at once. "Would you drop it?" Zoro demanded as Nami turned to Vivi and offered to take her home for 1,000,000,000 berries. Apparently, Vivi was a princess of the Kingdom of Alabasta who had been undercover at Baroque Works for 2 years with her bodyguard Agaram, codenamed Mr. 8. However, her cover had been blown and Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine had been sent to deal with her before they ran into the two monsters. Agaram had begged Nami, who like Zoro faked being unconscious, into helping the princess. Nami agreed, though she blackmailed the man into paying 1,000,000,000 berries to do so. "No, I can't," Vivi said sharply and Nami blinked in surprise. "But I appreciate the help you've given me so far." "Why not?" Nami demanded at once. "You're a princess, aren't you? So aren't you rich? Do you know much about Alabasta Kingdom?" Vivi asked sadly. And so she went into details about her home and how they were now in the middle of a civil war. The people are revolting and the entire kingdom was on the verge of self-destructing, so she had decided to take matters into her own hands when she discovered that someone was now behind this war. So she and her companion Agaram infiltrated Baroque Works to find out who was behind it all for the last 2 years. "You've got some guts considering you're a princess," Zoro said in an impressed tone. "So, were you able to find out what their plan was?" She nodded just as Nami answered, "To create an ideal nation." Vivi looked up at her in surprise and she explained, "Anyway, that's what Agaram said it was." "Is that what you found out?" Vivi looked back down at her knees and admitted, "It's not. That was only a cover story the boss was using. It's a lie to cover their tracks." Her eyes darkened and she finished, "Their true goal is to take over Alabasta Kingdom." They all just looked at her as she said that she now had to get back home and warn everyone what was really happening before it was too late. She looked ready to cry and Nami sighed. Okay, I get it, she said in annoyance, I see how it is. Yeah, it's all starting to make sense now. I suppose you wouldn't have much money laying around during a civil war. Hey, Luffy said eagerly, so did you find out who's in charge? Vivi looked horrified at the suggestion. What? She screamed, causing everyone to become startled at her sudden change in tone, the boss's identity. You shouldn't ask that, but you know, don't you? Luffy asked calmly. Ask me anything but that. She yelled, waving her hands around, if I tell you, your lives will be in danger too. Yeah, I'll pass. Nami added with a nervous laugh, clearly letting them know that she was happy not knowing. This guy is trying to take over an entire country after all. I wouldn't want someone like that chasing after me, thank you. No, you don't. Vivi said loudly, I don't care how strong you people are, you wouldn't stand a chance against one of the warlords of the sea. Against Crocodile. Silence. Who now? Luffy asked, and Vivi turned white as she realized what she said and covered her mouth when Nami's jaw fell open in horror. You had to say it, Zoro said darkly before they felt like they were being watched. They looked up and they saw a strange sight. There was an otter in a white one-piece cloth with purple polka dots and a vulture with a flowered swim cap, both with thick sunglasses. They all looked up at the duo for a moment before the otter jumped up on the vulture's back and they took off. It turns out the two animals were Mr. 13 and Miss Friday. They served as Crocodile's messengers and were also in charge of executing any Baroque Works agents that failed their missions. Nami then grabbed hold of Vivi's front and began to shake her as she screamed at her, with Vivi telling her how sorry she was. The men on the other hand were looking excited at the thought. Hey, a warlord. That's cool. Luffy yelled out, his eyes shining. Not too bad, Zoro agreed. Luffy began to laugh wildly as Nami continued to yell at Vivi before she began to cry. Being hunted by a warlord in the Grand Line. That's more than I can handle. She cried, covering her face. So when do we get to see this guy? Zoro asked conversationally. I wonder what he's like. Luffy added as Nami yelled out, shut up you. She then turned and began heading down the road. It's been nice knowing you idiots. Thanks for everything. She yelled at them. Where are you going? Luffy called after her. They don't know what I look like yet. She yelled back, I'm leaving. And no sooner had she said that did the otter show up with 3 very detailed drawings of Luffy, Zoro, and Nami. Nami clapped as she saw them, wow, that's so lifelike. And that was when they took off, their silhouette against the bright moon. Nami turned back to them and yelled, no use in leaving now. I'm really sorry, Vivi said again quietly, but Luffy said that she'll get over it. Where's she planning on going anyway? Zoro asked, as a twisted grin appeared on his face. Well then, it looks like the 3 of us will be sitting right on top of Baroque Works, hit list. Luffy chuckled to himself, that's so awesome. Nami however, was now sulking in a curled up ball on the ground with Vivi trying to think of something to say to cheer her up. You have nothing to fear. Someone suddenly yelled. The Straw Hats turned to see a fairly tall, muscular man standing there with 3 stuffed dummies and stared intensely at the group of pirates. Though it was clear he was a man, he was dressed in clothes similar to Vivi's, and with thick tube-like hair had been done up in a ponytail, and even wearing lipstick. It's, the man, who turned out to be a Garam, coughed. He started to hum scales before he went on to say, it's gonna be alright princess, I've come up with a plan. A Garam, Vivi exclaimed, coming over to him. What are you? That's a really funny outfit old guy, Luffy said as he looked over the outfit. An entire parade of idiots, Nami whispered where she huddled. A Garam began to tell them his plan. Since Baroque Works had learned who Vivi really was, agents would be sent after her to try and kill her. So he came up with the plan to disguise himself as her and try to draw their attention to give them time to escape. So these things are us? Luffy asked as he poked one of the dummies. A decoy, Zoro summed up for them. While Baroque Works is busy chasing after me, a Garam finished up. The rest of you will head with Vivi straight for Alabasta Kingdom along a less direct route. Hold on, just a second, Nami screamed, finally getting back to her feet. Who said we were gonna take her with us? They looked to her and she finished, we still haven't discussed the matter of payment. Payment for what? Luffy asked as he stared at Vivi. Take her where? Where've you been, Luffy? Zoro asked impatiently as he stood up and jerked his thumb to a Garam. The old man here wants us to take the princess back home to her kingdom. Oh, is that what all this yelling is about? Luffy said, getting it, and Vivi looked to him in surprise as he finished by saying, sure thing. Nami completely lost her cool and screamed out, Crocodile may already be after us. Is this crocodile guy really that dangerous? Luffy asked a Garam curiously. A Garam looked back and explained about how he was one of the 7 warlords, and because of that, there wasn't a bounty on his head. However, once upon a time, his bounty had once been over 80 million. 80 million, that's 4 times Arlong's bounty. Nami screamed out, there's no way. Sure, Luffy answered with a confident smile as memory Nami looked like she was about to burst into tears again. It sounds like it'll be fun. "We are forever grateful," Agaram said, and they could hear the gratitude in his voice as he led them to a small ship and put the dummies on board before he turned back and spoke in a much higher voice. "Now then, I, Vivi, will leave from here." Luffy began to laugh. "Great imitation, old guy." "Imitation of who?" Zoro asked, looking at Agaram like he thought that he was insane. But Agaram didn't pay any attention to them as he asked Vivi for the eternal pose and she handed it over, looking like she was doing this against her will. They could all see the sadness in her eyes. The truth was that she didn't want this, but there wasn't anything she could do about it. "What's an eternal pose?" Nami suddenly asked and Agaram looked at her in surprise. "You've never heard of it?" he asked her. "You can say it's sorta like a permanent version of the log pose," Agaram answered, holding up the little compass. It looked a great deal like the one Nami wore, only this one was made to look a little more like an hourglass shape with only one orb in the middle with needle floating inside it and the name Alabasta was printed on the top. Whereas a log pose will always lead sailors to the next island on the course, an eternal pose will forever remember the magnetic energy of the island stored inside it. So it will always point to that island and no other. And this eternal pose is set to Alabasta Kingdom. And you're going to use this to set your course to home. Vivi asked him worriedly. "Princess Vivi, please take the indirect island hopping route to Alabasta," Agaram told her softly, silently letting her know that he knew the dangers, but he was ready to take them. "I have never gone that way myself, but you should only need to pass 2 or 3 islands to get there." He turned his attention towards Luffy. "Please, take care of the princess in my absence." "Yeah," Luffy said cheerfully. Agaram, Vivi started to say something, but her words died on her lips, unable to come out and say what she really wanted. "I expect that your journey will be a difficult one," he said with a gentle voice and an encouraging smile. "Please, be careful." Vivi still didn't look happy about it, but she forced a smile and took his hand as they promised that they would see each other again soon. They watched as Agaram set sail, all of them saying goodbye. But before he got too far away, there was a bright light and, to their horror, the ship exploded apart. The blinding light and force of the shockwave created a great wind and blew back at them, everyone looking stunned. The ship went up in flames, burning everything until there wasn't anything but a pile of burnt wood on the water. "They're already after us," Nami exclaimed fearfully, once she got over the shock. "That's impossible." Luffy said nothing as he turned around and walked over a few feet to where his hat, that had been blown off by the shockwave before, and put it back on his head. He let out a loud yell, and looked ready to charge. Now was the time that they had to hurry and leave before they were killed as well. Zoro was right behind him as he yelled at Nami about the log. She quickly checked and let him know that it was set, they could leave. "Get the girl," he yelled back as he turned back to run with Luffy. "Come on. Let's go." As Nami tried to pull Vivi away from the horrible sight, Zoro told Luffy that he'll get the ship ready and that he should get the other two. "Right," Luffy answered, "I'm on it." He sprinted back down the street to the building where they had been staying. He broke down the door in his haste and looked wildly around the room for the cook and sniper. It was clear that there had been a party here, the whole place was a mess, and the two were both passed out on the floor, snoring loudly. Luffy grabbed hold of Usopp's nose and Sanji's leg, waking them up, but not soon enough. "Come on," Luffy shouted as he ran out the door, which was only big enough for him, and so he pulled his two crewmates out through either side of the walls, both of them yelling in pain and confusion to what was going on. Sanji was cursing at him to stop it and Usopp was screaming that his nose was gonna fall off. Luffy didn't stop until they reached where the ship was docked, and Zoro was just finishing up pulling up the anchor. "Hey, I got them," Luffy screamed up, holding them up. "Bring them up, we're ready to go," Zoro told him. Luffy turned around to check and saw Usopp and Sanji were both out cold. "What? They're still asleep." He shrugged and dragged them onto the Going Merry. Suddenly, they heard arguing and, they looked behind them to see that Nami brought Vivi here and she was yelling at her, "We don't have time to look for him. I'm not just gonna leave him here." Vivi yelled back. "But listen," Nami screamed, looking close to slapping her. Zoro yelled out asking what was the problem down at them. "Apparently her duck's gone missing." Nami screamed up at him. "And now she's refusing to leave without him." "This duck?" he asked, pointing to the duck that was standing next to him. "He's here," both women yelled in fury. "Yeah, he was there when I climbed on board," Zoro stated. "Made it here before I did," Zoro informed them. With the knowledge that her duck was safe and sound, Vivi climbed up the ladder, while giving them all directions to the best way out of here. With the sails opening, the Straw Hats were more than happy to say goodbye to Whiskey Peak and sailed off into a thick fog. As they got underway, Zoro turned to Vivi. "Hey," he stated and she looked up in surprise. "Mr. Bushido?" she asked. Zoro asked how many people did she think that they were going to send after them. Vivi told them that there were at least 2,000 loyal employees and several bases like this one set up in the area. As she told them that, Sanji and Usopp both came to and began screaming that they wanted to stay another night. "We should have just left them behind," Zoro said irritably as Nami went and punched them both, shutting them up. "Nami, will you explain it to them?" "I just did," she answered. "Okay, that was fast," he said in surprise. I left out the complicated parts. She added. By this point, the first rays of light were starting to appear on the horizon and they were clear of the island, though they were now forced to sail very carefully through all the fog and avoid the rocks. One false move, and they could end up sinking right here. Finally, it's getting light out, Nami sighed in relief. I'm just glad we got away from the people chasing us, a voice said. That's for sure, Nami agreed. With all this fog, we'll need to be careful to avoid the rocks, the voice spoke again. I'll take care of it. Nami shouted confidently before she realized that she didn't know who had spoken. She looked to Luffy and asked hesitantly, wait, did you? Luffy looked at her in confusion, until they heard someone clear their throat behind them. And as everyone looked up they saw a figure sitting comfortably on the upper railings. The new figure was a woman in her 20s. She was a tall, slender, yet athletic woman with shoulder-length black hair. She has blue eyes, with dark, wide pupils, and she has a long, thin and defined nose. Her skin was lightly tan, and she wore a revealing purple cowgirl outfit, complete with hat. It's you. Vivi stuttered in shock and fear. I just happened to run into your dear Mr. 8 a while back, the woman said coldly. He didn't look so good. Vivi's eyes turned dark as she yelled, so you killed a Garam. You, what are you doing on my ship and how did you get here? Luffy demanded of the stranger, who are you? Answer him. Vivi yelled, what are you doing here, Miss All Sunday? So you know who she is? Nami questioned. Which of the numbered guys is she partners with? Her partner is Mr. Zero, the boss, Vivi said gravely. She's a bad guy. Luffy questioned her as Nami screamed in fright. She was the only one who knew the boss's identity, Vivi explained as she continued to glare up at Miss All Sunday, as if expecting her to start attacking at any moment. That's how we found out who he actually is. By following her back to him. However, Miss All Sunday said, to be accurate, I allowed it. So she's a good guy then, Luffy said, trying to understand this. I know you knew we were there. Vivi yelled, you're the one who told the boss what we knew. Weren't you? That's right, she answered in a bored tone. Alright, so then she is bad. Luffy finally concluded, pouting, and Zoro told him to cut it out. You still haven't told us what it is you're doing here. Vivi yelled again and the agent was looking annoyed at the rudeness. Oh, right, she said coolly, you were just so serious about the whole thing I couldn't help myself. A princess doing whatever it took to help her country while making herself an enemy of Baroque works. The idea was just so ridiculous. Vivi was looked enraged as she screamed out at the top of her lungs, you killed HHHHHHIIIIIIIIMMMMMM. The 5 straw hats had leapt into action. Sanji and Usopp were both up on their feet, Usopp with his slingshot loaded on one side, and Sanji on the other with a gun pointed directly at her head. Zoro was below them with Nami, both of them had weapons as well. Usopp and Sanji exchanged a brief conversation to what was going on, but the woman didn't look worried at all. I would really appreciate it if you would, she said softly, and it all happened so quickly that they all missed what happened as she apparently threw the 2 off the railing. Stop pointing those at me. You mean? Zoro said gasped. She's eaten, Nami went on before her staff and Zoro's sword were knocked out of their hands. And then Zoro finished, a devil fruit. But which one? What's her power? Nami cried out, now standing farther back with the others in front of her like shields. Sanji looked up to get a good look at her and hearts reappeared. Wow, he gasped, as if he had never seen anything like her before, now that I get a look, you're beautiful. Miss All Sunday chuckled a little at Sanji's words before she looked back to Vivi. Now there's no need to get so excited, she informed her, you can all calm down. I haven't been given any orders to follow you here. I have no reason to fight you. Holding up her hand, she used her powers to get hold of Luffy's straw hat, spinning it around on her hand in a bored way. So, you're the captain, she said, looking over at Luffy. I've heard so much about you, Monkey D. Luffy, give me my hat back. Luffy yelled enraged, shaking his fists at her. You don't want me to come up there and take it. You are a bad person. I demand you leave this instant. Usopp yelled from his hiding place behind the mast. Bad luck, the woman corrected as she put Luffy's hat on top of her own before going on, picking up a princess who Baroque works already made up their mind to see eliminated, protected by a mere handful of pirates. But your luck gets even worse. Because of the direction your log pose is indicating, you see. Nami was looking at their log in fear as Miss All Sunday answered, the name of the next island is Little Garden. We won't even need to lift a finger, she finished up, you'll all be dead long before you reach Alabasta. My hat. Give it to me. Luffy screamed, obviously not caring about anything she said. Leave now, evil doer. Usopp yelled, evil doer. Zoro repeated, rolling his eye, seriously. That's all a matter of opinion, the cowgirl answered, not at all offended by it. You don't think it's a little foolish allowing yourselves to be wiped out? She asked as she threw back Luffy's hat and something over to Vivi. When she held it up, they saw that it was an eternal pose. An eternal pose, Vivi whispered as she looked at it suspiciously. Using that, you can just skip right past Little Garden without stopping, All Sunday answered her a little smugly. She also explained that this one island was near Alabasta and that none of their agents know that course, so they shouldn't be followed. What? So she's good after all? Nami suddenly asked as she looked up at her, trying to figure out what was going on. But the gesture seemed to make Vivi angry as she yelled up, "Why are you giving this to us? It's gotta be a trap," Zoro said firmly, but Vivi was staring at the pose with a wondering expression and they could tell that she was trying to figure out what to do. "Oh, does it?" All Sunday asked as Luffy walked over to Vivi and grabbed the eternal pose out of her hands. "Forget your thingy. We don't need it," he yelled as he then crushed it until it broke into nothing but shards of glass and wood. Nami and Vivi were both looking horrified at what he had done. Nami obviously didn't feel that way as she kicked him hard in the face and knocked him to the deck. "You jerk," she screamed out, pointing up at the woman. She just went out of her way to show us an easier course to follow. Maybe she actually is trying to help us get away. But Luffy didn't react at all for a moment before he turned to look up at All Sunday and declared that she wasn't the one who decided where the ship goes. Both Luffy and the woman looked at each other for a few extra long seconds, with All Sunday just looking at him, as if she was trying to figure out a complicated question, before she smiled. As if she had it answered. "Well, that's too bad," All Sunday told them all casually as she walked along the upper deck, looking a little satisfied as she did so. It was as if she was glad that he had decided not to accept her offer. Nami looked ready to yell again, but Luffy answered, "She blew up that funny old man and he was nice, so now I hate her." "I'm sorry to hear that," she stated looking back at him, "and I'm sorry you didn't accept my offer. If you survive, I hope we meet again." "No," Luffy said childishly, and she actually chuckled at that. All Sunday gave them one last smile before she jumped ship, and when they went running off to look, they found her leaving on the back of a giant sea turtle, heading back to Whiskey Peak. Luffy watched after the turtle with bright eyes as Vivi fell to her knees in defeat. "That woman," she cried out, "I don't have the slightest idea what's going through her head." "Then there's no point in thinking about it, is there?" Nami asked irritably. "There's someone on this boat who's just like that," Zoro added as Usopp demanded to know what was going on and Sanji swooned over Vivi. After quickly explaining everything that was going on to Sanji and Usopp, their cook sighed and confessed that he was sorry that he missed all the fun. "But it sounds like there'll still be plenty of demand for my skills. No need to worry now that your sleeping prince has awoken, my sweet, you'll be safe." Usopp was stating the opposite. He was glad that he is asleep, as Sanji asked if Nami was jealous. She gave him a frosty look and gave him a definite no. "Excuse me?" Vivi asked hesitantly, and they all looked to her. She was standing there, looking truly terrible that she got them involved in this mess. "I'm sorry, but is it really alright that I'm on your ship? I'm just causing you a lot of trouble." Nami, meanwhile, looked put out as she came over and started poking Vivi's forehead. "It's a little late for apologizes, don't you think? If you didn't want to cause us trouble, you shouldn't have told us who you were." "Sorry for that," Vivi said. "Isn't that right, Luffy?" Nami yelled and Luffy cheered, saying that he was hungry too, which didn't do anything to boost Vivi's confidence. "Well, for now," Zoro said, ending the fight, "at least we know where we're heading to." "Little garden, huh?" Sanji said. "Remember what she said?" Usopp said worriedly, "Are we gonna die?" Luffy laughed. "Who knows? Let's go, pirates." Later they were all standing on the Mary's deck with Sanji passing out fruit drinks to them all and Luffy asking them if they wanted to get out the fishing gear. "Fishing? Heck yeah, I'm in," Zoro said agreeably. "Sounds good to me," Usopp said eagerly, "I'll even make you one of my custom fishing rods. You'll love it." It was then that the men were all giving the duck, Karu, drink after fruit drink, even cheering him on with each one he took. Nami came out of the cabin with a couple more drinks and Vivi, who was standing up there, looked to her, saying loudly, "They're acting like idiots." "Maybe this will help," Nami said, holding out the drink to her, and Vivi looked surprised at that. "Just relax," she went on, "these guys may go through their goofy phases, but when things get rough, they get to work. Trust me, I should know." "Sorry," Vivi said, calming down, "I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm getting worked up over nothing." Nami just smiled. "This ship will put you at ease." She reassured her, "You'll cheer up in no time." As she said that, Karu had drank too much and was looking ready to burst. The others were all laughing around him, and even Vivi cracked a smile as Karu lay on his back, a fountain of juice erupting from his mouth. "Yeah," she said, "they're funny." Soon though, Nami's words went to the test. A dolphin, the size of a sea king, had jumped out of the sea, and as if they had this all planned out, they all dropped what they were doing and got to work. Like a well-oiled machine, they got the sails ready and turned around, all of them knowing just what to do without being told. Soon they used the waves that the dolphin created to ride out and go at an amazing speed, all of them even enjoying the ride. Vivi stared at them all in amazement as Luffy asked Nami for direction when the excitement died down. Nami told them to sail portside and they turned without any other complaints. Just after that, they could see it in the distance. Through a light mist, they could make out a large island that looked like a tropical jungle. "There's no mistake," Nami declared as she checked the log post to see that the needle was pointing directly at the island. Cactus Island and this one are definitely pulling against each other. She pointed at it and cried out, "Our next stop." Everyone cheered as they slowly approached. "This is it," Luffy yelled, jumping up and down with zeal, "our second island in the Grand Line." They followed a little river right into the island, the heat of this humid weather and thick plant life already starting to make them all uncomfortable. But Luffy wasn't deterred at all as he said, "I can see why they call this place Little Garden." "I can't, what's little about it?" Zoro asked him darkly. "Yeah, this island looks pretty harsh if you ask me." "Why the cute name?" Nami added. The crew soon found themselves standing next to a shallow creek where Luffy had come running up to with Vivi riding Karu. Luffy had skidded to a stop and went over to the water, something catching his eye. "Hey, what's the matter?" Vivi asked, wondering why he had stopped. "Over here, check it out," Luffy called out excitedly as he picked up something from the water. "It's a shellfish that looks like a squid." He held it up to her as she got off her duck to get a closer look, shell squid fish. He finished proudly. "How strange," Vivi said, frowning as she looked at it, "it sorta resembles an ammonoid." "Cool huh?" Luffy asked and they heard the ground shaking, the sounds of giant footsteps. They all looked around and soon saw what it was with their own eyes. "That's weird," Luffy yelled, looking up to see the giant creature overhead. "What's a sea king doing on land?" Vivi screamed out what it was. "A dinosaur. Awesome," Luffy screamed as Vivi and Karu could only yell in terror.